was just complaining about the FBI before you left there, but... All right, I think we're on.
Cool.
Now, I don't want to blow your mind.
Okay.
We have 0 people right now. We had 7 people. Yeah. Which I don't care. I still think it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean... So right now we have 0. But people could watch in...
Okay.
In retrospect.
Cool.
So, yeah, for everyone watching, this is Aaron,
Hello.
my old roommate and good friend.
Hi.
That's my dog, Annabelle.
My new
Which
best
I'm
friend.
surprised you never met.
Yeah.
She's 7 years old. Her birthday, I believe, is April Fool's Day. Hey, you may have to go to the couch here. I don't think you're... Okay, that'll work.
New laptop.
So, here's a couple things before we get into real things. Number 1, I gave myself the seat with the wobbly leg.
If you want to trade, I don't mind wobbling.
So if I... I might fall on my ass here at some point. Though this is my PlayStation seat, which probably explains why it's so wobbly. I sit like 3 feet in front of the television. So, second, at some point, Annabelle's going to run and knock this wire down and rip the computer down.
Cool.
So if you guys watching see the computer rip down, you know that's what happened. So, yeah, I guess... I was telling the entire purpose of this was 2 things.
Yeah.
One was to show that we basically disagree on everything.
Yes.
But we don't hate each other, which
Yes.
I think is important. And the second is seeing as how we'll probably be drinking later tonight and tomorrow. I figure if we talk about politics now, then we don't have to the rest of the week.
And you think we won't do it for the rest of the weekend?
Yeah. A certain debate coach of ours said it was a hypothesis worth testing. So we'll see what happens. So I was just talking about Trump. Well, I guess we'll start with this. Do you want to give any background on yourself?
My name's Aaron Swanlek. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Pittsburgh. I just took pretty much a month and a half off or so, and went around Europe, seeing a bunch of things, being like the super tourist that I am.
Anything bad happened on that trip to you?
Oh yeah, I got mugged in Barcelona by 4 shady dudes. I'm just happy they weren't like actual homelessy dudes that were trying to stab me, but were some pretty professionals about it. Like, so this was pretty crazy. They could have been a NASCAR pit crew. Like, these guys had me up against a wall, showed me knives, cut open my back pocket, and stole everything from my bag in under 15 seconds, and were gone.
It makes you wonder if, like, maybe it's like a family trait, son, someday I'll teach you how to cut someone's back pocket off. They won't even feel it. It'll be fantastic.
Yeah,
like,
it was rough for a day or two when I, like, looked at my back pocket of my pants, and I was just like, there's just knife holes here. Like, I'm going to throw these away.
It's almost like once once just obviously the fear of it and the monetary, like, sucks that you lost all that money, but you kind of have to be like, well, I appreciate the skill of it, right? Like,
yeah, it's a
really
fine craft. Also, apparently that if you get mugged, you're so statistically unlikely to be mugged again.
I know.
I'm pretty much a god.
That's
I can
how
just walk around with money everywhere.
I have the same feeling on life, right? Like, so I had a good friend of mine was in this terrible motorcycle wreck.
Yeah.
It was really bad. They didn't know if he was going to make it. And so, like, I see him all the time. I'm like, well, that's pretty much the crappiest thing that's going to happen to you. I got jumped at a frat once.
Yeah.
That's probably the worst I'll ever get beat up.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I got nowhere to go but up.
Yeah.
So next time you're in Barcelona, it's like maybe you'll stub your toe or something. So, would you say politically, do you identify with any political party? Or?
I'm probably pretty much to the left, and even more so than I would say most Democratic folks are.
Would you? Are you registered Democrat?
Yes.
See, you're still
you have to be registered just because you want to vote.
That's right. In Pennsylvania, yeah. So I would say I am. I'm somewhere right in the middle of Republican and Libertarian, though I'm getting less Libertarian, but I don't know that means I'm getting more Republican. I don't know. Okay. But you have to register as one or the other. It's almost worth registering as the opposite, because the idea is like, you just want to pick the least possible crappy person, right? Because you're never going to get who you want in, so it's like...
did you see the George Bush last book that's just like the last Republican making the strong claim that like the Republican Party's dead and he's the last bastion of...
Well, in many senses, like, I think both parties, like, because the idea was, right, with the Tea Party, it was like, oh, the Republicans are tearing themselves apart, which is true. But you see that in the left now, like, you have the, like, kind of progressive socialists, and then you have, like, I don't know what you'd call it, like, the neo-libertarian, like, you have the Bernies versus the Hillarys, basically. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think, personally, we would be further ahead to have more than 2 parties. I think that would be great.
100%.
But then you wonder whatever would get done in...
Oh, well, party overload. Like, we can barely work with 2. Let's try 3.
And again, I know, that I'll be running for Congress at some point. Yeah. I don't understand though, like, just because you're a Republican, why you're unwilling to vote for it. I know why, because you get all this crazy pressure put on you, but there will never be a political party unless it consists of just me that will totally agree with I'll totally agree with. So, like, I don't see what the harm, like, but we just absolutely know, particularly, like, in the House, it's like, everybody's going to vote party line every single time.
That's because you also don't have enough time in the day to learn everything about every House member, and there's so many House members, and that's just the federal level, not even like the state level itself, where it's just like, I don't know Joe Schmuck number 9 on the ticket. I didn't do my research on this guy. Like, how am I supposed to make an informed decision about this man?
One of the things you saw, like, locally around here, I live in Clarion County here in Pennsylvania, when you get to, like, more rural areas like this, and I'm sure it would be true of Republicans in more urban areas, they're actually, it's at the local level, I mean, they're almost indistinguishable from each other. Like, there were people running as Democrat here that, like, their number one campaign thing was, like, Second Amendment rights, you know? I'm anti-abortion. And they're Democrat, you know? But there's so many people that when they go in, they just check the box where it's like, oh, I vote straight ticket. It's like, and again, though, I think, and I hope I'm not insulting you by saying this, people like us suck and we have no lives, so we kind of have time to look into stuff a little more. And if you're working 60 hours a week, you're a nurse or something, it's like,
I agree.
What are you going to do? Go read every local politician? Like, if you're lucky, you're listening to the radio and, like, the local radio station has them on for 5 seconds.
Hypothetically, if we lived in a world where, like, news media was actually efficient and informed, we would have, like, a system where it's like, oh, you turn on the news, they're telling you about candidates, not that they, like, hide in your closet and try to, like, eat your kids at night.
Right. So instead, what we're left with, who has the most colorful sign? That's the
to be fair, a good colorful sign does win me over a lot of the time.
I'm almost like, part of me wants to vote for incumbents based on how fast they get their signs down the last time they went. Because some of these signs, it's like a year later, they're still sitting up. It's like, I don't know that I trust that guy in Congress if he couldn't get a sign down a year after he was. But though at that point, right, at what point, it's like the Christmas lights, right? It's like, well, I'll be running in 2 years. I might as well just leave it up.
That's why every time I pass a Trump side on the way over here, I'm just like, come on, y'all, you can take it out for a little bit.
Right? You can find it.
Say Merry Christmas or something.
Right, Steelers.
Happy Hanukkah.
But so I just thought we'd get that out of the way. Do you consider yourself a socialist or a democratic socialist?
To some degree.
Some? Yeah. Okay. All right. I just did a video, right? And here's something about me, for, I don't know, the people that have watched me that might not know, but I'm sure the people that know me know. I feel like I'm part schizophrenic. Okay. Like, I'll wake up one day and I'm like, oh, I totally feel like being, like, the most, like, hear everyone out. And then the next day I'm like, no! People that disagree with me suck! You know? I'd still be polite, but... So, like, there are times I do stuff, particularly on this channel, that I'll be like, later, I'm like, was that a good thing or a bad thing? So, like, I did this video of this socialist lady. It was on Tucker talking about climate change. And she's a joke. And it's easy to make fun of her. But then I have reasonable people I know that are socialists like, well, you just basically pick the lowest hanging fruit and then try to apply that. So it's like, so I wanted to ask you, because I was like, hopefully you could articulate, if we talk about anything, you could articulate better than this crazy lady did. Though, that crazy lady's far more influential than you ever will be. Yeah, she's running for some sort of office. So,
I mean, it's one of those things where it's an ideology. Ideologies at all extremes are going to be stupid when they try to meet, like, practical criteria. So it's not even, I would say, even like a schizophrenic, Rob. It's just like, you have ideals, but then your ideals have to meet this thing called the real world, which has real people, which all kind of suck to some degree. So you have to, like, figure out what's good, what's bad, etc.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So we might as well just start off talking about socialism, since we were talking about. So I think one of the big problems, let me say with what I have in common with socialism, I think a lot of socialists, like you see this Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie, they identify a lot of the same problems I have. Yeah. It's just that they come at it from the opposite end of the solution. So one of the things I'd like to say to, like, people that maybe align more with me is, like, instead of really trying to, like, it's okay to criticize the ideas. Like, no one should take that as a personal attack. But we should at least applaud the fact that we can both recognize there's a problem, like with corruption. Or, like, for example, Bernie's supposedly putting forth a bill I think he's going to force a signature on whether we should be supporting this war in Yemen. We shouldn't be supporting this war in Yemen, right? But instead, like, that seems like a big deal to me. Like, war...
To be fair, I wouldn't even call it a war in Yemen. It's just a bunch of drone strikes that are killing a bunch of, well, civilian casualties and maybe some high-profile targets. But most of the time you hear stuff of just like, oh, some wedding was bombed on accident.
But it's not even, like, to me it's worse than, like, because at least in some areas you could, like like, don't get me wrong, I didn't like Obama, and I thought that a lot of the drone strikes were unjustified. But the idea of it was like, we have intelligence that there's a terrorist here. I'm all for killing those terrorists. I'm not, right? And I'm not naive. I understand there'll be civilian casualties. But the question is, at what level has it become too much? And then the question specific to this Yemen situation, it's not even that as far as I'm concerned. It's just we're backing Saudi Arabia, who doesn't like Yemen. So it's not even like we're making the argument, oh, we're bombing people that need it in Yemen. It's just, well, what do we want? Expensive gas? So we have to kill... Like, no, that's not acceptable.
Well, you know what wins elections.
Well, exactly. That's exactly. So, I mean, and I'm not saying that bombing is... I'm not smart enough to know that that's directly lowering gas. All I'm saying is, that's the problem when you... Like, I forget who it was. It was like, one of the founding fathers was like, trade relationships with everyone, alliances with no one. And that's the problem we get into, because you ally yourself with the country in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, and then when they act bad, then we feel like, oh, we're going to go to back them up. No, I don't understand. So, like, and I feel the same about, like, conflicts in Syria, overthrowing Libya. Like, a lot of these left-leaning progressives that I disagree, or that would maybe call themselves socialists, I disagree with on tons of things. At least... I could say that these crappy wars are one of the most important things to me, and at least we agree on that. So, like, I a lot of times I feel, and again, I'll criticize the ideology till I'm blue in the face, and I just happen to be snarky and make fun of people. So I get how it comes up like that, but like, I don't hold real Why don't we hold people in my position have more animosity to, like, the actual neocon or neolib warmongers than someone who at least identifies the problem and just we think's going about it the wrong way?
Because that would be a good solution,
right?
And pretty practical.
Well, I don't understand, like,
a yes, no.
Why wouldn't, like, the Constitutional Party and the Libertarian Party and, like, the Green Party, they disagree on all kinds of stuff, but I always felt like they should just come together, all these third parties, and be like, we're literally going to draw straws. One of us will have the presidential candidate, one of the others will be the vice presidential, and our platform's basically going to be, the two parties suck.
Yeah.
We're just gonna, we disagree on all kinds of stuff.
It's a simple yet effective message that I think everybody and their mother would be on board with. And it's like,
we at least care about the constituents. You might think we're total morons. Like, if you're a Green Party, you might be like, are you kidding me? The Libertarian Party? No way. But at least it's just they care about fixing the problems. They just are going about it. So that is what I have in common with socialism. Now, what I have against it is I think that we have to be on it, like, if we're in debate, so we could look at, like, this, like, the uniqueness of the situation. Like, you identify problems, but you have to say, like, well, what is our current system? Before you could say, like, oh, this system has led to this problem. So we have to be honest with what our system is and what the problems are. So we could say, like, wealth divide, it's a huge problem, right? So we say, oh, we blame capitalism.
It's the highest it's been since, like, serfdom.
I know, it's crazy.
That Piketty book written, like, 6 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy. So the question is, though, what do we blame, right? Like, do we have a pure capitalist system? No. Do we have a pure socialist system? No. And, like, I think the problem is a lot of people take these definitions and just assume that it's all that and then say, and that's responsible for all the bad, or only the bad but none of the good. So, like, for example, you'll see, like, they'll say Scandinavia. Well, that's the socialism we're talking about. But then you see, like, politicians in Scandinavia, like, well, we have free markets. We're not socialists, right? There's a mix, basically, right? You have free market principles, but you also have government intervention. So my contention is that I think the government intervention is responsible for more of the problems than the free markets are.
Or not necessarily true, because I think if free markets left unregulated allow themselves to, like, perpetuate these kind of, like, problems where wealth can then concentrate itself at the top because there's no regulations or laws to, like, stipulate, hey, you can't just, like, pay your workers $3 an hour while you are getting tax breaks for a private jet, kind of thing.
But okay, but that right there, you just said the tax break, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea, right? The corruption comes in because the government does have influence and power, then these corporations are able to lobby the government, which allows them to have special deals. For example, the problem with let's take, like, the 2009 crisis, right?
Sure.
The problem wasn't that free markets caused this problem. Like, that might have been part of it, but the solution to that is you fail, you lose, and by the way, any of you bankers that committed crimes, you go to jail.
But you really can't. Well, yes, the bankers should all go to jail. I agree with that.
Not all bankers, but the ones that committed crimes.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. But the people that lost in that situation should 100% always lose, but you can also not just, like, let those markets go down. You can't just let banks fail left and right, or else you have a very big problem on your head when the rest of the market just, like, continually crashes.
Yeah, but it will eventually correct itself, because what we end up having then is
I don't know. If
do you agree? True. Do you agree with this?
I do not know.
We are going to see that situation arise again,
100%
probably under.
of the time.
Okay,
yes.
Why? Because we didn't allow those people to fail, and we didn't criminally prosecute.
As long as you continue putting Band-Aids on the problem,
that's right.
Eventually you have a lot of Band-Aids stacked
That's
up.
right. So that's what, when we say, well, we can't leave this fail because, well, then the banks got you.
Yeah.
They know. And so what I always tell people is, it's not a problem necessarily of capitalism or socialism. The problem is they capitalize gains and they socialize losses. So in other words, when they're gambling money and they make a bunch of money, woo, big bonuses for the CEOs and everyone at the corporation. Yeah. But as soon as they lose, they go, oh, it's not our fault. Now the taxpayer has to
you find some scapegoat, then you just move to a different country, call it a day, move on.
But that's not a fault of capitalism. To me, that's more, it's not a system in general, but to me it's more of a fault because we rely on the government to do this, and these lobbyists come in, and we have all these like archaic, crazy regulations. Yeah. It allows these lobbyists to basically purchase the politicians with the power, and then make sure that they're always on their back. Whereas if we just said, "Look, it's free markets," you acted in a corrupt way, that's it, you lose, and you go to jail. I think that would be a far better system. So yeah, I think that
I mean, there should definitely be higher regulations on what can be lobbied and what can't be lobbied, and where a lot of the accountability and like political funding goes to. So I should be able to see who is spending what, where they're spending it, and where they're receiving these funds from. If you're going to be a public servant, for the most part, mainly because you're one of the most influential people that get to dictate and determine the laws and governing body of pretty much the greatest country ever. So odds are we should be able to see where you're getting money, what you're spending it on. Because once you become a public servant, I think your private life should be a little bit forfeit.
I agree to a large extent. Have you ever seen the website like Open Secrets?
No.
It's great. Open Secrets, like, because a lot of that stuff, it actually is legal. We're allowed to see who donated to. Yeah. So Open Secrets basically keeps a list of this. The problem is, we don't have a media that fairly reports on it. Okay. So like, unless you're the average, I think a lot of that is like, we know, for example, who donates to who, and we know how people vote. So if someone does the work, a real journalist doing the work would be like, is it a coincidence that, Congressman Smith here voted against all these fossil fuel companies until they donated $100,000 to him? Then all of a sudden that next bill he voted for. If we had a real media, they would be talking about stuff like that.
That's pretty reasonable.
And you can't, and so then the other thing's like, well, okay, maybe if the media doesn't do it, opponents will. The problem is all the opponents are basically in on it, right? So if you're the oil company and you donate to the Republicans and the Democrats, well, then they're not going to rat each other out, basically. Yeah. And so you end up in this crazy situation where it's like, even though it's out there, we do have laws that say that these donors and stuff that has to be out there, no one ends up having their feet held to the fire.
That's what it is,
But
well, you can also change what you're donating for, the company name you're donating with. You can just be a random private NGO that's suddenly donating a lot of money with a couple winks and nods on the side.
Well, how about like GoFundMe now?
Yeah.
Right? Like, there were all kinds of accusations during the Kavanaugh thing where that Christine Blasey Ford got like $1 million or something in GoFundMe, and it was like, well, how do you know? Like, this could theoretically be Democratic groups giving her money. Like, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but it doesn't seem like it would be too difficult for, someone who's running for Congress to have a GoFundMe page set up for like their dog that has cancer or whatever, and then get all these donations and then commingle that money. It seems like it would be. I'm sure there are laws against it, but it seems like it'd be really easy to get around.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the accusations you see with the Clinton Foundation.
You wouldn't even have to get around it. You just give the money and just be like, it is for this purpose.
Right.
Wink, nudge, nudge.
Right, and that's what you hear about the Clinton Foundation, and that could equally be with like Trump's foundations, right? Where you're like, oh, yeah, we'll buy... sure, we'll buy an entire flight of rooms on one of your hotels, Mr. Trump. You should reconsider this policy that we in the Ukraine are considering, or whatever. And it was the same with the Clinton Foundation.
Usually it's Saudi Arabia that does that, or
Russia,
Russia,
with the Clinton Foundation, you can see it's like, weirdly enough, once she wasn't president, all the donations dried up. And it turns out she was meeting, so, it's incredibly shady. But it leads to a question, though, of, and I saw... I've seen Cenk Uygur have this debate. I don't know if you know Cenk from
I have no idea who that is.
Young Turks. He's a guy from the Young Turks. He makes this argument like, we need to get money out of politics, which, okay, at face value, it sounds fine. But you do have to consider, what does that mean for free speech? Because we also, one of the big things people say about Trump is, okay, Hillary had way more of the money donated to her from the corporations, but the media gave him X money's worth of free coverage, right? So then we have to ask ourselves, okay, then if money's out of politics, does that mean media out of politics? Or are we left, it's like, well, you can't personally donate, but as a media company, you could donate money's worth of free coverage or positive press.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me a lot of the people on the left that are like, well, we should get money out of politics. It's like, okay, but you also have to admit that like 90% of the mainstream media is heavily biased towards, I won't even just say the left. I'll say corporate type establishment candidates. So how, if you're Jill Stein, do you ever then? It's still not solving the problem for that third party. If now my take is there is one possibility, and that's like this. It's social media and stuff. But now you see an increased regulation, and again, which we could talk about later. I know I'm rambling, but I think one of the people on the left, I think, are missing or let me say, people on the right are missing it, where they're like, oh, conservative voices are being censored. Well, yeah, but not just. There's a lot of progressive like Jill Stein type people that are like Jimmy Dore, someone I like people that are really progressive. They're like, no, screw the Democratic Party. Like, we support Bernie, we support the Green Party. They're getting kicked off these platforms. So it's like, if we just say pull all money out of politics, but we allow that kind of control, are we really solving anything?
I'll say I agree and disagree at certain points, because Trump, I think, is a good instance of this, of just a very extreme candidate that got a lot of news coverage in this vein. So I think what it does, instead of pushing people to the center or whatever corporate interests are aligned, it pushes people to the most extreme positions you can possibly have in a given time or place, so that you can get a free pretty much news coverage. Or it means you see an increase in ad hominem attacks, so people are just like, oh, what did he say about X, Y, and Z's mother, along those lines, because that is the only way in which I think you would get free media coverage.
But that kind of goes along with what I'm saying.
What did he call Jeb Bush, sweaty or something?
Yeah. Well, I was talking to my mother-in-law the other day, and she's really into the kind of the pageantry and how everyone kind of came together for HW's funeral. Yeah. Which was cool, by the way. I thought it was cool.
I didn't watch it.
I saw just little bits of it.
So here's a rant and tangent I have, and I feel bad for anyone that ever dies.
Right.
But when a politician dies, all of a sudden everyone comes together and loves each other, and it's just if y'all could do this before somebody is dead, this would be a much easier way to situate ourselves to act politically.
Well, and I think that
instead of just being oh, someone died, now let's all take a moment and realize we're human beings again, and not these weird, fundamentally awkward creatures that just yell at each other.
Well, it's not even just when they die. It's once you're out. Dick Cheney was a monster. Everyone hated him. Now you turn on, there he is talking to Anderson Cooper, hey, how's it going?
What's up, Dick?
And you're oh, hey, and I think there's two ways of looking at it. Oh, someone's calling me. It's probably not important.
Hollywood.
We're just going to say no. But there's two ways of looking at it. Either they really did hate that person, but they're willing to say, well, because they're dead or because they're out of office. Or it's, and this is what I think it is, they don't really hate the person that much. Yeah. And it's just they understand they're playing this political game. It's I always liken politics to sports. So it's I'm a Steelers fan, I hate the Ravens, so it's screw Terrell Suggs. Yeah. He's a piece of, or what was his name that used to, Ed Reed, he was a fantastic safety. It's screw him, man. That's a dirty hit, blah, blah. And then as soon as he's out, you're that guy's a Hall of Famer. He's a man. He's a man. It's like that. It's you're just, deep down when you're yelling about Ed Reed, it's that guy's awesome.
I would love to have him on my team.
Yeah, you're just, it's well, he's my opponent, so you have to act it up. And I think that's what a lot of what it is. Now, I do think that the hatred of Trump's real. I think that I would be surprised that if
a lot of people hate Trump.
Right. I'll be surprised if but George W. Bush, people despised him, and now the very people that hated him, they were calling him Katrina was all about him being a racist, and he was a warmonger, and this and that, and now you see him, and it's oh, George Bush makes paintings, pretty cool dude.
Everyone came to the realization that we hated Dick Cheney more.
Well, yeah, but even he's
George Bush is just a lovable idiot.
Right. I feel the same way. By the way, I will get back to socialism in a minute, but I actually feel the same way about Bush as I do Obama, in this sense that I feel Obama, there's a lot of stuff he did that I really hated. And this is how I feel. I think that probably both him and W. Bush were, reasonable people. Obama, I think, clearly smarter. But I think, let's just take Obama, for example. I think that he gets in and he's yeah, I got a bunch of plans that I think will make the country better. Just like I'm saying about Bernie or something. I disagree with those plans. I think they want. But, okay, I think he's coming from a good place. Yeah. Then you get in there and you realize, geez, you really don't have the power you thought you did. So you're okay, well, in order to make any changes, I got to give a little here. And I got to give a little. And then after 8 years, you're in year 7, it's drones. Yeah, whatever. It's just you don't even have the time. Because everyone around you is bombarding you with, you got these intelligence agencies that you're having these briefings every day, and they're dude, we got to attack here, we got to attack here. And at first you're no, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do have to attack. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they're always wrong. But I'm just saying after a while you get beaten down where you're just one of the first things he did was, I knew better because I'm a genius. But now, in 2008, when Obama's getting elected, right?
Yeah.
And you have the financial crisis, and then everyone's here it comes. He's going to bring the hammer down on these banks. And he gives that famous speech where he has this, closed-door meeting with them, and he's basically look, I'm the only thing standing between you and the pitchforks. And it's like, I think that he probably had so many advisors around him telling him, like, dude, you can't bring the hammer down. I bet he wanted to.
Probably.
I could be wrong. It doesn't matter at the end of the day, because he didn't.
Yeah.
But so, like, you know, and I think that, like, one of the things I see, and I do see it a lot with Trump, but I'm not going to focus on it in this thing. But one of the things I see is, like, you know, I remember watching the Democratic Convention and Obama speaking and Michelle speaking. Yeah. First off, Michelle's a better speaker than Obama.
Yeah.
She's really good,
She's phenomenal.
Man. Yeah, I mean, that speech she gave at the DNC, I thought was one of the best speeches I ever heard. But, like, I'm, like, live, because I'm a nerd. I'm watching live and talking to people online. Stuff the thing you meet in. And, like, people, like, Obama's like, oh, you know, family, and everyone's like, oh, yeah, right. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, just because, even if you think the guy's a crazy warmonger, I'm sure he still likes his family. I'm sure Dick Cheney likes his family. And it's just like, politics poisons people so much where they're going to make, like, you know, and it's like...
This guy's literally the devil incarnate.
Or they're talking about, like, you know, the clothes that Michelle's wearing, or Melania, or what. It's like, what are you talking about? I just don't... I find that incredibly frustrating. So, you know, I personally think that I would rather sit down and have a beer with Barack Obama than Trump, even though I agree with a lot of Trump's policies more than Obama, because I don't think Trump comes off as a very likable person.
You can separate a character from the policy.
That's right, and a lot of people can't. And I think that we're getting more to a character-driven. Yeah, right.
We've always been at a
even with Obama. I feel though. I feel that Obama benefited from, like, this guy's a really likable guy.
Yeah.
Now, I think that he became less likable about things, but it's not worth. It's not. All I'm saying is that. I think that people go, like, crazy overboard with like so now like on socialism then. So, like, I think that when we look at, like, when I talk to people that call themselves democratic socialists, I do think you're not advocating, like, a total form of socialism, right?
So here's my big shtick when it comes to this concept of socialism, and that is, how many people exactly live on this planet again? About
6
8. It's higher now. It's like 7 to 8, and it's gonna hit 9.
I don't read much, so.
And how much resources do we have? There's going to be a critical junction where we either continue using natural resources at the unprecedented rate we do, in which perpetuates something like climate change to an unreasonable degree, while we continually populate this planet with more and more people while struggling to find resources for them, food for them, shelter for them, and then we have bigger crises like migration moving all over the world, which is creating an even more unstable dynamic that can't work its way into the future. So the reason I think that a strong, at least governmental institution needs to step in and regulate things might be because we don't really have a lot of time and a lot of space.
Were you regulating birth rates?
At some degree, shape, or form. I would never say... I don't feel really comfortable saying that, but, like, the intellectual part of me is just like, I don't know what the other part of the solution is. It's just like, we're clearly under our profit-driven economy not doing the right things to contribute to a more sustainable future. We're just really banking on, like, one day somebody finds this, like, technological boom or sort of, like, perfect fit glove thing to kind of fix it. And it's one of those things that, like, if I was going to have children, would actually terrify me at the end of the day. And that's why I always lean a little bit more left in a lot of ways. Now, I don't actually think some big brother figure needs to come in and monitor and say everything that you need to do right and wrong. But, like, I don't know what the other possible solution is, which is why I think we need to take pragmatic steps to making sure that, like, hey, people aren't throwing out, like, 13 to 14 children a year, or destroying the environment at an unprecedented rate. Now, I agree with what a lot of you say economically, and it makes a ton of sense to me, but, like, I also think that if we don't start regulating at a higher degree what, like, certain industries or corporations can do, we won't ever see those, like, positive effects, which are going to be the thing that, you know, maybe doesn't make us all die in a nuclear sun kind of thing.
That wouldn't be good. Nuclear sun, bad.
Yeah.
Well, a couple things. First, the proposed solution, like, the problem is, as soon as you say, even if you have noble intentions, like, when you give the government power, inevitably someone that's not a proper person, like someone with ill intents, is going to use that power. So when you're talking about any type of population control, you're eventually going to get someone in there that uses, like, some sort of eugenic approach. Like, that seems to be getting very close to a strong man with a funny mustache, like saying who can breed and who can't.
Yeah,
you know, so,
I don't think that's the right.
But even still,
that is where like the fundamental problem lies for me, with in respects to some sort of like laissez-faire system where people just do what they want, because I think people have shown that they're pretty shitty at like self-regulation, self-control, and not just doing like the most greedy thing possible.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Will you admit that when it comes to like actual getting closer towards capitalism, I don't think we have any society that's total capital. As I said, most of them are mixed and stuff. But would you agree that it's mostly kind of first and second world countries that are closest to capitalism?
Yeah.
Like Europe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe there's some places that are just really like anarchic.
Right, but that's thing, like a lot of when you get and
like
again
major economies, sure.
Right, you have like strongman economy, like monarchies and stuff like that. Well, when we look, though, at those countries that you would admit are more capitalism, their birth rates are vastly declining. In fact, they're using that as the reason to import people.
Yeah.
So that would seem to suggest to me that the closer you get to free markets, the less children you have and the less resources are used. In fact, we're getting to the point where you see this argument made in Europe. Now you're starting to see it made in the United States, where it's like, oh, well, we're going to have all these people getting old, and because they didn't have as many children, we need to import people. So it seems to me that actually that's more of an argument against unchecked immigration and not an argument against capitalism.
Let me check my phone because I need to fact check you on this, because
Sure.
I'm pretty sure the population growth in the United States has been continually going up.
No, birth rates are...
So, like,
while
you might be true that the...
Go ahead, feel free to look it up.
While you might be, like, right that, like, there might be a decline, it's still an increase in, like, how many people are being born into this country or system as a whole, which, like, if you read the numbers better, sure, other places can be worse, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, like, right here is good. So, like,
I mean, I stand by. I think that I'm open to being told I'm wrong about, but I think that the birth rates in most of the first and second world countries are going down, which will lead to less people, which is why the immigration is occurring. Also, there's a book I want to read. I forget who wrote it, but I've read kind of the thesis behind it, which is that there's a lot of good evidence to suggest that the world population will never get above 9 billion people. And that's because of things like self-regulation. The countries we see that start using more and more resources also simultaneously realize at the same time that if I want to have more resources, I can't have children, so they don't have the children, and which means that eventually we'll taper off around 9 billion people. At least is what they're saying. And I think that like this kind of, the argument you're getting to is kind of a Malthusian type argument of population control. And I think that, we see that, I mean, I understand it's different, but it's
like a Malthusian population.
No. Okay, but the idea that we have to somehow stop populations because eventually we'll run out of resources, right?
Well,
that argument's been used like a lot to commit a lot of really crappy atrocities, like the one-child policy in China and things like that. And the other thing is, but I won't focus on, like, for now we won't focus on that. We'll just focus on the potential problem. Yeah. So I think that it could be argued that we really weren't that self-aware of possible damage that we could do in a global scale to the environment until like maybe 1950 or 1960. I don't think the Carnegies
sure we were more aware of that, but it probably started.
I mean, you knew that if you're dumping oil in the river, you're killing fish. Like, but I don't know that people were like, oh, greenhouse gases and like it was like people. You didn't see the grand picture. It's like, well, we just cut down all the trees. I will just plant more later. And then you realize, like, oh, it's not really that simple. Yeah. I think we started to see, like, a real global environmental movement around, like, the 50s or the 60s. And I don't think we've done that bad since then. Like, you could say that temperatures are going up and stuff, but we've also, like, when you look at the advances that we've made, like, in the past 30 years, for example, we've, like, halved the amount of people in severe poverty around the world. Like,
sure, but we're losing rainforests. We're losing drinkable water in most places in the world. We're losing the capacity to just live on a planet as opposed to, like, not being poor on the planet we can't live on.
But I don't think, like, I think that there's this idea that there's a consensus, right? Like, oh, the scientists, there is a consensus.
There is a consensus.
But what is the consensus?
The consensus is that we are slowly warming the planet, which is going to have devastating effects not casually, but exponentially going on into the future.
But how long? Is the consensus that eventually it'll lead to the extinction of humans?
No one can say that with
so there's not so we can at least get the I think when people say there's a consensus, I think there's a consensus that the climate is changing and that man has an effect on it. Yes. I think there's
100%.
Basically, I don't know 100%,
Like 99%.
Okay, I would say that the overwhelming majority believe that, right? But then, like, once you get to that level,
we have to also put the ethos with the name itself.
Yeah, yes. So, like, but I think that's where the consensus ends. I think there's majorities that think things, and that, like, after that...
science isn't a predictive art. It's take the data that we know and say what could potentially happen with that data.
That's right.
So we have in the short term, but we've not had an unprecedented climate, like, modifying itself like this post-industrial revolution.
Well, that's just it. Post-industrial revolution. Yeah. I mean, there's been periods of dramatic climate change.
We're in an unprecedented era, and I think what you have to do is then play an even better game of just like, all right, so say that the scientists are right. What could potentially be the problems? Well, maybe more resource scarcity, maybe a bunch of other bad stuff. It's usually going to affect the poor and most marginalized people. The Southern Hemisphere is functionally screwed if we don't make a change. Now, what if the scientists are wrong? We put in some more like solar panels on buildings?
No, but that is exactly what I'm talking about. Then you have to be honest about what is the problem? What's causing the problem? How bad could the problem get? How long will it take for that, right? And then what are solutions? What are the cost of the solutions? What problems could arise from the solution, right? We have to be honest about all that. So, like, we see something like, okay, let's say that we need to make some change. So what solutions have been offered? So we got the Paris Climate Accord.
Yeah.
Doesn't do crap. In fact, we didn't sign on to it, and our emissions have lowered more than all these countries that did sign on to it.
But just because other people don't do something doesn't mean your net positive productive action was a bad thing in the first place.
But we did have a net positive reduction without signing. So what would the negative consequences of the Paris Climate Accord been? Well, there's tons of them, right? For example, like... we know in order to foster renewables, inevitably you have to do one of two things. You either have to provide huge subsidies to renewables, or you have to have huge increases in the price of fossil fuels. Because right now the renewables aren't profitable. So places that have signed on to the Paris Climate Accord, like Paris, now they're charging $7 a gallon for gas.
First of all, let's not pretend that we don't subsidize oil here.
Oh, well, that's a bad thing on free market. We shouldn't be subsidizing oil.
Because you see, you can't actually have that policy, or else you would never win like a political office, because that's like...
Then I won't win. That's fine.
$8 to $9 a gallon of gas is kind of like the alternative.
No, I don't think that our subsidizing oil would lead... I don't think that we're subsidizing oil to the tune of $7 a gallon. Yes,
we give, I think, about $1 billion in subsidies to oil corporations.
Well, even still, $1 billion, even if that's true, which I'll take your word for it. That's not going to removing that billion.
I was being a little bit hyperbolic when I said the gas price hike would be that high, but
it might be 20-30 cents.
Yeah, well, I think probably at least $1.
And that would be offset by Pennsylvania, the insane taxes we have now on gas. But so yeah, I mean, it works both ways. But again, here's the problem. We say, oh, climate change is so bad, we need to do something. So then, like in Paris, you have where they're like, great, we'll have this gas tax. So now they're paying over $7 a gallon for gas, and they can't afford it.
Well, here's the thing. In a lot of places, if you have a good transportation system that is like, hey, we have trains, we have buses, we have a bunch of other kind of like mass transit to get around instead of driving giant cars everywhere, there's a high risk that like maybe we don't need that much gas in the first place as like individual private consumers.
So name a country that's like that, though.
Most of Europe has a great transit system.
France is riding over the gas tax.
Yeah.
Because... particularly in rural areas with poor workers that have to drive to work. That's who's most affected. Now, I will give you an argument that let's not be naive and assume everyone that's riding is riding over that same... I get that. I wouldn't be that naive.
No, I think there's also workarounds to that. Maybe in those areas you have subsidized gas and make it cheaper in those areas. So,
but then, what ends up happening then is you always will end up on you have to have a booming economy to ever get the change to renewables that you want, which proves... then it's just circular. Then that's the argument I'm talking about.
Also, you have to, like, renewable technology is getting better. Like, have you driven through Texas recently? There's windmills everywhere. And it's becoming one of those things where it just becomes a net more gradual staple. Now, does that mean we need to shift everything overnight? No, it just means that in the long term, with technological costs getting cheaper, it's going to be the more sustainable, easier option that I think will progressively eventually take over.
Okay, so now, would you say, though, is there a problem with we're over-subsidizing, like, windmills in Texas right now?
I don't think so.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're saying we're subsidizing fossil fuels, but renewable energy is still, without any government policy and interference, in fact, interference to the other way, is still already gradually solving the problem. So then why do we need like this socialist system of government regulation and control if the problem's already being... That's exactly my argument. That the problem is there is a consensus that man-made global warming is bad. But even without citing the climate change, I think that humans have enough ingenuity that will inevitably be able to solve the problem gradually, as opposed to having these significant changes that seem to be done in the... Like, I don't think Macron's there like, yes, we'll make poor people suffer. But he's there saying, I'm doing the only just thing. And then all of a sudden there's riots in the street. And the whole argument he gave of like, we have to do this or we're all doomed, this is an alarmist argument, all of a sudden then he's like, okay, never mind, we won't do it. Yeah. So he was lying.
So here's the thing. I think that in this instance, you can point to it and be like, it works here, but I don't think that blanket means the free market always works in all like instances or other areas.
Okay, I think...
Especially when there's like other moral compromises to be made. And like, I think the Macron, I'm doing the morally correct thing, is one of those instances when you start to put morality into like institutional judgments of like, yes, no questions, oftentimes can like give a guise for like another intention or something else that he could be doing,
which is exactly and that's the problem with like getting back to socialism. That's the problem with it in the first place, because we allow the government to have control from, like, for example, let's say socialism involving climate change. It seems noble where we have these people that come in and say, there is a consensus. You are just a terrible person if you're more concerned about the economy, or if you're not concerned about climate change for whatever reason. That's why the government needs to have control over this. The problem is people use that argument as well, pretending to have that argument, but eventually they rise to power, and it's not a noble reason. It's not a moral reason. Like this is exactly what we saw happen in like the Soviet Union. You had people, I do believe there were some people that probably were like, yeah, unite the workers, total government control of all these processes, that meant well. But the problem was, if you are one of those few people, I think most of them didn't, but if you are one of those few people, you get shot in the back of the head, and the guy that doesn't mean well, that's willing to use violence, ends up taking over. Then you see what happens. Like, granted, we can't really compare the Soviet Union and their environmental policies because that was well before we had all the information we have now. But still, like you saw, they said for humanitarian reasons they needed to come in. And what happened? Well, they murdered 50 million of their own people. I feel that would be the danger we'd have with climate change. That you would get into power, they would say, okay, like this woman that I made this ridiculous video on, that was on Tucker, she's like, we're all dead in 10 years, and 100% renewables. It's like, well, what's the time frame for switching? I assume before 10 years, seeing as how we're all dead.
Yeah, no, that's absurd.
So I get the gradual change argument. My question is, I think that when we have the government mandate that gradual change, even in not a worst case scenario, but like you have something like Solyndra happen, where it's like you pay the government. You
can't use one past failure to set the precedent
I understand
for all future expectations, because the government has subsidized many like other programs that have sometimes worked in the past.
Yes, but a lot of times they don't work, and if we see that the status quo is solving the problem, at least in this country, then why would we adjust?
Well, it isn't totally taking over. Like, it isn't like everything in Texas is fundamentally shifted and changed, but I'm just saying that like there are the ways and inroads to make places for windmills in the first place, or that like even a very conservative state like Texas can put these up and not have giant regional crazy France backlash, is probably proof that like, hey, this can work as long as people can dictate where to effectively spend the technology and where to put these like sorts of like institutions, windmills, and other things at.
That's right. The people can determine. That's the free market. When the government steps in,
the government is the people too, right? The government is comprised of a series of people that make up.
But then that's not the people deciding.
That's democracy.
But that's not the people deciding, and that's us voting and then them deciding.
Yes.
The people deciding is you're a businessman and you decide. Here's a profit margin. I could put windmills in right now. I don't. One, there are certain businesses.
There's still not enough incentive to do that yet.
But there will be as it becomes more profitable.
It could. I hope so. However, I don't really want to take that chance, right? Because there's no. Of what we've seen, like governmentally, that we're willing to always bend over for any oil interest or lobby, I don't see a strong incentive to the other way to say, like, I am very confident that we will 100% do the right things to make sure that our children's children don't have to live in like a very terrible world.
But what the problem is then what, like, so okay, let's take that for granted then, and let's say I can see that, and so we hear people like Bernie and a bunch of other progressives saying, well, a Green New Deal. What does that consist of?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, they don't either. That's the problem. Right? It's like saying, love solves everything.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we should have a Green New Deal.
Yeah,
okay,
but
yeah. What do you mean?
Saying the free market solves everything is literally the exact same thing.
Well, no, because I'm not saying the free market solves everything. I'm saying that people, individuals, inevitably, if there's a problem, they have a better chance to solve it than the government.
People as individuals solving problems.
Yeah, makes sense to me. People as non-individuals.
That would be great if people came together and actually like put together the right problem-solving mechanisms. But people always will buy the cheapest of possible options. That will be continually oil as long as interest, including lobbyists, including subsidies, continue to overfund.
Okay, then get rid of the subsidies for oil.
Yeah, we're both cool with that.
Okay,
yeah,
well then what's the rest of the Green New Deal?
I don't know.
Like, the problem is they're going to, like, there is no proposed plan that you ever hear that doesn't involve massively increasing the price on fossil fuels or massively subsidizing renewables. Yeah. There's none. There is no policy you ever hear. And what upsets me is, like, and it was like this woman was saying on the video, is there's socialism gives you this idea of personal responsibility doesn't matter. Because that's the first question Tucker asks her is, well, wait a minute. How come we have Bernie telling us that we're all going to die from climate change, but he's flying around on a private jet and has 3 houses, right? Like, now I assume you're more reasonable and you're like, yeah, that's a performative contradiction. You shouldn't be doing. But she's like, well, the personal responsibility doesn't matter.
Like, I felt bad about just dicking around taking a bunch of planes in Europe for the past month and a half. It's just like, I'm probably not living to the standards that I want to live by, and I think that is probably just inherent in life, but like, you should always be able to acknowledge that and check that at the door to be like, these are kind of the messed up things I do if I'm going to believe this like strong moral ethic.
Right, but then you could behave in it, you could make slight adjustments and be more reasonable. Yeah. But when you have someone like Bernie that's like, you all have to, I'm going to propose plans that means that the poor and middle class people are going to have to pay more, but I'm going to continue to live my extravagant life when it comes to fossil fuel usage. Like, why should we take that seriously?
You shouldn't. 100%.
Right.
You should like call that out. You should make sure everybody else knows about it and calls it out. It's not a good thing.
Right. So then why are we giving... So then there's a bunch of people like him saying that in Washington, and then they're also saying, by the way, give us the power, trust us, we'll fix it.
That's because that's what every politician of all time always says.
That's right. That's why we should have small government, because these politicians aren't trustworthy.
Okay.
So when it sounds good to say we'll give them so what will end up happening is
yeah, I agree with you that a lot of politicians suck doesn't mean that that's a question of should. It's just a question of like the people there right now kind of like blow. And that's because high money is influencing a lot of electoral offices, which continually allows for more lobbyists to do bad things in power. That doesn't necessarily mean I believe that everything should be free market, unregulated, laissez-faire capitalism.
Well, I'm not saying total unregulation. That's not what I'm saying.
Well, then
but I'm saying
what gets regulated, what doesn't get
regulated.
We
massively lean
towards
that.
Do we want to live in coal mines again, or?
But the coal.
And that would never actually come
right.
back.
I mean, it's not profitable. But yeah, we lean towards having the more free market approach because we know that the more power you give a small group like Congress, the more incentive there is to abuse it. Eventually, the power becomes corruptible.
Well, so it's not a problem if we're willing to be able to call out those points of corruption and actually have accountability for elected figures. Then you're way more willing to trust a government to step in and be like, I'm going to do these actual good policies.
Okay, but name that government that's ever existed.
Subsidize things. Just because you don't name a specific government doesn't mean that we should not be working towards a goal, which is, hey, more news accountability that says, I will hold these politicians' feet to the fire. Maybe there's going to be ramifications for your actions. Maybe if you're committing white-collar crimes and getting super rich, you should go to jail.
Okay, I'm for all that. Now, when you
do that, then you can have a government that steps in and actually makes smart economic policies.
I'm for all that, obviously. But my question is, we also have to act within reality. We can't just say, well, we're hoping for a utopian system where all politicians are trustworthy.
Sure, but the reality is that climate change is an actual problem that's going to, probably have devastating consequences in the future.
Right, but I think that we still see that we're gradually solving it now, as you admit. At least we're gradually making inroads. We're making inroads.
We are putting up some fucking windmills in Texas. Okay. That does not mean that we are like all of a sudden in this mean green economy that's actually going to fix an actual problem.
But then so then what you've effectively done is this. You say, I say, it sucks. Murder and poor people. People are starving to death. That sucks. And you're like, sure, we can all agree on that.
Murder and poor people are...
murder's bad. Murder sucks.
Awesome.
Poor people starving. That sucks. I think those things suck. And you're like, oh, yeah? We all agree on that? And it's like... And then you're like, well, what should we do about it?
No, there's
Government
no
will solve it.
no. There's we need more
Then
accountability.
what's the Green New Deal? Like we have all these.
Okay, I don't need to defend this thing called a Green New Deal.
Okay, but what is
so
the
if you say
policy
the word Green New Deal, I'm just going to be like, what's the Blue New Deal?
Okay, but
tell me the Magenta Deal.
What is the
I
policy
would like
prescription
to hear about the Pink Deal?
What is the policy prescription you're prescribing?
I'm not even starting on a policy prescription. I'm saying that one, we as figures need to have more accountability in doing research and doing things like you're doing to say, hey, there are political individuals that are using their power and repute to do negative things. The first step is changing. Are you?
Courtney said, "Tell Annabelle to stop licking her paws." You getting yelled at? No, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
It's all good.
It's hard. A bunch of people are texting me questions, but it's hard to.
Yeah, that's all good. The first real step is having the individual capacity to be like, there's a lot of problems that need to be fixed. There's a lot of ways in which we're going to address these problems, and we're going to at least get riled up and maybe go protest in the streets ourselves whenever people get away with a lot of this exploitation that goes on. After you do that, then you can begin to think about, I think, policy proposals themselves, because as we both will agree, if you just start YOLOing policies out now, they usually get taken over by like some sort of corporate interest or some sort of...
But I'm saying even if we go all protest in the street, I don't understand exactly how that's going to help. But let's say that theoretically that helps get everyone's mind in the right mindset, right? What policy can you even imagine that wouldn't raise energy prices for the lower and middle class?
You would have to subsidize. So you would have to,
tax increases.
Yeah.
And so then
but it's not all overnight. So like you can still use oil in the context of like, now we're going to give subsidies for technological development of renewable energies to then say, hey, this company can produce the craziest cool new tech while we at least transition off of those things in the first place, could be one of those like potential solutions without saying, hey, we need to give them billions and billions of dollars. You can just like give them net more money to incentivize creating cheaper and better technology.
So then the question becomes then, since we're admitting that it's not so catastrophic that we can't gradually slide into a solution, right? We'll both admit that.
It's pretty bad, but like I don't think we need to like throw everything we have at it.
Well, then I think it becomes like we need to have a serious discussion on, like, because for example, I've seen people that, at least I admit to not being as knowledgeable about the debate as I should, but I've seen people write papers that are on the left that believe in man-made climate change, and they're like, yeah, we're looking at possibly like a 0.5 degree increase in 100 years, and actually like things like the Paris Climate Accord, things like that wouldn't do anything to be able to change this. It might so like we have to have a serious talk about what these possible solutions could be. And I don't think I'm not saying you do this, but I think we make a mistake assuming that one side is moral and the other side is immoral. Yeah, and I think that that's a lot of what this debate becomes, where it's just like, well, you're denying science.
Well, that's because everything people believe in is usually based in some sort of moral center.
Well, right.
Like, I believe the world should work this way, and if you disagree, then you're breaking that moral center.
Well, but you don't see this in a lot of positions. Like, for example, a lot of people on the right believe in tax cuts. Yeah. Like, there are some, but not a lot of people are like, well, you're an immoral person if you don't believe in tax cuts. I mean, I'm sure there's people out there.
There's 100%.
Well, there would be the all taxes theft people, but it doesn't matter. They would believe if you believe in any tax, it's immoral. So the tax cuts are relevant to them. But you know what I mean? Like this debate, a lot of these debates.
But if you said I believe in tax increases, people would call you immoral things. But if you said, I believe in tax increases so that poor people can have subsidized food at their kids' like cafeteria or that old folks can eat, I don't think most people would get angry and upset about that.
Right. But if I said no, they would say, oh, so you don't want kids to eat.
And then when somebody says no to someone's tax cuts, they'd just be like, oh, you want to take money from me to give it to X, Y, and Z. And when you say X, Y, and Z, you pick the least favorite things you think tax money goes to instead of kids to eat. You're like, oh, tax money went to this failed policy or something along those lines. And then everybody gets all riled up and angry about it. You have to admit, however,
with a lot of these progressive issues, it seems that they are relying more heavily on the moral argument, just like you would see like with gay marriage, where you saw the Christian, it wasn't a logic argument. It was, oh, this is immoral. Gay people, it's immoral to allow gay people to get married. Like, I kind of see the same. I'm not saying that, like, I'm not going to say believing in climate change is really, I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that you kind of see the same type of argumentation. Now, someone texted me and wanted to know, why is small government more trustworthy than big government? Someone you know, by the way, but I won't say his name.
Okay.
That's bearded weirdo, anyways. Well, because small government, when you have a small government, they have less power and they're less able to do corrupt things, right? So, like, for example, an employer, the less power you give to someone, the less they have the ability to abuse that power. That doesn't mean they're still not going to abuse the power they have. But the larger the government gets, the more abuse there is. So let me kind of change track a little. I can't think of any government policy where they got heavily involved where things have ended up being cheaper or working out better. In a big way, right? So, like, let's look at, like, academia, education, right? So it used to be in the 70s, you'd pay like $2,000 for tuition, which was a lot back then because inflation's, but still, you could work your way through college. And it wasn't everyone, though. It was kind of more of only the people that got really good grades and things like that tended to go. Most people didn't. Now we see that there is an encouragement to get everyone to go. That's like the socialist plan.
So here's another problem with that is that we now live at least in a world where you really need a college degree of some shape or form to be able to say to some employer that I can work in your sort of location, because once the job market starts to evolve and shift, a lot of jobs that you could get, such as like driving a truck or working like for certain companies, are going to be automated and at least need individuals that have like the technological capacity to understand like all of the crazy codes, all of the other sort of languages that are emerging and evolving into the new workplace environment.
But that's not an argument for a college degree. That's an argument for education.
Yeah.
You need to be educated.
Sure.
The reason that you can't get a job without a college degree is because the government got involved. What happened was the government got involved with student loans. They started guaranteeing student loans. So that meant more people could go to college, right? Which then the universities wanted those people, so they started lowering the necessity to be exceptional. So basically, it's almost impossible to fail. I know this because I'm me, and I probably should have failed, right? So it's near impossible to fail. That's not to say there aren't great professors and great things going on, but I'm just saying in general. And meanwhile, if you look at a curve of inflation compared to the inflation cost of academia, it's insane. The cost of college, and we know this, Bernie knows this, right? So, like, the socialist solution, like the Bernie plan's like free college for everyone.
Yeah, I'm down with it.
Okay, but that does two things. One, what you just criticized where you're like, well, now you need a college degree to do anything. Great. Now it'll just be you need a graduate degree to do anything. Because once everyone has a college degree, the college
you still
degree
have to make the choice to go to it, because, I mean, you just made the argument that everyone can go now as is, and it's too hard to fail.
Right.
So then if it's free, at least there's not a shit ton of debt that you get to bring
with you for the rest of your life. There are intelligent people now that I wish I was one of them that are like, I don't want to be in debt forever, so I'm not going to college.
Yeah.
And so they, like, a lot. I know personally know one. I became a welder. Let's become a welder. They're making more money than I ever will.
I know, right? We should have went to welding.
Stupid.
100% of the
time. But so there will be even more people. Post this free college plan, there will be even more people, which means the value of a college degree is even watered down more, which will mean you'll then have to go to...
It's already watered down to the point where, like, I don't think you can water it down much more.
Well, sure you could. Like,
I don't know if that's necessarily true.
Well, then what's the incentive? What's the value if it's so watered?
Even a free college degree would allow you to say, hey, I want to be a welder. Well, there's now a place where you can get like a 2-year degree at this college for being like a super welder. Or at least learn everything there is about the trade itself.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to be like, I am a hyper-capitalist, you should all be about hyper-specialization when it comes to a workforce.
Wait, but universities aren't that. Things. Universities are the opposite of hyper-specialization would be, I'm a welder, I go to... No, because there's all these gen ed curriculum and things like that.
Yeah, there are unspecialized areas, but there are also very specialized areas.
But the idea is the way the university is making money is you want to learn this specialized trade. Yeah, well, you got to take all these other courses too to ensure that all these departments...
That's a structural problem with like the college itself. That's not a structural problem of like how you pay for it.
Right, but how would it... But here's the thing.
Those are two separate things.
But that's what I'm saying is, if you really want to get specialized to be a welder, you're not going to a 2-year university. You're going to like a 6-month trade school, or you're getting an apprenticeship.
Sure.
Where you're just learning welding.
Those also should be subsidized under like this free education model.
So then we take this. What incentive would universities have to lower their prices once it's subsidized by the government?
To lower their prices?
Yes.
They currently have no incentives.
So they would continue to have... So the reason that universities are able to charge so much right now is because the government started guaranteeing student loans.
Or you just say... Here's what I would do personally, is I would be like, these 10 colleges in each state, fully subsidized, free. People can match those prices if they're willing to pay a certain amount of money to do so. And I'd just be like, here's a set amount. Your tuition's going to be $8,000 per student that you get.
So you put a cap on the tuition that the university...
Yes.
So...
And then I would be like, if you want to be a competitor or be your Harvards, your Yales, your Dartmouths and whatnot, then you can pay a lot more money if you have the capacity to do so. However, there are degrees here that can be.
If I'm an employer and I see, okay, let's just take, we went to Clarion, and I see Clarion's one of these schools where it's like there's 4 schools in this, let's just say all state schools, or now fall under this, free tuition for state schools. And I'm an employer and I'm trying to get an exceptional employee. What incentive would I have to say, like, I don't trust this degree from Clarion because literally anyone could get in?
What incentive do you have now to say that?
Yeah, that's right.
Literally now. That is the status quo of universities.
Well, we have all kinds of, like, that's why people try. If there isn't a hierarchy of degrees, why are people fighting so hard to get into Ivy League schools?
No, there is, but that's what I'm saying. We are agreeing on this exact same thing, but I'm saying that is happening currently now.
Okay, but the free product
that doesn't make it worse.
But the free product you would get then,
yeah,
that it's still getting paid for by the taxpayer, is even more worthless than it would be now.
No, I don't think so at all. I think you still can say that I went to an institution, I worked really hard, I learned a bunch of things. Here are the skills that I have. Check out my resume. These are the
70s and
that I did at that institution, which are pretty meaningful. At least if
in the
you're
1970s,
a person doing hiring.
If you walk into a business and you're like, "Hey, man, I got a high school degree," are there a lot of them like, "Wow"? They're like, yeah, that's basically expected.
I was not alive.
Why would that not be the same? But why would that not be the same except now? It's basically just, we have free high school for everyone, right? So it's basically, it's not that graduating high school is somehow considered a plus mark for you. It's not graduating's a minus. So if we then have free college for everyone, why would that be a plus for people as opposed to just a minus for the people that choose not to go to free college?
Because it's still a 4-year heavy commitment in which you can do a lot of different things, learn a lot of different things, build a resume in a lot of different crazy ways, and make yourself the best possible candidate for when you approach the workforce.
But everyone's the best possible candidate now.
No, not at all, because everyone's resume should look different depending on where they went to college and how they built that resume together after they were done at their time there. Presuming they were adequately, trained and not just there to like YOLO get drunk.
Okay, but I think you're missing my point. If everyone goes,
yeah,
then if everyone can't go for free, the people most affected will be the people that choose not to go. Just like high school now. You could theoretically, you could be a smart person, drop out of high school in 9th grade, learn some trade, right? Be a genius, get a perfect SAT score, but the fact you didn't graduate high school is a severe hindrance to you. If you were that same person and you did graduate high school, it's not like, oh, high school degree. It will be the same with college. If everyone's going. The difference is now we have taxpayers paying for all this. Now you'll have the incentive to be like, if you really want to say...
I think you're selling short not just what the degree means, because who cares about that in the first place? It's what you get as the product itself at a university. So
but we
you
already
get
see
a bunch of education. You get to learn a bunch of different cool things. You get to have a bunch of access to doing other things on the side, which build your resume harder.
You could learn cool things at your library.
Yeah, like 100%. And you should put things you learn in your library onto your CV
so
as long as you're
you
learning
said
cool
cap
things,
it like 8,000 a semester, right? Okay.
I'm just throwing out a number.
Okay,
I don't know
but whatever the number, it's got to be profitable.
Yeah.
There's no college that's going to be like, yeah, we'll take people for $500 a semester now.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen.
No,
it's going to have to be...
It's going to be expensive.
Right. So now we're talking this insane spending, and in reality, it's not going to help people much. Yeah. Like for example, we already know that we have tons of employers saying, look, when we got college graduates in the 70s...
Cut defense spending.
Okay, but then we could spend that on something else.
Yeah. What would you spend it on then? If you're going to have
eliminating
this
the
access of money, just eliminating the debt.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay. Well, I'll fundamentally disagree and say that a good, smart population that has the capacity to learn...
But your criteria for having such a massive social spending policy shouldn't be, it'd be okay. That shouldn't be the criteria.
Yeah, but a smarter population all around is going to probably increase, new innovations in, a bunch of, different technical areas. It's probably going to have harder... it's going to have better corporations because they have a bigger pool of talent.
So then why stop at a 4-year degree? Why not 20 years of degrees?
I mean...
Doctors, free doctors.
I'm on the process of that.
Yeah, right?
Now,
Me too.
So,
and I don't think I was smarter at year 8 than year 2. Yeah. But you know what I mean?
I'm willing to venture you were smarter at year 8 than year 2.
I don't know. I feel like here's my test. The Jeopardy test. I remember being in high school, I'd watch Jeopardy, and I was like, oh, now they put it on Netflix. I'm like, oh yeah, Courtney, let's watch Jeopardy. And I don't know anything.
Jeopardy doesn't mean you're smart. It just means you know some shit.
I'm wiser.
All right,
I don't know
Trivial
if I'm
Pursuit,
smarter.
Rob.
Yeah. But no, I'm just saying that all you're going to do is it'll just be like, cool, now everyone has a college degree. Now if you want to separate yourself, you need a master's.
No.
And then if we say, well, let's get the master's.
That's already true. That is literally already true.
But yeah, okay, so then you're saying there's no difference, except the difference of we're spending trillions of dollars now.
Except we have the capacity to not have everyone in debt when they go into the labor force, which means they have more consumer power.
All you're doing is spreading that debt and even more now out to a larger pool of people. That's all you're doing.
Okay, well, the thing is, that debt can be paid for off of other areas.
What we should instead do is people
defense spending.
But what we shouldn't. But again, then you're just. But that's the better solution is to make it affordable and for people to go to college that need to, and for people that just don't need to. And
what does make it affordable mean?
Like tuition prices have gone up an insane amount.
How do you fix that?
Well, we stop the government being involved.
Okay, and then what happens the next day? The government comes out tomorrow and is just like, 100%, I will not give universities any more money.
Right.
What happens?
Then the majority of students stop going.
Okay.
Then colleges are forced to say, we need to lower our prices to encourage students to come.
Okay.
And then students that want to go for a 4-year degree do. Okay. And those that were going just because they weren't sure what they wanted to do or because they wanted to party say, I'm going to go get educated in a different way by being educated in like a specific trade.
When 90% of the faculty just all get fired over the next day because they're not making money anymore and the universities just
And
collapse.
I'm someone who's going to be a professor.
Universities would do? They would literally just walk away.
Right.
They would just be like, I'm putting all this money in my pockets. Bye, Felicia.
Right.
100% what would happen. And we would just see a massive collapse of a lot of our universities and systems that go on.
That's right.
You think that's good. I think that's dangerous and bad.
It wouldn't work exactly like that. If we have people that are just there because it's profitable right now, the ones that were really necessary, that were really providing a public service that was good, they would continue to exist. They would find ways to exist. And because students that needed to go there would still find ways to go there.
Not when hundreds of millions of dollars just disappear over the course of a year. Well, they wouldn't disappear over the course of the year. They would be like, in about 3 years from now, we're no longer, because you wouldn't say overnight.
So your argument with fossil fuels and other things like that is no government subsidies. They should be eliminated. And who cares if the industry collapses because we shouldn't be subsidizing them. But with education is we have to subsidize or else they would fall apart.
So sure, it's a little bit of a contradiction on that. Like subsidize, don't subsidize.
Right.
The thing with subsidizing oil is like there is a devastating environmental impact that we can like somewhat see and monitor versus education, which is, hey, maybe we have a smarter population that is like, you know, a better workforce or a better population. Who even cares about the word workforce to begin with?
Most industries will tell you that the quality of students they're getting coming from universities now have degraded so much over the past 40 years.
Who is saying this?
Tons of, like, look at the engineer.
Carl from fucking Enron.
Carl the pirate that did the painting at Toby. No, this is true. This is true. Everyone knows it. Like this isn't
that's
uncommon
just a crotchety
knowledge.
Old man thing.
No, this isn't uncommon
people
knowledge.
These days are getting real dumb.
I'm telling you, look it up. The amount when you're talking about like the STEM fields and things of that nature, there is proven. There are studies that show that the people that are coming out of universities now know less that allows them to be immediately. They require more training.
If there was a higher workforce or a higher pool of people to choose from, and this should be your like capitalist shtick of just like,
but there already
is. We have more. Well,
inevitably,
no,
let me tell you what's
going
to here's what's going to happen with universities, right? Inevitably, they're going to be eliminated and they're going to be replaced by tests. And what it's going to be is it's going to be like, you want to be an engineer, right? Here's a test, and the test will be developed so something like 90% of people fail.
Yeah.
And it won't matter what education background you have. It's literally, here's the test, you pass, you're in.
Yeah.
Right?
You think that's just going to be a giant test and you're good.
Right. And then you will have to find your education yourself.
What leads you to believe this?
Because there are going to be people that start to realize we keep getting these people coming from universities that aren't qualified to do the jobs we think they are. We could have people,
I still don't know what industries these are.
Let's say engineering, right? As an engineer, I could either take someone that has a degree from
Okay, I'm going to need to see a specific engineering corporation that's just like, our engineers are getting dumb.
It doesn't even, take that account.
It does matter, though.
But take it. If you're an engineer and you could, if you're a company that employs engineers and you could develop a test and you know that anyone, 100% sure that anyone that can pass that test at least has the intellectual skills to be able to be hired where you're at, right?
We call those interviews, and they have them now.
Right, but they're not infallible. We don't know.
Sure, but that doesn't mean a test is infallible.
But it's far better.
There's some metric. But that's what an interview process should be, and a lot of places already give out, like, sort of like, can you pass these, like, criterias? Will you do this amount of work for me so I can see and make judgments based
But you
upon
can't,
doing that?
yeah, I can pass it.
You can pass it?
Yeah.
Okay. And then they would give you like some sort of
test or something,
yeah,
right?
That's happening already.
But no, they're not. They're going to become standardized, and what it's going to be is you're going to have people that are smart that will develop these tests, and the idea will be you need to get your own education to be able to pass the test. Then there will be people that will say, "You pay me $50 an hour, and I'll teach you the information you need to pass this test." Then they'll have the exact education they need to be able to complete those jobs, and instead of being hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and taking a bunch of courses that have nothing to do with the profession that they're trying to go into, they won't have to get all that. Okay. And then they could go on their own and get, like, I really enjoyed my favorite class. Some of them were like things I thought I had no interest in, like art history, but I could go and do that in my own. I don't need, like, the blow that's coming from the cost of being in debt and all this, it's not worth it. We shouldn't just say, well, let's continue to allow the cost to be that much, but spread that cost out to everyone instead of just students.
But the cost out to everyone is a lot cheaper than the cost to, like, the people that are going
right,
to
but the better solution is just to lower the cost. And that involved, why did the cost go up?
But the thing is, lowering the cost sounds easy to do, but it's not. Like, you can't just lower the cost of what is already, like, super pricey in the first place.
And that's why universities will fail. They're going to fail.
But see, I understand you think failure happens, market regulates, world is perfect.
No, that's the difference. I don't believe in utopia.
The scary part. So, like, when things start to fail, what does that mean? How does that shift workforces? What does that mean for the stock market in and of itself?
So you're telling me that all universities, without student loans and without government subsidies, all universities collapse the next day.
I think I don't think of the next day, because I never think there's going to be a policy that says, surprise, all your money's gone, okay, the next day. But I think if we said 5 years from now, there will be no more government subsidies for any sort of, like, economic, like, loan status, for instance.
Right.
I think a lot of them would just pocket some money and just run. I think there would be mass.
But I still think there would be those that aren't in it just for them.
Accepting no new students. There might be one or two of your altruistic, super loving universities that exist out there, but I think those are few and far between with how administrations work now, which are just a bunch of economic folks that come in and make determinations about departments based upon how economically sound or well they're doing, vis-a-vis how many students they're recruiting. It's a very corporate, like, structure.
So how much money are we willing to spend on this?
I have no
30 trillion?
I have no idea off the top of my head.
You know, it's just
30 trillion is such a high number
that
I can't even fathom.
This is just something that it's like one of the problems I have with socialism is, like, it'll say things that are, like, it just feels that, like, there are problems that it's just like, well, we just, you know, here's a warm fuzzy thing. Everyone should get all the free education they want. There, boom. Okay, well, what's the cause? Oh, we'll trade off with something
if we had a better transportation system, we had a free public education system and free healthcare, what exactly do you need to spend money on? Just really things that you want as your own personal goods, right?
Wait, what? So, like, okay, if we have free healthcare,
sure,
free education, and free what?
Public transit systems. So you can get around places. So, like, we totally modernize, have trains that go everywhere, buses that go everywhere. People are willing to walk. People are willing to bicycle. What exactly do you need to make bank on to be able to spend on your house?
First is, let's just say right off the gate, you're assuming that all three of the things you just listed operate as efficient levels as people's personal private choice. For example, let's say I live in the sticks in Pennsylvania. What transit systems coming around here?
Well, you know, we can always modernize. We can always get, like, you're right. Rural areas are the hardest hit by a lot of, like, decisions like that in a very, like, socialist structure.
And we'll still see a two-tier system where you'll still see the wealthy that are like, yeah, you should all ride the bus, but
yeah, but we already have that two-tiered system.
Yeah, but it's always poor people should have to. We need more of your taxes, poor people. You should have to pay more for fossil fuels.
The top businesses, corporations, economic interests should also be taxed.
Okay, so I love how you understand that. Oh, if we stopped the subsidies for universities, then they would all collapse, and it's devastating. But if we just force the rich to pay way more, there's no negative consequences.
No, there will be negative consequences.
Okay, what? So see, that's what I'm saying. So then, like, how many jobs do we lose? What are we talking? What tax rate are we talking for all these?
So we
things?
can say hyperbolically that we super tax them, and then we lose what? If we moderately tax them, then we lose what? So we need to start like making more determinations.
What's the top tax rate you're willing to go?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I mean,
because I haven't been sitting.
That's the problem. And there's this misnomer, right, where it's like the rich don't pay any taxes.
They do.
They pay the majority of the taxes.
Yeah.
That's why tax cuts benefit the rich.
Yeah.
Because tax cuts are supposed to be basically for everyone, but the people that pay the most tax cuts are the rich. And again, this is another issue where you see a lot of these people, particularly like in Silicon Valley, or celebrities or athletes that are advocating this stuff, that have tax havens.
Yeah.
Like Bernie's paying a way less tax rate than what we saw of Trump. It's like, how does that make sense?
How do we know that?
Well, remember Rachel Maddow had that
from like
booming story.
You mean
we got him. We got his tax.
2004 tax returns had nothing to do with his current tax rates.
So what? That year he paid. Bernie was Mr. Socialist back then. Trump paid more than Bernie did then. Bernie's taking all the tax loopholes he can get.
This is not even an argument worth having.
But the point is, these very people that are like, everybody needs to pay their fair share. Everyone needs to pay more. They're taking advantage of every tax loophole they can.
We're now back into a question of like, is there a world that we should live in that it can functionally, feasibly work?
But why? But if we see that occurring now, why would then leaving these same people in power? Why wouldn't they take advantage of that?
Well, you change the people in power. This gets back to what I originally was saying earlier, with more accountability into systems that are being like, what are you doing with your actions? Are you contradicting those ideals and forms themselves? Can we have some sort of mechanism to punish them? Which is like, hey, we will vote you out of office. Hey, we will learn more. Hey, we will kind of like operate together more.
I had a phone somewhere.
I think you threw it.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Just in case
do you want my phone?
Nope. Just in case it was someone important. What if? What would stop? Let's say we triple the taxes on the wealthy. Yeah. What's to stop them from going to a different country?
There's nothing, but there's nothing to stop them from going to a different country.
All I have is water and beer.
Okay.
Well, there's vodka. I promised Courtney I would not drink any beer while she was at work. So.
Okay, you're a better man than me.
No, I wouldn't say that. But, yeah, I mean, the problem is, like, it's not well thought out. It's just generalizations like, well, we'll tax the rich more. But it's not that simple. There are consequences to that as well. And, like, well, you're not talking about tax the rich more just like 1 or 2%. You're saying we're going to add free universities and free health care for everyone.
I gave you an area where I think money should come from. I think it should come from a lot of our over-bloated Defense Department spending, which is absurdly high.
Okay, so you wouldn't worry about lowering the debt.
I would also say, no, I am not worried about lowering the debt.
Okay, well, I think if we're really talking about the future of our world, why is saddling our children and grandchildren with insane amounts of debts that they're eventually going to have to pay back?
Because they can pay those back, as opposed to trying to find out where resources come from.
They can't. How will they pay them back?
For
example, you're not going to get You're not going to get Social Security.
Yeah. 100%.
So you think that's a reasonable thing that your entire life will paid into Social Security, and then when you go to collect, they'll be like, sorry, it's not here. We spent it on other stuff.
Sucks. I'm going to work
until that does suck.
However, I'm trying to hit my George Clooney years in about like 20 years, and then just like hopefully get some like terminal illness that takes me out quickly.
Well, George Clooney has a disease. I don't.
No, he doesn't have that disease, but I want to hit my George Clooney years.
Oh, okay.
Look good. Go bachelor around. Yeah, no, George Clooney's fine.
We have to shut this off.
I'm gonna pour
Am I even still? You know what? I didn't even check to see if we're still on. That would be hilarious. I wouldn't give a shit either. But yeah, and I just think that like we see the countries that have employed socialism like on a map. Now I know people want to say Scandinavia, but again, Scandinavians. This is where I think the real debate is, right? If I'm talking to people that call themselves democratic socialists, I don't think you're saying no free markets.
No, free markets are fine.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not full-blown because they'll say, like, I'm talking about Scandinavia. But I think the closer we move towards a more socialist society, we don't see one that ever worked. Yeah. And you have this No True Scotsman's fallacy. It's like, well, they didn't do the real socialism. But it's like every time.
Yeah, but you can say the same thing towards any sort of, like, open market capitalist.
Sure,
which I
no, you can't.
It's moved to the same thing. It's just like...
So you're telling me there's never been a successful capitalist society?
There's been, I think there have been successful capitalist societies, but have there been ones that don't exploit people?
Is there any system? Does socialism exploit people?
Yes.
See, that's the problem. Capitalism. Who was it? Winston Churchill had said, "Capitalism's like such a scummy system, but it's the best we've had yet." He had a better way.
The problem is that it promotes I think greed at an unprecedented scale, that if it doesn't get adjusted is going to be a problem.
No, I don't. I think it promotes individuality. And I think socialism promotes collectivism. And that we see the problems with collectivism. It leads to tribalism. It leads to conflicts. It leads to saying, the problem is the problem is the people with money. We saw what happened in Soviet Union when we said that. It's the kulaks. It's these people that own farmers. They're the problem. Right? So we're going to take their land from them. And then what happened?
It's always the policies and institutions that are the problem. It's never necessarily a group of people. That's always dangerous to be like, this demonized group of people are the worst. Let's burn them at the stake.
Yeah, but if we see a system over and over leading to that same mentality, like, how is that not something that we should then be concerned? I'm not saying capitalism is perfect.
You can learn things from the past and move forward in those like kind of instances. Of just
but how?
Here are more social policies that are working in other places, such as like a free healthcare in a lot of like European nations.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Other nations, and these are proven systems that are currently working where people aren't going into debt because they fucked up and got diabetes.
Well, that's not full-blown social, which I agree with you. That's why I think the debate can't be full social.
Yeah, no,
and I'm just saying that the further we get to that, it's bad. And the other thing is, when we look at Scandinavia and things like that, like their countries are vastly different.
Yeah.
Their populations are so much smaller. It's homogenous populations.
Well, and everything's a lot more expensive too. So like if you wanted to go out and get like drunk in certain areas, it's going to be like, I'm going to pay $11 for that Yingling there, of kind of the way of just being like, you will get a lot of the costs levied straight towards you, and you won't be able to do things that you normally do, of saying like, let's go to the corner store and get kind of drunk, Rob. Yeah, let's do it.
Right.
Well, now we can't afford to pay rent.
Right.
Kind of thing. Even if you have a decent job.
But that's fine. You could still make it, but in that system, you could still say it works with that trade-off. My problem is that because those countries are so different than ours, they're on such a smaller scale, and they're almost homogenous societies. Like when you
you cannot call them homogenous.
Well, they're very much closer. With things like religion, class, economics. Like they're all born far closer to each other than like the big separations we have in the United States.
Changing demographic in those areas that are,
and it's getting worse. Like their economies are doing poorer. Like we see it all throughout Europe.
I don't know if that's necessarily true. In some areas it is. In some areas it is not.
From what I have read, the information I've looked at is that...
But the areas where it's doing poor are just like, Greece is a shit show, and that's...
But it's not just that, it's even areas... And I'm not talking about crime, I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying economically, you start to see places like Norway, Finland, Sweden, they're doing poor. They're starting to elect more right-wing leaning governments because the economic status of the people that live in the country, they're starting to fall. Does that mean the right-wing solution will solve? I don't know. But you're starting to see changes in those governments further to the right that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. And the reason is, one of the big reasons is because they're growing, the demographics are switching, and I'm not just talking race or religion, but I'm also talking like the class that people start, like the wealth that they have.
That might mean things get modified in a different way, but I don't think that's inherently like everything is on fire.
But then, I'm not saying that, but then to look at their system and say, see, it's working out great, but if they're adjusting it, it's like, well, what are they going to adjust to eventually? Because what they're adjusting to would maybe look more similar to what our system should be than what the system they have now.
We can conjecture that wildly.
That's true. But
no sort of leaning to be
but we could see,
all right, now they have private market insurance.
The closer they get to us demographically, the more they're switching away from that system.
Just because you switch away from a system does not mean you're switching to a different system.
That's absolutely true. I agree with that. But the argument, I'm not the one saying, look at their system, we should emulate that. That's not me. So if they're switching away from
closer to it, like I don't think we need to be there overnight, but I don't think these are things we can't work towards.
Well,
so, you should be able to get sick and continue living without being in debt to a hospital for the rest of your life.
But again, why are the prices of the hospital so much? It's because insurance. If you didn't have insurance, if there was no such thing as insurance, and you went to the hospital and they were like, "Hey man, this IV drip bag, it costs us $3 to make, but we're gonna charge you $2,000 for it," you'd be like, yeah,
I'm going to Puerto Rico.
No way.
Let's go.
I'm not paying that. Take it out of my arm right now. You wouldn't accept it. No. But because it's on your insurance, you're just like, whatever. And then everyone, because now we're all collectively paying that price. It's the same thing that would happen with education.
Sure.
The prices get so freaking high because it's spread out.
But like the prices can still get high, and the alternative is just like, sorry, you don't have enough money to pay for this IV drip bag. You're just dead.
Well, I do think we do need social safety nets. I agree with that. But the best example of like a free market healthcare situation that I see is like LASIK eye surgery. Like LASIK's not really covered by insurance. You pay for it out of pocket. You hear commercials on the radio. You don't hear commercials for like, hey, come get your appendix removed at Dubois Hospital.
That's also kind of terrifying in a bit of degree. Just like,
maybe
you got eyes? Do you want to keep those eyes for $5.99?
You see these, like these goofy lawyer commercials like, hi, like with the googly eyes or something. Come get LASIK eye surgery. Santa Claus will be in the office.
Every time I see a lawyer like that, that's just like, you should come work for me. I'll get everybody money.
There's this guy, the Pittsburgh guy that's got the like Yinzer doing the voice. Why would you ever trust that guy? I go down this guy down South Side, watch the Stellars. It's like, no, I'm not hiring that guy. I don't think so. So yeah, but the serious point I'm making is that like they compete, right? So the prices. The quality of LASIK's gone up. The prices have gone down.
Competition sometimes works really well. Sometimes competition leads to monopolies. Sometimes we end up in a world where just a giant Comcast just gets to do whatever they want because they don't really have any real competitors here in our local area.
But there's room to break up monopolies and capitalism.
Well, so now the government gets to determine who gets to break up what constitutes a monopoly and what doesn't.
Yes.
A small government could do that has no power whatsoever.
Yes. Who said a small government has no power?
You literally just said
it has less power. I even admitted one.
Then it's still a powerful institution that is small that rules over certain things.
So what would the lobbying be?
They're
allowed to break up monopolies. So what's the lobbying? Hey, we're Sprint. Could you all just say Comcast is a monopoly? Like no.
First of all, you don't think Comcast or Sprint would do that, or Comcast
the mere fact that they're existing and talking proves they're not a damn monopoly. You know, but it's still. I'm not saying there wouldn't be abuses.
Sure, Comcast would buy everybody and their mother.
The problem is there's nothing in a capitalism system that says you can't break up monopolies or that you can't charge criminals that are engaged in criminal. We don't have a fully capitalist system now, and that's why you see that. Now, I'm not super libertarian where I'd say...
You think any sort of, like, government choosing Comcast is the reason why Comcast is the thing it is today?
Well, it's a large portion.
Go on, explain.
Because
I'll listen.
Because they're able to lobby and have government intervention on their behalf, right? It's why, like, when you see things like net neutrality and things like that, the reason that that's able to go through is because we have a government that's getting paid by these. That's what lobby is.
But the thing is, they can still do that under a different, smaller government. Like, there's no reason that changes.
That what? Lobbying changes?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's less. For example, right? Look at these tech companies. I think like Google, Facebook, Twitter, right? We look at companies like that. Like, that's bad. Like, they probably are monopolies. There probably is going to need to be some kind of government intervention that goes into there, right?
I mean, Twitter,
but what's making it even worse...
We almost got rid of Twitter until the orange dude came in power. Because, like, Twitter was declining. It was about to be a dunzo social media. We were all about to be over it. Same with Facebook. And now, all of a sudden, it has gained enough traction to stay alive.
Right, but
if there's one thing I actually hate Donald Trump about, it's that I have to have a fucking Twitter account in the 20th century.
Get rid of it. Get rid of it. But
for all intents and purposes.
The hilarious thing is, so since I started this YouTube channel, I started up my Facebook. So I'm like the one moron when everyone's like, damn, I wish I could get out of it. I'm like, hey guys, I just started Twitter and
Fun
Facebook.
fact, so I quit Facebook about 2 years ago. And because I used it in my Spotify account, logged in through Facebook, it reactivated the account without me knowing. So I'm back on Facebook, surprise.
You can't get off it either. Like, I tried to get off, and it's like, they're basically like, you know, send us an ounce of your blood and like part of your...
Have you sacrificed the goat?
Yeah, it's like, what? So it's just temporarily deactivated.
Yeah.
And of course, the reason I got off it, there's nothing, it's like, I thought about this, like, did I want to use my real name on, like, a YouTube channel? Because you're like, what if you have prospective employees and stuff? But then I'm like, I don't think I say anything too crazy. No. The problem with Facebook is, though, I don't have to say it. People were tagging pictures of me with Natty Ice boxes on my head and stuff. It's like,
with the caption, he was a moose.
I'm going in with my best suit and tie, you know, trying to get some jobs. Like,
they call me Natty Ice Box.
It's not that there's a beer box on your head. It's that it's Natty Ice.
To be fair, if I was your potential employer, I would hire you in a heartbeat.
Yeah, that's what I think. Like, you'd be like, if you check someone's Facebook and they don't have pictures like that, it's like, what is this guy have? It's just you smiling all the time. It's like, we don't want that guy. So... All right, I guess that's
probably a pedophile.
As far as socialism, that's pretty enough. We can talk till we're blue in the face, but I think that at least, again, the last point I'll say on it is at least I can think that a lot of people that identify as socialists, even though I disagree heavily with a lot of their potential solutions, at least I think they're correctly identifying problems. Yeah. And I think that that's a worthwhile thing. So that there's more room to work together than to like just be pissing.
And what I agree with you, like on at least on a bunch of issues, is just like we can make productive changes that don't have to be like now we live in a socialist utopia or like some sort of economic capitalist society of perfection. We can find like practical solutions that are just kind of like middle road solutions, even if we think maybe it's more government intervention or less.
But I don't see the politicians on that, and maybe it's because it's kind of a burgeoning movement. Maybe you'll start to see more of this, but I don't see them making like real answers to like how we pay for this stuff. It's like it seems like. Like Cortez,
you make trade-offs in other places.
Right.
And also,
Cortez,
as a politician, you can't say where money goes.
Yes, I know. And Cortez, everyone craps on her, which I do to some degree, but, what am I? Just some fat guy on a couch complaining about stuff. She went out and did something at least, And I think that she is right. There's a lot of corruption. A lot of people are feeling it. So I might disagree with her, and I don't think she's the most informed person in the world. But so what? I think more regular people should run for office.
Yeah.
I trust her more than I trust, half these, like the Pelosi's or
I've been in politics for 19
Right.
years.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Let's talk about Trump. Everyone likes talking about Trump. I wrote good or bad.
Bad.
So what are some of the... Let's start with this, because you'll have less to say. Is there anything he's done that you find positive?
Find positive. I think he was a good signal to economic markets pre and during the tax breaks. That probably was at least a sort of like positive boost in what investors did and the stock market did in general. Because they were just kind of like, for the most part, these people see this guy who's totally going to have their back, be on their team, and give them all of the tax breaks that they were kind of wanted in a lot of.
And let me be anti-Trump for this for a moment and push back. Do you think maybe they'd have the same reaction to Hillary? They might have.
They might have too.
Because I think maybe even Hillary was seen more as, seeing as how she had so much corporate donation, maybe she even was seen as more pro-big business than Obama was. Yeah. So maybe, now you had the Paul Krugmans of the world that were like, if Trump gets elected, the stock market crashes tomorrow. Clearly he's a fool. Yeah. But, like, maybe the truth would have been that the stock market was just like, sweet, no matter who wins. Like, our investor
the stock market was going to win when it was going on.
That could be.
It was on a good trajectory. It was about to be, like, historically speaking, an economic boom around this time.
Why I think that, like, when Trump's out there bragging about the stock market, it's like, well, we don't really have proof this is all you do. I do think he had something to do with it.
Yeah.
But the other problem is, like, okay, dude, if you're using that as a measure of success, then that week it goes down 1,000 points.
Yeah.
You don't get to be like, oh, and that's not my fault. Like, that's not the way things work, dude. If you're going to say the success of the stock market's because of me, then the failure must be because you have to, Now, granted, there's a more nuance.
Yeah.
But that's how the people are going to look at it. So that's why...
Can I rack my brain for the good for a second?
Go ahead.
It's going to take me a second. So if you have anything you want to riff on real quick.
Well, I just... in general, that's fine. That's what you went with. The only thing I'll say is the reason I voted for him was the same reason that I wanted it to be him versus Bernie, which is that I'm more conspiratorial minded. So I think at the establishment level, the Republicans and Democrats are basically the same party. And when it comes to the important things. So they'll throw you a bone with things they could care less about. Like, abortion, gay rights. Yeah, you guys, we hate each other over that. It's like, again, going back to sports, I remember, like, fans getting outraged, like, years ago when there was, like, pictures of, like, Derek Jeter hanging out with David Ortiz in a bar or something, and the Yankees and Red Sox fans are like, what? Like, that's what it's
Heads
like.
Exploding.
Yeah, you got these superficial differences, but in reality, they're all interested in maintaining power.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing as, like, the Pens-Flyers hockey rivalry is just kind of like, well, I think the players are just having a fun time playing hockey. We're all out here trying to fight in parking lots.
No, I don't know anyone that likes Hartnell. Now that he's gone now.
Too hottie.
Yeah, but Drew looks pretty cool in his that video with the T-shirt can and shit. but no. So I wanted a potential outsider, and I think that Trump did the number one thing I wanted him to do, being elected, was to out that idea. The fact that the media isn't independent, that they're for the establishment. And I'm not just talking the 90% left wing. Fox News is the same thing. It just happens to be the bone thrown to the right. Now, I will say a caveat to that. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't listen to anything that anyone in the mainstream media says, or that some aren't better than others.
We had to be better at interpreting the kind of news information that we get.
I hate these people who are like, Fox News, I won't listen to it. Or all CNN, I'm not going to listen to it. It's like, dude, it literally just said it was 37 degrees in New York yesterday. That must be a lie. It came from CNN.
It's 38.
It's like, no, that's not a bad way to argue. You could approach it with skepticism, and if they don't have proof, you're like, okay, well, I don't see the proof. You know, so if Fox as an anonymous source said, you're like, okay, well, look at their track record.
Yeah,
I know where
but it's okay.
And also, like, I like Tucker and Fox, but I think there are people like I think Jake Tapper, even though I disagree with him, I think that he's pretty fair-handed. He'll ask difficult questions a lot. So there are people that are better than others, but in general, the media sucks and they're a mouthpiece. And that the intelligence agencies like the CIA, NSA, FBI, like. They are a deep state that's in, I don't care what words you use, but they're in collusion or connection with the establishment. And I think that by Trump... I don't know
what this establishment is.
Well, you see, I don't know what word you use for it, but it's like the lobbyists and the big businesses and the lifelong politicians that have real power there, and then these unelected officials such as people in the intelligence
I think there's two things. One, that sounds way more reasonable than saying the word establishment. Because when you hear the word establishment, you think somebody has tinfoil on their head, or the word deep state. You're just like...
Yeah, but why? Because the establishment told you to think that, right?
No, it's not even one of those things. It's just one of those things where it's just like, it's so overtly coded with like a bunch of like conspiratorial dogma that using the term itself also immediately is like, somebody just said the word deep state, I am not listening to a word that they said.
Maybe, but this is a problem you have with, like, as humans, we are incapable of speaking without labels.
That's fair.
But at the same time, labels are always...
Find a different label.
Yeah, I know, but what? Like, then you use a different label and people are like, what the hell are you talking about? Then you have to explain it anyways.
Yeah,
so I
but
just
that's
use
still
the word...
better, I think, than using something that immediately turns off half of, like, the consumer base.
But I don't think that it's like, I'm not saying that it's like the skull and bones sitting there, like smoking cigars.
I understood way more what you just said right there than saying deep state does X.
All right, well then maybe that's something I could work on. But yeah, and I mean, I think that Trump and the reaction to him by those groups shows, and here's the funny thing, I don't even know that Trump is an outsider.
No, he's not.
He just could have been an outsider, and that's all that was needed for these people to go like bananas.
Yeah.
Because like to me this was the turning point for me when I was like, yeah, I'm voting for Trump. It was his second debate with Hillary, and it was after the vice presidential debate. And in the vice presidential debate, they're asking, like, what do you think about Syria? And you couldn't have told Pence apart from, what's his name? Oh, I can't even remember his name now. What an impression he made. Kane, right?
Yes.
What a loser that guy is. But anyways, poor Tim Kaine. He's one of the 5 people watching. He's like,
one tear come down.
I'm going back to the
now
Young
back
Turks.
to 4.
Yeah, but no, like, and they're both like, you couldn't tell them apart. They're like, yeah, we got Assad bad, got to get them. Yeah. Russians, they're bad. And then Trump comes out in the second debate, and they're like, what do you think about this? And he's like, yeah, why are we arming Al Qaeda to fight Assad? Like, shouldn't be working with Assad to get rid of Al Qaeda? Aren't they like the people? And for me, it was like, yeah. Like, I can't go through an airport without some guy putting a glove on, and violating me in many ways.
Well, first of all, you asked for that, so that's the problem.
Yeah. But, because of these terrorists, everything's about terror. You can't have so much shit, and then it's like, oh, but in this country, we have to work with them. Garbage. You could say they're both bad, but then just stay the hell out of it.
The TSA regulations are, like, post 9/11 kind of like...
right, because Al Qaeda bad.
That went on. And not even necessarily Al Qaeda bad, just terrorism on domestic soil bad.
So why are we arming terrorists?
That's a great question.
Exactly.
We could have asked ourselves for the past 150
years. Exactly. So Trump's like, he comes out and says it. Now you might think he's an idiot, and all kinds of things, but it's like, yes, here's a normal type person. Normal for him, just being like asking a question that every one of us that have any kind of brain.
Stop doing these things though.
Well, and I'll get to that. Right? So he asks this, and he's like, yeah, why are we doing this? And Hillary's like, oh, blah, blah, no fly zone. Like, we can't, Hillary's basically as close to advocating for war with Russia as you can in that conversation. And so what happens, the media, like, and I'm talking all of it, all the mainstream media. You got the New York Times, MSNBC, CNN, like the Washington Post, right? But then you got, like, the Fox Newses and, like, those groups on the right. They all come together to be like, what the hell is Trump talking about? We need to bomb Assad. Of course we need to help the innocent rebels. And right there, you were like, this is it. This is the horde. Like,
so I don't think you can say that all of the rebels were Al Qaeda.
No, but a lot were. And if you're a rebel and you're working with ISIS and Al Qaeda, you probably have some shadiness. you know, yourself. We just found out 2 weeks ago there was a report they used chlorine gas again. We know it was the rebels. Yeah. They just 2 weeks ago.
But the Assad regime has done a lot of effed up things to a lot of different people. That's true. Which doesn't mean we should back him.
That's right. So just let it go. Right? We shouldn't be arming. How many times must this country learn? Arming one crappy side to go after another crappy side means that 10 years down the road, we're arming another crappy side to go after the first crappy side.
There is this complex where you
make
a ton of money selling a bunch of weapons.
See, complex now who sounds like a tinfoil hat. But see, it's real, right? Like, yeah, that's absolutely true. You're absolutely right. So when Trump said that, then of course, to my chagrin, what happens the next debate? He's basically like, yeah, I misspoke. You know, and that's him. He's been the worst part of Trump's administration, where twice now we've bombed Syria. And for what? Well, they used chemical weapons. Well, what's the proof? Well, the first time we were certain. Then Mattis comes out like months later and is like, well, we still don't have proof it was Assad. Like, and it's not reported. The news doesn't report that. And it's so obvious that there's like this agenda. So once it was obvious to me, it was like, okay, these people don't. That's why, to me, the Bernie-Trump matchup was the dream matchup. Yeah. Because at that point, like, I still would have voted for Trump because economically I agree with him more. But either way, I'd been happy with Bernie winning because either way, it was like, what are these people going to do? They're going to out themselves. Yeah. Now, there are people that favor Trump that are like, yes, because Trump's playing 4D chess. No, Trump is not playing 4D.
He might be playing checkers at best.
Yeah, like, for him outing the deep state, he might as well have been a cardboard cutout. Like, it doesn't... What he didn't have anything to do with it. It was that he was a potential outsider. They wanted a Bush or a Clinton. Yeah. That's who they wanted. And they didn't get it. And so I think it shocked them, and that's why you saw... and so, like, you see this... the insane investigation into Trump that was started by the FBI, like using Hillary's Oppo research. That's crazy. And to me, that's a bigger issue than anything Trump's done, which we could talk about in a minute. But I assume you would like to get to the Trump bad stuff. So,
well, I mean...
Is he a racist? Do you think Trump's a racist?
I think he said some things that are racially insensitive, like calling a bunch of like countries that are predominantly brown or black shithole countries, saying that a bunch of like immigrants coming to the United States were probably rapists to begin with, playing on the inherent stokes and fears that a lot of white people have when they consider people of color, which is their scariest thing, their imagination, that they tend to be like, oh, there's brown people coming, they must come to kill me. I think he utilized that. I also think his lack of denouncing the KKK or any sort of like neo-Nazi groups in a lot of areas and places after atrocities happens, where he
like
just
Charlottesville,
like,
that's what you're...
both sides had a lot of bad stuff going on.
All right,
after
I'll get to that.
Liberal was murdered.
You're totally wrong. I'll give you the first two. I'll give you the you're wrong on the third one, which I'll get to in a minute. But the shithole country thing, he's right. They are shitholes. Now, if he may have used that term because he's a racist, I don't know. I certainly wouldn't use that term because I think that the leader of a country... It's one thing for a stand-up comedian or someone to say, I don't think you want the president saying it. However, I'll leave your response as I say this. It's not like he went to the mic and was like, hey, these shithole countries. He said that in a private meeting, and then some Democrat went out and outed him. Now, let's not forget, like, when LBJ was president, he used to whip his wiener out and, like, slap it on the desk to yell at people and apparently talk like a drunken sailor all the time. But it was considered improper to go out and tell the media. So a lot of that just came out because, now, does that justify Trump saying it? Maybe not.
Now, here's the thing. How do you tell if somebody's actually racist? That's the question.
Well, I don't know. That's a great question.
The way in which you tell if a person is acting is racist, you tell by their actions. Mm-hmm. So, like, in your private home, if you're just a bunch of dudes and you make a joke to each other, you're probably insensitive to each other, but that's, like, your own private space. You do whatever the fuck you do in your own time. Pardon my language. However, when you are a public figure and you continually make a bunch of small actions that can be picked up as anti-brown, anti-black in a lot of areas, then you start to get the image of being a racist without explicitly addressing that is a problem in the first place.
I could see, but...
Which leads people to believe that, hey, this guy is anti...
But you're saying actions. Those aren't actions. Those are words.
He also, every time he talks to a person of color, he's called them dogs in the past. His family, historically speaking, has denied housing to
that's a compelling argument. I think that's a compelling argument.
But there's not going to be one outlying gun where he comes out, which there is a bunch of people saying that he has said the N-word in the past, and it has been caught on tape, but there isn't going to be a smoking gun moment, although with Trump there could always be one, and who the fuck knows, because this dude is an unpredictable wild card, which you certainly don't want as the free leader of any developed nation.
I don't think he's as unpredictable.
He is very unpredictable. So, fun fact, have you read the Bob Woodward book?
No.
So the first chapter of it outlines that for the longest time he was going to pull us out of the South Korean free trade agreement because he couldn't understand why we were paying to have a defense or a missile defense in South Korea. And so he couldn't understand, was told this day after day, and was right about to just get rid of the trade agreement and to remove these things before, like, I forget who it was.
Remove, like, missiles and stuff?
Yeah.
Isn't that what you
break
want?
The trade agrement. No, you want the missile defense there because North Korea has the capacity to launch a nuclear weapon.
Okay, so then when you're... But then let's go back briefly to when you're like, get rid of all this military-industrial complex. That's how we pay for free college.
Yeah.
It's not that simple then.
Yeah.
A lot of it you're saying is necessary.
There's a...
Okay.
Do you understand how much military spending we have?
It's a ton. We have 400 some bases. I don't know why we have more than 20. Right?
I agree. We can be a way more smarter with how we spend the money in the military. The military is just like, we can make it rain on everything. Right. The first thing I would do is, hands down, I would say a lot of research and development, where most of the money goes in the military, I would just give it to a bunch of civilian soldiers so they could put that right back into the marketplace whenever they go out and buy stuff.
Well, we need research and development. The problem is we way overspend, and we end up giving it to buddy contracts that end up... we're working on this airplane for 20 years that never comes about, but a bunch of their friends got rich.
Yeah,
you know? And I happened to be invested in Lockheed Martin while I was a senator, and I also got... we all agree. That's...
But no,
I get you. Trump, the Woodward book. Yeah, and look, he's stupid. He does a lot of dumb things. Like, I get that, but he's not like... I don't think he's like about to hit the button. I think that for me, it is far more likely that we would have been involved in a huge hot war had Hillary been president than Trump. Hillary was itching. She was itching. So is all the
There's
mainstream.
no real proof of that besides just
she wanted a no-fly zone over Syria.
Okay, the fact that you can tell that she was itching for war just based upon those comments and can't tell that Trump's a racist based upon his other comments should lead you to believe.
No, she's advocating a policy position. I'm not saying I know she's itching for war because every time she said Putin, she rolled her eyes. I'm saying she said, here is a policy I will institute.
Of just a no-fly zone.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you don't understand?
That is not the precursor to...
Russia is not allowed to have planes go over Syria? You don't think that was going to lead to conflict?
No, I don't think that was going to lead to the end of
I think that most people that look at the situation realize that was going to lead to a conflict. There would have been a shooting conflict at some point. Maybe not us directly versus Russia, but it would have happened. It's the same. We saw that Hillary, right? Like when Trump was like, why aren't we working with Russia here? They all went berserk. They wanted us involved in Syria. They want that conflict in Syria. We know that Hillary did. That's not deniable. We know that she did. Now, Trump since attacked Syria. Sure. But I'm saying, and it seems clear. Anyways.
You know more about your Hillary riffs than I'm going to, so.
Yay!
Don't care.
So, I don't know, like, okay, so the shithole country, I don't think that's racist in that I'm seeing that's guaranteed racist. The rapist thing, I think that it's people ought to be honest specifically about what he said. He said that the immigrants that Mexico was basically leaving come here illegally, most of them were rapists and some of them were good. Now, I could defend it in this way and saying, actually, we've had organizations that have looked at it that have said something like 80% of the women that come through there have been raped on the trip through. Which would lead to believe
leads you to believe they're coming from long places through terrible conditions to get to a place for safety.
But no, it's not the place they're coming from they got raped. It's during the trip. So the actual caravan, right. So a lot of the people...
It's terrible conditions.
That's right.
That they have to suffer to come here and that they're still willing to come here.
But I don't know. Did they know they were going to get raped? Did they know that... Okay, not. So yeah. So, but anyway, so there are a lot of rapists that were coming. Now... Do I think Trump read those studies? No. I think that Trump just shoots his mouth up. But when he's calling people dogs, he does it to he's done it to a lot of white people too. Yes, you can pull it up. I will sometime this week. But he does that to a lot. Now you have the history of his family. Okay. I don't know a lot about that case, but sure, I'll buy that. But there were far after that, you had people like Jesse Jackson giving him awards. And no one thought he was a racist till he ran for president after that, right? And now, where I will give you credence to is...
He was also not in the public spotlight until
So I could say
he was actually a political figure.
He was in the public
I
spotlight.
mean, he was sort of in the public spotlight. He has C-list celebrity. I'm not even giving him B-list stats.
The guy, he was on
C-list celebrity.
He was nationally known. And even before he, like, the Apprentice and stuff, he was definitely well known in New York when Jesse Jackson and them, he's getting awards by black groups and stuff. But anyways, what I will give you credit for is when you start to add everything up, right? So you could say every one of these individual situations. So maybe when you start to add it up, I could see
there's no like easy answer.
Yeah,
but, like,
the more every new
he hasn't proven otherwise.
Now that Charlottesville thing, I totally disagree with.
Okay,
he comes out the first day and he says no place for racism, white supremacy. Now, he gave 3 speeches on this. First one, he says no place for it, but he says there were bad people on both sides. He's absolutely right, because the people on the other side were Antifa that the media was trying to glorify, saying, which you still see them today, like they're anti-fascist. It's in the name. Yeah,
that's not this.
Like CNN. Tom Lemon said it the other day. Chris Cuomo tried to say, or
one guy said this.
No, it's this happens. The media made excuse. The entire media was like, no, the people against the white supremacists in Charlottesville were great. They were awesome people that were attacked. That's not true. You could look at the video. There were a lot of good people on that side as well.
But it's a question of how you phrase it at a very specific and delicate time. You can't just be like, oh, these people that are protesting the removal of a Confederate flag or a Confederate statue. It was a statue, right?
Yeah.
These people protesting the removal of a Confederate statue, a.k.a. racism. One of them gets killed. You can't just be like, well, everybody has the bad people.
You're misspeaking there. You're misspeaking there. She was protest. She wanted the removal.
Yeah.
The other people were protesting. Yeah. But it's the truth. It's maybe not politically correct, but it was the truth. There were bad people on both sides. Now, here's where Trump was technically...
That's just being like, oh, a war happened. It's not a tragedy because there's bad people everywhere.
If I were to say...
happens.
If tomorrow, right, there was a chlorine attack in Syria, and I said, it's a shame that there were people on both sides killed, because there could have been people.
No, but you would excuse the action itself and not talk about it because there were bad
action. He said it was
terrible.
He didn't excuse the action.
Yeah, but
he said the action was indefensible and that the person should be held to account.
Sure,
but there were bad people. There were good and bad people.
Murder is bad. However, here's a wink and nudge that hey,
now
there are good people everywhere.
Now, technically, Trump was still wrong because what he said was the night before there were good and bad people on both sides. And there probably weren't good people on that side because the night before, if you saw the video, you had a bunch of people holding like tiki torches surrounding these like students around, and they're
which really sucks
shouting
because I
like,
can never have a Hawaiian luau because they just ruined my tiki torches.
Theoretically, I don't feel strongly about the removal of statues, but I feel like I've met like I don't think we should be removing them, but
I think statues are dumb.
Okay, but like I could see myself theoretically like having a friend being like, you know, I'm really like a Confederate soldier buff, like I'm Civil War buff, and like I don't think we should remove these statues. I've had family, you know, that owned slaves that they died fighting for the South, you know, and I think these statues are a memorial to them. And I could see myself drinking with them like, yeah, man, I'll go. Well, we're gonna like barbecue, hold a torch. Yeah, man, I'll go out. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, what did I get myself in? You know what I mean? So like, I don't think Trump's right that there were like good people like, yeah, I'm just against the removal of the statue. White power, white power. They're like, oh, yeah, I'm gonna head to Denny's or something. I don't think this is the crowd for me.
Keep the torch.
Yeah, I'm good. It only costs $1. So yeah, Trump's technically wrong, but the problem with Trump is he's not a detail-oriented guy, which probably isn't a good thing for president. He speaks like kind of a macro level instead of a micro level.
He doesn't speak at any level.
No, and
he just throws words out.
That like he'll say stuff that there's a grain of truth to, but it's technically wrong. And then the left or the people against him will come out and say, technically what he said's wrong. And now we'll make fools of ourselves by arguing that the grain of truth's wrong too. So for example, he'll say, yeah, that terrorist attack in Sweden last night. And everyone's like, what the heck is this guy talking about? There was no terrorist attack. And oh, by the way, no attacks like that ever happened in Sweden. And then it's like, well, yeah, technically a lot of these grenade attacks have been up and stuff like that. So it's like the left always makes bigger. So they could have came out and been like, look, I don't think Trump was saying, yay. Even if he is racist, I don't think that he's like, yay, KKK.
No, but I think he's the type of person that knows that if he can use that to secure some sort of political clout, he'll use that to his advantage, which is highly suspect and
But then you could make the same argument with Obama on the other side.
Sure.
Like, and so it's like, yeah, I guess he's being a politician.
How can you do that with Obama?
Because, like, Obama can play up, like, black identitarian or minority identitarian, and there are definitely terrible racist people from those groups that he could have been winking and nudging to, right? Like, when all those officers get shot by that crazy guy, right? And he goes to the officers.
Did he say there were good people on both sides in that situation?
No, he criticized the officers. So you went to an officer's funeral and you said, but you guys need to work with black people better. Now, that's a classic example of maybe a better time to say that than at a funeral for 6 hours. But I didn't think that Obama was like, and screw all police. That's not what I'm saying. Just like I didn't think Trump was saying, like, yeah, it wasn't worth it. Now, though, then he gives the second speech. He directly, in the second and third speeches, he directly is like, I condemn the KKK. I condemn neo-Nazis. And they're still like, no, that's not good. Then he gives the third speech and he said, I'll pull it all up later. But he gives the third speech and he says it. And, like, it's just, he's riffing. It's not even really a speech. And he's basically just like, yeah, I'm tired of this. There were bad people on the other side. And it turns out this was another thing where on the micro level, maybe he could have been correct. But in the macro level, what he was trying to say, that there were bad people on that other side too. There were good and bad people on both sides.
Yeah.
Turns out to be true because it was Antifa. And we see like some of the abuses they've done. It's just lucky no one's died as a result of them. But now we see them outside Tucker Carlson's house trying to bash in the door while his wife and kids are locked in a pantry. That's Antifa. We've known they've been crap for years. We know that they're basically a terrorist organization, but we couldn't call them out. Because they were against other scumbags. We had to pretend that them being scumbags weren't scumbags. Yeah. And you see that now. You're starting to see groups going to fight Antifa from the other side, and we have to pretend they're not. And it's like, no, if you're going with the intention of causing violence, you're a scumbag. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you feel that you're a moral actor. So if you showed up with bats and sticks, like certainly those white supremacists did,
or a tiki torch,
right?
We're done with tiki torches now. No, you can't have
you
a tiki torch.
I've been places with tiki torches.
That
sucks. That sucks.
I know.
Bugs get really bad around here in winter or in the summer. I gotta come up with something new. That's not suck. Like, yeah, I think about stuff like that all the time. Like, there's a funny commercial I saw for like a razor.
Yeah.
And this dude's like shaving, and he's just being like a dorky, like shaves like a Wolverine. Yeah. And then he shaves into a little Hitler mustache and just jokes, and then goes to turn the razor on and it doesn't. And his woman's like, honey, it's time to go. And he's just like, I always think it's like, Hitler sucks, man. Like that, theoretically, that could have been a fashionable mustache.
I know,
but now
right?
It's like, gosh. Yeah.
It could not have been a fashionable
The tiki torch? I know.
I can guarantee that one.
Now the tiki torch is out. Yeah. So yeah, I disagree with the Charlottesville. But, okay, like, the thing about racism, too, is, like, I don't even know if racists know they're racist.
No,
you know what I mean?
They usually don't.
You justify it in some way. Well, you think they usually do?
They usually don't.
Right. That's what I would think.
Yeah.
Most people don't want to think I'm a crappy person.
Yeah.
And most people acknowledge racism's crappy.
Yeah.
So even if you are a racist and act with race, you justify it. You're like, I'm not a racist. I just think there's a difference between black people and N-words. I've heard that.
Or I just walk across the street sometimes whenever I see a person of color because I feel more safe on this side of the street kind of thing.
But we all are. You have to. We're all Like, and I remember, like, one of the first classes I took in university, it was like, who believes in stereotypes? Like, yeah, I'm like, well, yeah, they exist. Of course I believe that. It was like, well, who acts on them? I was like, well, yeah, I do. For example, I'll give you a real world example. We had someone on I won't mention any names, but we had someone on the debate team who was from Algeria, if you remember him.
No, I do.
You know what I'm talking about, don't you?
I
And I remember getting stuck at, like, an airport with him, and he was just like, what do you think of Algeria? And I'm like, oh, palm trees, and sand. And it shows me pictures of his hometown, and it looks like he had like a bunch of like Alexander the Great and came through, and there's a bunch of like Greek statues. It's beautiful. Like, looks like it's green. And I'm like, wow, that's a crappy stereotype. No, the difference is how do you act?
Yeah,
like,
with that knowledge.
And I'll tell you, this story's probably going to make me sound racist, but I'll tell it. It's a stand-up joke. I worked at this house in Pittsburgh, like doing the current job I have. It was at a different company. And I didn't know anyone there, so I take care of this guy. Yeah. And they're like, well, the guy that runs the house will be in later tonight. Yeah. And it happened to be like the NBA All-Star. The pre-All-Star game was on with like the slam dunk contest and stuff. So the dude comes in to take over work, and he happens to be like this 6'6" black guy, right? Yeah. And he's just like, hey, what's up? We're just small talk. Well, you got to count money and stuff, so you're just small talking. And he's like, did you guys get into anything interesting? And me, I just blurt out, I'm like, yeah, man, watch the like slam dunk competition. Did you watch that? And he's just like, no. And then I thought, I was like, it would be the equivalent, like the perfect response to him with me as like a fat white guy would have been like, nah, I was watching that hot dog eating competition. You caught that right, buddy? Hey, Tubby.
Honestly, I don't even think
but that's what I mean. Like everyone does things like that on a small level. But there's clearly a point where it goes over the line.
Yeah.
So I don't know that Trump's at that point, but I'm also not someone that would be affected by it, so it's harder for me to say. But here's the other question I have about it. Does it matter?
Yes.
Like, it matters in the sense...
100%.
Okay, it matters in the sense that you personally don't like him. But here's what I mean by that. Let's say that he is actually a
maybe
provable
his
racist.
policies on immigration are going to be carteled and more offensive. Remember the locking children and Gage fiasco? This is an instantiation where...
Remember the first picture that came out about that? Of a little girl in a cage, that was under Obama. Then all of a sudden it was like, well, maybe that cage wasn't so bad.
But still, it doesn't mean... No one said it's not that bad.
They said...
But it's still pretty bad in both situations. Like, that doesn't... Just because someone else does a bad thing doesn't excuse the present bad thing.
But you can't act like what's going on now is uniquely bad.
You can act like it's bad, though.
Right.
And you can act like somebody that comes out and wants to be hard line on immigration and make it harder for other people to cross borders, coming from a party that preaches things like self-deportation, where you make people's lives living hells to the point where they want to leave.
So what is that?
That was an old Mitt Romney shtick from many years ago.
But look, but let's look at Hispanic economic increases and job increases since Trump's been there. Record highs. Black unemployment rates. Record lows. Okay. Wage increases.
Unemployment is doing very well right now.
But it's good. It's doing even better for those groups as far as the increase that's going.
Just unemployment is doing better right now.
Right, sure. but the percentage of increase for the amount of unemployment that's gone down.
What exactly has Trump done to be in correlation?
Well, I don't know, but he's not being a good racist, right?
Yeah. Okay.
That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay. I'm not convinced that he's a racist, but let's say if he was, but he's bumbling into policies or decisions.
I don't think racism is what drives him. I think he might be racist. Okay. But that's fine.
Okay, but then you can't say, well, then his immigration policy is driven by his
racism. You were asking for an example of where it can matter. I think immigration is an area where it can matter. If you see brown people as an imaginary, evil, super bad threat that are all coming to kill us,
I think that's a misnomer. I think that
then your policies are going to be more cartels.
I think I can't speak specifically for him, but I think that he sees illegals as a problem. So do I. The color is irrelevant.
Okay.
Like, illegal immigration is bad. Legal immigrants are good.
Okay.
I don't care what our government's responsibility should be to the legal people that are here. I don't care what your religion or sexual preferences.
What would you do with like asylum seekers?
Deal with them, but a lot of them aren't. It's like you do what the international law says, but I don't think that most of the people we see are asylum seekers. I think most of them are economic migrants. If you're an asylum seeker, you don't walk through a country offering you asylum to get to another country. The first place you get to that you're not going to be murdered, you say, okay, I'm seeking asylum. That's the idea.
You can still get murdered in Mexico pretty easy.
So you can in the U.S.
Not as easy. We got that going for us.
But then we would have to label Mexico, right? We would have to say that it's a humanitarian crisis in Mexico. No one's doing that. Yeah. So, I mean, that's what the law is. So, but they're economic migrants, just like in Europe. Most of the people who are coming through aren't refugees. A lot of them we see are actually coming from Northern Africa, not Syria. And a lot of them are economic migrants. And we have a problem. We have over 20 million.
You don't think an economic migrant can be an asylum claim?
No.
Of your life being threatened, if you can't find work and are about to die, your family is about to starve.
No, that's not a legitimate
asylum seeker.
No, that's not legit. Okay. Because what are we going to do? Import 4 billion people? Yeah, if that's the case, that poor economic conditions means justification for asylum.
The asylum seekers aren't taking like crazy awesome jobs.
Right. So who are they competing against? Who suffers? The people they're competing against are people that don't have crazy awesome jobs.
Yeah.
That's just it. That's why the Republicans and the Democrats, again, this gets back to me saying they're based on the big issues they agree. They both like illegal immigration. Democrats like it because they do like things like the potential votes they get and things like demographic change. They want that.
They don't get illegal immigrant votes.
They are advocating for it. That's what you see with DACA. Amnesty. They want citizenship.
Yeah. Right? Citizenship. Once you get it, which there always should be pathways to citizenship, if you're willing to do some sort of work.
I kind of agree with that. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. But yeah, that's the idea. You let all these people in, and then down the road you could say, well, now they should get citizenship.
Well, you don't know if they're necessarily going to be super liberal. In that
the numbers
maybe they'll be crazy conservatives.
Yeah, but the numbers are. We know in general
Okay.
That the numbers are.
You know.
And by the way, probably the party that's saying they should be a citizen, they'd be like, yeah, vote for that party.
The party that does care about you generally tend to.
I don't think that's necessarily. I don't know how much they care about, because again, we just talked about like the crappy condition. I think that people that really cared about them would be saying, no, you're not going to get in here, instead of fostering the idea that, yeah, we should take you and maybe you will get in, and then you get raped on the trip. And like how many, like I just saw a report, they're interviewing a lot of these people in the caravan, like we were lied to. Yeah. We were told that we were going to be able to get in, and we're not. Yeah. So the people that are saying that, I don't think care about them. They wanted them to get here for personal reasons, but they knew that there was a good chance they wouldn't, and they didn't care that people would suffer as a result of their crimes. So that's a really crap. So again,
that is something that like institutionally you can only fix if you have a good immigration policy that like makes sense.
But we have to be honest. I mean, we have 20 million. At the low estimate, illegals in the country now, right?
Yeah.
Like we have
who are paying into Social Security, not getting anything back. They're paying taxes.
They get all kinds of. They get all kinds of.
What do they get?
Free health. They go to an emergency room. They turn down.
No.
Okay. They can get SNAP benefits.
Most of the time, they don't go to emergency rooms.
Where do they go?
Afraid that they're going to get deported.
Yeah, but there's a lot. Not in California. Yeah. There isn't a lot of fear of getting deported.
Yes,
Everyone's
there is.
giving
you are wrong on this one.
They just even with the legal immigrants.
The emergency room isn't going to be like, I need no documentation. I figured this out. They call the cops.
Then if illegal immigrants don't take any benefits and they're always a boon, why is
they're not always a boon?
Okay,
but
then
in most parts of the time they are.
Well, then why aren't other countries like? Why is Canada being like, okay, we got too many, we got to start curbing our immigration? Why is Mexico like, yeah, get out of here, go to America? If they're always, I don't understand. We keep hearing because
once people start closing their borders off to protect populations from like competitive workplaces, if we want to go back to being like, let's have a laissez-faire capitalist system, that's when you start to get people that are just like, we'll take only our population, we'll close down these borders, we'll make it very kind of insular and hard to get to. It's not easy to.
So that's what you're arguing Mexico and Canada are doing.
They're probably getting a little bit more like strict and lenient because they don't also have a lot of like economic opportunities in the same area. Canada does, yes, but the U.S.
and they're saying Mexico, it's been too much. Yeah, I mean that's why I'm kind of from the Milton Friedman school of where it's like, I don't mind unlimited immigration, except no welfare system. You're willing to work, you work for everyone. Yeah. If you're an American, you don't want to work. Sorry, this person came in. I don't care what their color. But no one's a fan of that. No one's going to say, yeah, okay, get rid of the welfare system. That's not going to happen. It is not feasible to bring people in. And we already see, like, even with legal immigrants, we saw the study just came out from the census. It said 67% of legal immigrants receive some form of government welfare.
Okay, what does that mean?
That means 67%.
No, I understand what the exact sentence that you said in the same context and syntax or whatever.
You mean what specific policy?
Yes.
Well,
what sort of things do you get? What does government welfare mean?
Well,
because that is such a vague and nebulous term.
It could be
where
SNAP.
It's like,
it could be
you got like $50 in food stamps.
Okay, but nonetheless, that proves that you're economically not making much, right?
Yeah.
So that means that you need help economically, so our government's giving you help economically.
Okay.
So we have to be realistic. It'd be nice to say, like, yeah, we want the whole world to live here. Like, look, I just saw this guy last night talking about this.
But
he's
like,
making the
progressive
progressive
get rid of welfare for. But then at that point, you can't just be like welfare for everyone bad when people because the alternative is you just let people starve. If that
well, right. That's why. So we should have a welfare system, which means that we should be able to say, okay, we can't accept unlimited amount of people, because inevitably what happens is 4 billion people say, yeah, we're poor. That's the reason for asylum. We all want to come to the U.S. Now, how do we decide of those 4 million what we?
That's very hyperbolic. That 4 billion people are just going to be like, surprise, we're coming to live here.
I will guarantee that it would be I can't guarantee. Yeah, my suspicions is it would be at least 1 billion. If the United States came out tomorrow and said, anyone who has economic hardship may come to the United States, and you're also entitled to our entitlement systems.
You would think all of like the southern hemisphere just walks north.
You would see a ton of people.
Okay.
Because you're not. Because the problem is they're not illegals at that point. Yeah. Now they're legal. They're entitled to the entitlement systems, right? Yeah. Milton Friedman actually argues the illegal immigrants are the ones you want, because they're actually drawing less of the entitlements than the legal immigrants, because they're not entitled to specific welfare.
That's what I was saying.
You know what I mean? Yeah. But again, your argument in immigration seems to like contradict somewhat your argument with environmentalism.
Yeah, it does a little bit.
Right? And I saw this guy last night talking about, he's making the progressive case for stopping as much immigration, because he's like, look, we're bringing in more people than we have resources to handle. Yeah. And that's our country, with birth rates have started to decline, and it's kind of a natural response to, over time, people do understand, okay, well, we don't have enough resources to live the life we want, and so birth rates go down. But then we just say, well, then just import a bunch more people. And what will end up happening is you'd end up in a situation where you would have, like, what do they call it? It's been forever, but you have like two types of like breeding. You have like R type and I type, but you basically have breeding where it's like, I
was gonna make a bad joke.
But like you have the idea of like mammals or something where you raise kids and then they compete. But then you have like mosquitoes or locusts where it's just breed as fast as you possibly can, use all the resources until you die, and then move to the next area. And like that's what we would see a bunch of. I should just say here, which I'm sure you would agree with. I don't blame the people immigrating at all. It's not their fault. Yeah. Right. Like, and if I was illegal and I knew, hey man, if I can make this 300-mile trip, it'll be better for me and my family, I would do it. Yeah. And if I lived next to an illegal, I wouldn't report them. Yeah.
That's reasonable.
If I live next to someone who speeds every day, I'm not going to call cops because this guy's speeding, but I still believe there should be speeding laws. Yeah. So that's my take on. So anyways, we were talking about Trump with that. I don't think. I think that the immigration, it just gets, again, that's also another issue where it's like, the kind of the left, not everyone on the left, but again, you have to use a label, but like the Democrat position, it seems to be one of like, if you don't agree with us on this, you're immoral. Right, it's immoral.
It depends on what you specifically agree on and don't agree on. Well, everyone would agree that we need a major overhaul in like immigration system and reform system because it's
not everyone, because the high level Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats like it, like I said, the Republicans want the cheap labor. Yeah. But most normal people realize, and you actually, when you talk to immigrants, even illegals, a lot of them are like, don't get us wrong, we're happy we're here, but we understand. Yeah. Because, and I talked to a guy the other day who's a legal immigrant. He's from South Africa. And, he was like, I hate illegal immigration. He's like, you know how much money? It took me 8 years. You know how much money I spent? I had to take a test. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, someone's here the next day and it's like, hi, I'll be taking your job now, because I'll do it for. So, I mean, that.
But the thing is, then he's probably not taking his, like.
Well, yeah, I understand. But that's why, like, people are shocked.
In Pennsylvania, we don't have that many migrants to worry about.
If you listen to the media, though, you would assume that, like, 3% of Hispanic people would vote for Trump. But it's like 30. Okay. His approval's like 30. And that's because, don't get me wrong, that's still a large, the majority. Yeah. But still, a lot of Hispanics are like, we don't like illegal immigration. We don't mind them talking about it because, and I do think there is an effort to conflate illegal immigration with legal immigration.
That's fair.
Look, I can't speak for everyone, but I can't make it more clear. I literally don't care about, like, if you're here legally, I don't care where you came from. Yeah. Period. You're an American. In fact, I would argue that
sometimes you're not American, sometimes you're here to just
but our government But a lot of the people that have got citizenships that I have happened to know, I would say are better Americans than me. Yeah. Because it's like they actually
had to take a test.
I mean, it's like the dudes that used to run like the gas station there, like how. You go in at 2 a.m, same guy there. Yeah. You come back at like 3 p.m, guy's still there. It's like, man, like, it's like, what are you doing? I work. Like, that's what I do, man. And like, I came, and it's like, that's someone that was just like, based on my own individuality, will succeed. And he's doing it. So I think that that's why, and I guess we could segue into this. That's why I hate identitarian politics, right? Why do I care that guy looks like different than me or worships a different person than me or maybe he's gay and like has a different sexual preference? I don't care at all. Yeah. And I think that what you're starting to see is because this like the identitarian politics and like the cultural Marxism, like intersectionality, right, which we're familiar with through debate. I think what you end up seeing is like now we're starting to see a pushback on the right where you see like the Richard Spencers of the world like, oh, we need a country for white people. No, we don't. I don't care. Like
I would love to watch that country.
It's like maybe go find it. Like get out of ours. Like go have at her, man. There's a lot of ice up north. Good luck. But I mean, I don't get that game that's being played. We focus on all of that, and it's one of these things with like debate and with the university that. These constant claims for diversity, I just don't get, because to me, the diversity that's important is diversity of ideas. Now, you assume you get to the diversity of ideas from, you came from a different background, or you're different religion, or you have a different ethnicity, or a different economic stance. But if everyone, you get all these people that have all those differences, but they all agree. That's not diversity that matters. And I think that's what you're seeing a lot, like in the debate community, was a hyper scale of that, but in academia in general, like where the studies are crazy, it's showing like how it used to be university employees were like 5-1 Democrat to Republican. Now it's like 17-1. Yeah. And there's these efforts to censor. Again, it's like we were talking about racism. You don't even have to try. You might not think, well, I'm censoring right-wing opinions, but you're not getting access to them. And the entire idea of academia, to me, was the diversity is good because when you argue against someone who's against your ideas, it makes your ideas stronger. Plus, you might learn something. You might learn that you're wrong.
The thing is, if you're smart and right-wing, you don't stay in academia. You go work in a corporation somewhere.
Yeah, but why?
Make way more money. Right. And it's not just a hospitable environment. You're just probably going to be able to make more money and live your, like, capitalist kind of, like, ethos that you embody.
I don't know. Place. But then why was it not that bad before? What's changed then about that?
Two is I don't think professor our salaries have gone up, and maybe at the very top level for the most part, but
administration though.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's dominated by left wing. They make tons of money.
An administrator, then yeah.
And by the way, why is administrator like? If you look at those numbers,
yeah,
there's like more administrators than professors now.
I agree.
What the heck is going on?
I don't know. It's a nightmare.
You know what it is?
College system
it's just there's so much money they don't know what to do with. It's just like we're robbing these kids of their future.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let me get my buddy in on this. You're gonna, it's like it's.
No, I agree, 100%. There needs to be a total reform of like the collegiate system.
But and then the danger is once we have this and like we start separating people into these groups, right? Now I call it cultural Marxism. People get upset with that, but it's intersectionality. That's what it is.
Sort of. So here's the thing. It's one of those things where I think everybody wants to agree with you and be like, it shouldn't matter who you are or what your body represents in any sort of space and place. It depends on the ideas and what we have and use them from pretty much any experiential knowledge that you have and have learned through everything you've done and dealt with. However, it is also important to acknowledge that if we don't tend to at least be aware, we will tend to privilege whatever sort of like voice has the most power historically in a situation. So like maybe we'll hire white guys, for instance, and not actually think about it, but we'll just be like, that logic always makes more sense to me.
See, I don't know. I think you see the opposite of that, right? Like one of the things that came, like for example, with Uber, right?
Yeah.
It turned out that Uber, because you couldn't see who you were picking up, they ended up picking up a lot of more black people. Black people were saying like, far more likely to get an Uber in New York City than a taxi. Yeah. And the reason was because the skin color was totally taken out of it, right? Like it was like a free market solution to it. And the taxi kind of corporations got upset about that. But certainly you're right. Racism exists, right? Like that's certainly true. But the problem is like there's this idea of like, well, everyone's an oppressor or an oppressed, and you could delineate it through all these different categories, such as race or religion or...
I think you're thinking about it too much when you come to those categories.
Well, gender. Gender and race, those are two big ones. And, like, certainly religion would be one. Like, that's the argument. Like,
I think there's a scale of oppression and oppressee and everyone in different degrees.
Well, that's just it, right? And so, like, let's take race, for example.
I don't
like,
think there's an easy yes solution.
You could say...
Do I feel super oppressed? No.
I feel totally confident saying in probably 90% of areas that if the darker you are, the shittier situation you're going to have stereotype with police.
Yeah.
Seems pretty reasonable to me. That seems, but there are areas where it could be advantageous, such as a lot of academia, like debate, no doubt. Politics, no doubt. If you could use it, like everybody knows it. Like, for example, just take women. Like, I found it hilarious when, like, people were saying, like, even right-wing people were being like, now, when Trump debates Hillary, he has to be careful how he shakes her hand because you don't want to come off as being too aggressive to a woman. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, the real way to not be bigoted towards her would be to treat her like you would a male. Like, you're not sitting there thinking like, geez, I have to shake her hand differently because she's a woman. And that's the kind of stuff I'm talking. Like, we have to be honest. There are disadvantages and advantages to all of these categories in different situations. Now, there could be far more disadvantages in some areas than advantages. But the problem, the solution to that...
I will never have to walk down the street without worrying about, like, some dude randomly raping me. A woman will have to do that. An advantage they might have one day is like if they're part of the 0.001% that runs for office, they may get some votes.
Well, no, that's not.
I
but
think
that's
the
a gross.
trade-offs are like very evident and clear.
How about
like,
this? As a woman,
body...
your chances of getting custody of a child are through the roof. Many people would argue that having access to their children is the most important thing in life. So in that most important thing, women are heavily advantaged.
Yeah, so there's probably areas that you can be advantaged in and disadvantaged in other areas, but that doesn't make any of these things right.
Well, I get it, but you're saying...
No, but the thing is, we need to acknowledge these things so that we can actually take, good actions to do that. So maybe if I'm a judge and I'm like, I'm going to give this to the wife, for instance, then I think to myself, am I being biased in the situation? I can then critically reflect on my own inherent biases to then say, oh, maybe the male has a better case. Maybe I need to listen to it. Maybe I need to remove myself.
But now you run the risk of the judge giving it to the man just despite the stereotype of giving it to the woman.
You just need to acknowledge the stereotypes that you do have so that you can at least be as close to
that's just another way of saying we should stop focusing on them.
No, we should think about it. We should think about our inherent stereotypes so that we can make better informed decisions.
But that's different than
that's the same thing when you're just should I just watch the news or should I critically interrogate what's on the news? Or two of those same things.
Right, but the problem is what we see end up happening is then once we focus on it, then that focus becomes we end up saying all kinds of crazy things like we have this intersectionality where we say things like, oh well, we need to treat people different based on to counter the historic abuse. We now need to treat people different based on. That's what intersectionality is. That's why you can criticize Baby It's Cold Outside if you're a feminist as a rapist song, but not Big Pimpin', because the idea is, oh, well, the oppressor, wrote the Baby It's Cold Outside song. So
these are logical super extremes. So in every group, so say I'm an active feminist, doesn't mean I'm the crazy all dudes need their dicks cut off kind of feminist in a lot of shapes.
No.
I can still say that I think women should be paid the exact same amount as men.
Right.
I think that their voices should be heard just as much in a law courtroom setting that's not pertaining to children. I think that they should get raises in the same amount of vein and not have to deal with a bunch of just random other
you could say
terrible things that I think we both agree on.
I
don't think we can always say that the most extreme point of the position justifies the norm of saying hey, maybe we should live.
But what you're arguing is technically what you're arguing. I disagree with. I think you're arguing for equality. You're saying that we should all have equal opportunity. And when we're talking about
a
governmental,
we should work towards it. I think it's an ideal.
Well, no, I don't even think. I think that should happen immediately. Yeah. I think the law should be colorblind and genderblind.
Yes.
With very few exceptions, if you're talking about just things that are literally biological differences, you might have, but basically, but we see that it's not. We know that the law's not, right? And that's all we could ask of our government. Now, we as individuals can make choices we want, but when we're talking about the law, you shouldn't be focusing on people's gender or race when you're hiring. But the way you're putting it, you're saying women should be paid as much as men. That's different. That's not equality. That's equity. That's equality of outcome.
No, I mean, if you're doing the same work, for instance.
Right.
So you and I are working the same job, 9 to 5. You're getting paid more for some reason. We have the same intellectual capacity in this random hypothetical future, but you're just getting paid more. I think I can make an argument that, the reason we've worked there the same amount of time, you're getting paid more is something's fucked up.
Okay, right, but that's not the common, when you're talking about the people that advocate intersectionality, and that's a lot of the progressives, that's a lot of people that, one of the first things they say is, gender pay gap. Well, it turns out that the gender pay gap is an argument for the equality of outcome, not the equality of opportunity, because when you look at all the factors that go into it, it's not just so simple as women make 79 cents to the dollar. It's actually, there's all sorts of factors.
Everyone has to make those crazy factors and claims into easier to understand sentences because you can't start a politically active campaign to be hey, people, stop being shitty to women if you're going to be all right, let's look at economic complexities starting in chapter 1.
But then you lead it.
It's going to be the world's worst social revolution of all time.
But then we have Kristen Gillibrand.
In the beginning, there was the economy.
But then you just don't make the. Then you don't make, if you're not willing to do the nuanced argument, then you don't make.
Well, the nuanced argument happens, and it happens in different places and spaces, but
But then why is the trope still out there by people with power? Obama cites that.
Cites what?
79 cents to the dollar. He cited that, right? Kristen Gillibrand's out there. What's the future? The future is women. The future is intersectionality. What are you talking about? If someone stood up and said, and this is why it's bad, well, it's bad on face value, but what you're starting to see is the other side saying it. Now you get, like, people are like, no, the future is men. The future is white people.
Okay, those
now look at
a
this.
little bit much.
Well, both sides are. That's the problem. Like, once you justify...
Sure. The extremes on both sides can always be the worst.
But the extremes...
there's no opening the door to it.
But the extremes on the left are gaining power. That's extreme. And we see it in academia.
The extremes on the right have been gaining power.
Like what?
Trump?
What? How is that an extreme? Trump's not an extreme.
He's far of the extreme category. I don't know if I would call him super right.
Okay, well that
in that way, but like the left version that says, "Hey, everyone should like have the same sort of access to things," might not be like crazy socialism, but that might just mean that like.
But that's not what they're saying.
Voices that are being over the top.
They're saying things like, "How many times did you hear this in debate? Why aren't there more women in debate? Why aren't there more women in STEM?" We need to make it so there are more women in STEM. Why?
Well, there's a lot of like very well, it's just a cultural thing too.
Right.
To be able to
so why should the government
if women are going to feel safe in a given location or place, then they're probably not going to go into those locations or places.
Well, I don't know that it's about safety as much as
if your STEM degree is a bunch of like bro-y dudes making a bunch of like we're bro-y dude kind of things.
Is that the way STEM engineers are?
There's been some articles out there that are just like there's a lot of like institutions such as like high parts of engineering, high parts of computer sciences that are just like boys clubs so that women don't feel like welcome into those places.
I've seen physical evidence of people at high levels of engineers in places like Google getting fired because they had the audacity to say, hey, there are biological differences between men and women. It just turns out that I think here are ways we can increase women participation in STEM, but a lot of it has to come down to choice.
It depends on the context of that utterance. I don't know enough about it to actually.
Well, that's James Morgan. But certainly, like we know for a fact that when it comes to the top levels of Silicon Valley, they are extremely left wing, and they are extremely catering to like a feminist or intersectionality idea. Could you say that? But if you're going to say that then about like, well, these bro culture, could you say then if I look at a field where it's dominated by women, like nursing, so that's a what's the female equivalent of bro? I don't even know. There's got to be some female equivalent of bro. It's a sister culture? I don't know.
This is the danger zone.
The bra culture? But, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, that's a
sure. Yeah, we should be willing to address all of these things.
But I think that the vast
when you
majority...
get to saying that a culture can be fine being women, for instance, like nurses, that leads you to just then have actual stereotypes that are like, yeah, men, if you are actually inclined to want to go be a nurse, you shouldn't do that because that is...
But no one's saying that. You should have equality in the sense that there are no legal barriers to you becoming a nurse.
Yes.
If you choose not to become a nurse... But you
still have to acknowledge like the cultural barriers that go into the places that are hiring, that are training you, that are doing educational things with you.
But the problem... But how do we know what those barriers are? For example, we could look at like Scandinavia. They have the least cultural barriers. Like they have actually enacted laws trying to make it so it is as close as possible. Like they go so far as like basically enforcing boys play with dolls and stuff at school. Like they're doing everything they can to eliminate all these stereotypes. And you know what they're seeing? More men in STEM, more women in nursing. Even more than like in the United States. So the more that they leveled it out, the more it turns out that biologically, the biggest difference between men and women is men are interested in things and women are interested in people. And so that's how they choose their jobs. It has nothing to do with competency. So it's not like a woman's not smart enough to be an engineer.
But you have to also acknowledge that there are probably cultural things that do play into that in the first place. So
but
if me and all the dudes are out playing with like, I don't know, basketball, for instance, while women are knitting, for instance, this sets up the cultural understanding of like, this is what men do in a certain situation. But if we have what women do in a certain situation, because everyone else is doing those things, you're inherent inclined to fit into those people, means you're probably going to want to do similar things that all of your friends are doing.
But the argument is it more culturally influenced or biologically influenced? And the cultures we
both.
Yeah, but the cultures we see that have do the most to make sure there are as little as possible cultural influence have the biggest...
We don't know enough to say 100% in Scandinavian countries that they are so inclined to be 50-50 that is true. I think that is a wildly improportionate claim. I can fact check this later.
You should fact check it.
100%.
You should fact check it. But the problem is when we start to say that like cultural influence, so then what's the solution to that?
The solution to it?
Yeah, if that is true.
There's no easy solution.
Should the government get involved?
Education. People need to work with a bunch of different people from a bunch of different backgrounds and a bunch of different locations. People need to think self-reflexively about a bunch of things. So, like, am I being stereotypical? Am I being racist right now? Am I being homophobic right now? Am I being sexist, ageist, whatever you want to call it at the end of the sentence?
But wait. So that's different. Like, that's different. You were saying, like, people culturally choose not to go into a bro community. That's different than, like, the person... So you're saying then the actual engineers...
No, we need to break up the communities. Well, not break up the communities. I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it. But, like, if everyone is willing to be more chill in different situations and know when they're acting effed up towards, like, say, women, for instance, that is a positive step that makes any space more welcoming for people to come into as opposed to hostile. If this space made me think that you were racist, I would not come here.
Yeah, but... So the implication of that is, like, you're sitting around, like, the entire field of engineering, it's like, engineers might be racist. I don't...
No one's saying engineers might be racist, but, like, if you go to your engineer class and there are 90 dudes in there and one woman, you're probably going to look around and be like, this is not my scene.
Maybe not.
That is not the culturally accepting space.
But how do we know that has to do with culture and not just that literally 90 people chose that only one woman wanted to choose?
Well, it's a cultural thing. You can't know with scientific validity. But you can make predictive claims and gestures to it. Also, you can just use some, like, pretty much logic to deduce that...
My logic would deduce if there is no legal barriers, and especially in a situation where people are being encouraged, like women...
If you walked into a black church right now,
right,
and you stood there in the middle of the room, only white guy, and you just, like, looked around for a second, would you feel like you were in the right spot? How would you feel?
I would probably feel out of place.
Okay, so
if my goal in life was to be a soul singer in a choir, I don't think that I would go and say, "Oh, no, I've changed my mind because people don't look like me." But if I was a woman who wanted to be an engineer,
it's one of those things where, like, these are things that you still have to have, like, a cost-benefit analysis of when you're in those spaces and places. And that is something that shouldn't be the case. Now, does that mean that that's the huge decline of why we don't see more female engineers? I can't say that with certainty.
See, but you're also ignoring that we celebrate, like, the idea of female engineer. Like, it's considered like you're basically a hero. It's the same way, by the way, it's also the same way with, like, male nurses. Like, the nursing field is begging men to be nurses because it's just, if you're working, you have to bathe a man or something. A lot of times it's more comfortable to have a guy doing it or things of that age. Sometimes just biologically it makes sense. It's the same with engineering. Like, they're begging women to come into it. Mm-hmm. And I think, like, and the other thing is we always talk, like, it's always talked about, like, in the sense of those jobs like engineering. No one ever talks about, like, all these crappy, like, crab fisherman jobs, you know, or truck drivers that are super dangerous that are dominated by men. You don't hear the intersectionality people saying, like, hey, why aren't there more women in crab fishing?
The question is, who are these intersectionality people? Because that's just like a general term.
It's like the feminist.
The feminist. Who are these feminists? Because there's a shit ton of them, and they all believe different things.
Well, that dominate the humanities and academia. Okay. That are progressives.
Any two feminists in pretty much academia that sit down together will have disagreements about the way in which things work.
Right, but they all believe in a tyrannical male patriarchy.
Some might not even believe it's the world's tyrannical thing of all time. They might just believe that it's pretty bad.
Okay.
And it needs to be fixed. When you use the word tyrannical, you make it sound like there's this overarching
That's the word they use.
Like the most evil.
Why is it guy?
What's patriarchy? You said the word they,
right?
As in you're homogenizing this diverse and different group of people who all believe different things that fall under the guise that there should be some sort of equality or at least safe communal spaces in which everybody has access to.
No, but no. The problem is when you look at that and you say, well, you can't apply this label because there's all these different thoughts, then I could make the same argument with anything you would say, like about engineers.
Yeah.
Well, it's unfair for you to say engineers are bro community because each individual engineer.
You could totally say that too.
Okay, well then what's the point of even bringing it up? There is no bro culture because each bro is an individual. So for you to assert that there's a culture would prove...
no, there's certain trends that you can see.
Right, just like there are in the feminists.
Yeah, and I said what the trend is.
Yeah, right, the trend is most feminists believe that there is a system of oppression towards women. Yeah. Right?
Yes.
Okay. And that system of oppression means that it's men oppressing women.
Sometimes it's women oppressing women.
Or okay. But that's the idea of the patriarchy. Most feminists believe in that.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I'm addressing. Those are the people I'm addressing. Those people that address that, it's always selective. Well, not always. It's mostly selective, right? Where you see them saying, well, we want more women engineers. But they don't say, hey, it's unfair that the majority of combat deaths are men. We want more women dying in war. Right? Okay. You don't see that? And it's always selective.
People usually don't tend to select the bad parts.
Right, but if you're interested in equality, that's what you would be doing.
Sure, they can say that too on the side.
But they don't.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad idea.
Because the reason they don't is because they're playing identitarian politics. They're breaking people up based on groups. So now you're saying women are X, men are Y, and they want their side women to win because women are oppressed, therefore they want them to have the good stuff. And they don't say, we want it to be equal across the board.
Yeah, but no one when they're coming out to say, hey, let's have equality, should be like, we want the bad stuff too. That, again, is just not how, like, you would revolutionary get people to join your side. Or try to, like, get people to be like, let's make this social movement a thing.
Well, then
join my social movement. You can die in war, too.
But then your argument is for intellectual dishonesty to dupe people into...
It's not even intellectual dishonesty.
It would be like me saying...
No one's saying that they don't want the bad stuff. They're just saying, let's focus on the good stuff in areas where we can make positive, productive
But they're not just saying that, because the same feminists, for example, they're not out there saying, hey, wait a minute, why are these laws set up so women get custody of children way more? In fact, they're defending those laws.
I'm sure there's some feminists out there that make the arguments.
There's not many.
But the thing is...
Like National Organization of Women and all these groups, they argue against men's groups that try to change those policies. They fight against them. So, like, the problem is, like, if you want total equality, then you advocate for total equality. You don't say total equality, but we'll only focus on the stuff that benefits us, because that's not equality.
I agree with you 100% there.
And I just think, I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is because, again, I think that this is something that you see, it's not part and parcel with socialism, but a lot of the people that end up being people like democratic socialism or like progressives that believe in this mindset. And it's not, look, I understand you could be like, yeah, okay, a couple crazy people, but it's not a couple crazy people.
Okay.
It's becoming very influential people, like people running for office.
Okay.
Like you had Hirono say, men need to step up and shut up. Like, that's kind of...
That's a contradictive sentence.
Well, I didn't get that either.
Yeah, that doesn't really make sense.
Like, oh, sit down and shut up. I don't have anything to say. I just wanted to stand up here. I don't know, but I'm just saying it becomes, that's why I'm against, like, I'm all for saying I believe stereotypes exist. I'm all for acknowledging, like, when people are acting poorly of those stereotypes, but I just think that we focus on it so much, right? And to me, it's just like crappy things happen.
I don't think we focus on it too much.
Oh, I definitely do.
I think that you might, because it's one of your, like, talking
points.
No,
I focus on it very little, actually.
Who's focusing on it every day?
A lot of people.
Where?
Well, like, again, this is like, if you're in any feminist class, you're focused on it every day.
Okay.
Or any class that believes in intersectionality, you're focused on it every day.
Okay.
Or if you're a politician that's a progressive, you're focused on it every day.
Every day. So
yes!
Bernie Sanders every day is being like, where are the women at? Just out loud.
He says it all the time. That's a big part of his platform.
Then what is wrong with saying, hey, let's have a more inclusive, better place?
Because it's then you're setting people up like in an identitarian sense, right? And we're starting to see more of a divide, for example, Republican and Democrat, where it's like it's now becoming kind of gendered parties, right? That's not a good thing. Like the theoretical idea of the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party, like just take...
But there's a bunch of practical ways to like look at this though, because it's just like there's one party that says, hey, we're going to at least go to bat to make sure there's some sort of form of equality for pretty much most people, and then there's another party that comes out and just like, we have a Supreme Court candidate that may or may not have raped women. These are the instances where party lines
wait. First off, to assert that just because Kavanaugh may or may not have raped a woman means they're not for equality is absurd.
Okay, but no,
because I could say Bill Clinton may have...
But no, these are the instances that voters consume language because you're talking about a party line divided on gender. These are the ways in which people begin to like conceive of the parties themselves.
Right, and it's because...
these instantiations.
But the reason that people believe what you just said is...
that's how fucking politics works.
Right, because that's what the Democrat... Which is why I'm arguing we shouldn't be focusing on things like that.
Okay, then don't focus on things like that. That's all you have to do. But
no,
if
you
one
have
side
to point
is going
out,
to come out and be like, hey, our side does good, productive things for people of color, women, who do you think you're going to vote for? the people that come out and say, we do good things for people of color, women, versus the other side that's just like...
Well, that is a problem that the Republicans have. They need to be articulating why their policies would be good for people of color and women. But my argument is that we shouldn't be focusing on like the idea that like, oh, this party hates women because of X. Like that's not good.
But the thing is, if you are allowing yourself to get pigeonholed into that corner, that is not a good place to be in. As
well,
a sort of,
I will do just fine when I run, because I can articulate
GOP individual.
I can articulate why my positions are good for women and all sorts of people, all sorts of groups. But like the Kavanaugh thing, like what do you think about that? You think that guy may have raped women? That's
I think the outrage to it and the willingness for the GOP to not to pick someone else is more of the problem.
Oh my goodness! You couldn't be more wrong. Okay. This is something that I'm actually like.
Okay, I'm gonna run the restroom really quick.
Yeah, I'll rant for a minute. I'll get a drink too, dude. Like to me, this was the biggest issue with the Democrats. That like I can't believe it. The idea of getting rid of the idea of innocent until proven guilty and due process. That's unbelievably crazy. I can say with as much confidence that I guess Kavanaugh may or may not have raped a woman, something that he wasn't even accused of, but by the way, from any of the women that came out, as I could say literally about any human being in the world. I suppose that Cory Booker may or may not have raped a woman, as could have Hirono, as could have H.W. Bush, and on and on. We can't judge people based off just of an accusation, particularly when it becomes hyperbolic. Oh, he may have raped a woman, when that wasn't even the accusation. There was never an accusation that he raped anyone. Yeah, I mean, this is just, for me, this is one of the biggest issues because our country is founded on the idea of, like, English common law. And one of the foundations of our country is the respect for personal, individualism and ideas such as you have the right to due process and innocent until proven guilty. This is why, like, when I criticize socialism, it sounds reasonable, right? Like, you could make it sound reasonable, but the core fact of socialism is a collective mindset, whereas I think the idea of the West and the United States is an individual mindset. So basically what you're saying is, this guy as an individual should have been sacrificed because, as the group said, the Democrats said, well, there could be shadiness behind it, so then he should be sacrificed. Is that really...
Did you watch his testimony where
yes.
he pretty much was yelling a bunch of random stuff, had the world's
yes.
pretty much worst testimony of all time?
No, I thought he did exactly what he needed to.
He was over the top and just yelling.
He did exactly what he needed to, because had he came out, they were saying that he orchestrated gang rape parties, right? His kids were hearing this. His family's getting death threats.
Okay.
Now, we're allowed to say, oh my God, Christine Blasey Ford's family was getting death threats? That's so terrible. No wonder she acted so emotionally.
Him and his family receiving death threats.
Okay,
is also not cool.
So then, but he's supposed to just come out and like, do you understand that just like Clarence Thomas, right? Like, no matter, he could come out and prove himself 100% innocent. There are people that for the rest of their life will think that he's some kind of rapist. Like, that is worse. I would rather, to me, that's bigger than losing any job. Right? Like, what do we have at the end of the day other than the people that care about us and our reputation when we die? This guy's now slandered as a rapist, and for what? What evidence is there? None.
Well, the slander is going to be there for the rest of his life.
Right.
And it's also, I wouldn't call it necessarily slander because there was no, like, actual court process or court hearing of it. There were multiple women that came out and just being like, this dude was acting inappropriate to me at parties. And
three.
The rapiest way possible.
We have three. No, yes. Rapiest way possible.
Oh, sure. And yeah, that's probably not the correct way to phrase it, which I apologize.
I get that. I get what you're saying.
But no, this should be at least enough to raise flags of enough suspicion to have like a long drawn out process, and maybe see if he's actually worth having.
So the fact that
shotgunning through a vote, just because your party's going to lose, when we could potentially have somebody very terrible at the forefront of
so if you were very concerned,
which is the last institution that only what does the Supreme Court run off of? It runs off of respect and mutual understandings of laws and institutions, that they are redeemable and that they are good for anyone to follow and obey laws in the first place. Now, if you have somebody that puts that under some sort of interrogation, then you definitely have.
Okay, so there's tons to say that. That's first. Yeah. When a Democrat wins next and gets support of justice, the day before the vote, two Republican ladies come out and say, yeah, he raped me, or she.
Get rid of him.
Get rid of that person. Yes. And then when they
put
a new person up, that's it?
I would say have a long process in which he actually goes through a trial. I would not rush any votes through to be like, oh, this guy needs to get through. Because if you do make the wrong decision, you're setting a pretty dangerous precedent.
If it's near an election,
I don't even care.
Okay, secondly, so you don't have a problem with the fact that clearly that Feinstein sat on that allegation for like 3 months.
Oh, that's totally bad too.
Okay.
The two wrongs don't make a right. These are just other parts where you can just be like, here's something else that's negative. You don't
see what this is leading to.
Yeah,
your situation is a system where literally we have people sit on allegations till the last day to try to draw things out. So let's say
that's what's happening now.
Let's say 3 months. Let's say then you
have FBI investigate.
Okay,
all hands off.
We'll even give them 3 months.
Yes.
Okay, and then it comes out. There's no proof
because the Scottish nominations are for life.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
There's no reason that this needs to be a rushed sort of venture in the first place.
So let's just take Cory Booker becomes president and he nominates Anderson Cooper to the Supreme Court. Right,
okay.
And then the day before the vote, I don't mind Anderson that much.
Really I don't mind.
Sharp, sharp dresser.
I like his hair.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, but so he gets nominated. Whoever, right? Yeah. We'll say him. And the day before the vote, a couple of Republicans come out and they're like, "Yeah, we actually had these allegations for a couple women that said that he groped them 40 years ago." So you say, okay, let's have an investigation. Let's say it's 3 months even. That
FBI uncuffed.
After the day that investigation ends, vote.
Yes.
3 more women came out.
I would say once the FBI investigation.
No. Wait. Why? 3 different women came out.
Because if you're going to sit on information twice, that's probably way too much.
Oh! Yeah. Sitting once, okay, but twice not. No. That's ridiculous.
At some point, you could just keep being like, oh, this is infinitely regressive.
That's right.
However, you should at least be able to say, hey, there are rape allegations against a fucking Scottish judge.
There were rape allegations against him. There were allegations that he groped and potentially attempted to rape someone.
Okay.
That's still...
Sorry, so much better.
But
here are those things. Is like we should 100% be willing to set aside a large chunk of time to be like, this person might actually be evil.
Okay. Why? So what's the reason
we don't have to run it back again and again if people are willing to come out? You make it clearly evident that there's going to be like a 3 to 5 to 6 month investigation into this person. And
that's what the process is. It's clearly evident. Hey, we're looking at the FBI does that every time someone's nominated. They say, we're being clear here. We're looking into all this dirt. If you have something to say about his dirt, come out and say it now. And then they didn't, and then they waited till the last day, and you say, well, now they should look at it again.
Dirt was dropped. You still have to have it.
Okay, so then the second time when dirt's dropped again.
But the thing is, if the person's not willing to come forward until there's a large enough fuss going on and then more people are willing to come forward, that means that the process itself is the problem. It's not necessarily that, hey, this Supreme Court has been nominated, I need to come up and drop all of the dirt that I have on this person. If they're not willing to listen to it in the first place, you need to have a system that's just like...
The bank ladies want you to move so she can see the tree for a minute. That's all you get! I hope that this is still running. I don't even know. Okay, you can move back.
Okay.
There's Paula happy. I hope she's happy. Anyways, oh yeah, they dig my cow painting too. Our neighbor gave
that's
that.
Pretty cool cow.
My neighbor Mike gave that to us. But every argument you just made there, I could argue for the second go around too. Why not? There, you have no distinction as to why.
Also, if okay, so the thing is, at some point, the FBI will also be able to punish those that come forward on false pretenses.
They didn't this time.
Yeah, but there should be a better system in check so that we don't allow this to
what could that system be?
The
FBI comes out and goes, calling all potential rape victims. You have 6 months to come talk to us. That just seems insane.
No, you would say that if there's any allegations or anything straightforward, come forward now. There's been some already made. We're going to look into it more thoroughly.
But that's what they did.
Instead of doing just their basic background check, which is the first thing that they did.
But I don't understand though. So tell me this couldn't theoretically happen. I'm a woman who's been, or God, doesn't matter. I've been sexually assaulted by someone who's running for Supreme Court, but I don't want to say anything.
Okay.
And then I see that a bunch of women come forward, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to say anything because surely he'll be held accountable for them. And then the FBI comes out after the investigation you're talking about and says, actually, we didn't find any evidence, so the vote's going to happen. And I say, geez, I now have to step forward.
You know what? I'm also okay with having to wait even longer.
Okay, then it never ends. So you just draw it out.
There's not going to be an infinite amount of people that are going to come out of the woodwork.
What? We had Avenatti come out and say that this guy led gang rape parties that his client went to, was victimized, continued to go back as an adult lady, watch other ladies get gang raped. That was a serious allegation that was leveled because they thought it would keep it. You don't think that you couldn't dredge more stories like that out of the woodwork?
Okay. I mean, it's just a question of, like, voting for a Scottish figure seems way too, I don't know, it seems flawed inherently with, like, how the setup currently works of just, like, rush it through under one president or under one Senate.
Well, no, I don't think that that's the problem. It's flawed because, look, I know that an old roommate of mine, whose name I won't mention, I know that he had a huge problem with Merrick Garland, right? I agree with him. I think that what the Republicans did, you know what I'm talking about? That's ridiculous. It was ridiculous. Obama had the right to make that appointment, period. Yeah. And what the Republicans did was ridiculous. Now, what the Democrats did was even more heinous because they didn't just do that. They then weaponized sexual assault allegations, which is a really crappy thing to do.
But one person, if you would consider the late dropping of the information that weaponization is not what everyone else was doing, which is, hey, I have this new information that says you might actually be a very terrible person when it comes to women, at least in your past. I need to actually.
So we had three. We might as well talk. So you had three stories basically, and then a bunch of ones that now people are getting in trouble because it turned out there were no details and they were totally made up. But you had Blasey Ford, right, and then who was the second woman? Ramirez was her name, and then Swanlek was the third. Mm-hmm. Ramirez's allegations was basically this guy whipped it out at a party in college. Now there's a question of whether or not that. I mean, seriously, there's a question of that's the Blasey Ford. That's a deal breaker for anything. Like, because that sounds like potential rape. Like he was attempting to rape, if it's true, obviously. Yeah. I don't know if whipping it out when you're 19, 40 years ago is that reason?
But it's part of a trend. It's like what I was talking about with racism earlier. It's not just a general one-off kind of thing. There's a bunch of small things that like add up to like the character profile.
But wait, so that's two.
When he gets drunk, does very inappropriate things with women.
Okay, that's two. The third was this gang rape story that could be laughed out almost at face value. So now we have two. Now we're down to two. Then we had a bunch of other that turned out they were lies, right? Like, for example, the person that said that he confronted him in St. Louis on a boat or something. Yep, that turned out that was a lie. Then you had a person that got in trouble because they said he raped her in a car. Well, that was a lie. But you say, well, we have to value that. All that's painting a picture. But we now turn out that more than half of them were lies. Okay. So now we got two that we're possibly talking about. We don't have proof for either. But let's say you're saying that
we can hear those claims. They should be fully
but let's say the Blasey Ford
they weren't actually fully investigated.
Okay, let's say the Blasey Ford.
Also a true statement that is a travesty that is now a blemish on the Scottish.
How is it?
Because the amount of people that the FBI had access to investigate in the 2-week span for this investigation were severely cartelled.
Who else? The people that said it and the people they said were there. You want them to talk to hearsay witnesses?
From different individuals that we are going to totally look into later. Of people being like, nobody ever talked to me.
No, that's so ridiculous. I heard that Aaron did this. Oh, the FBI is talking. Now, a victim. Someone says
Supreme Court of the United States.
It doesn't matter. The person says this person did this to me. Here were the people that were there to witness. Okay, we'll talk to you. We'll talk to the Supreme Court nominee, and we'll talk to the people you say were witnesses to it. Every single person other than you denies your account. So now, wait. There are other people that I talked to, after that said they remember hearing about it, so you should have to interview them too. So they go in and this person goes, yeah, I think she said something about that once. Did you see it? No. Did you see physical proof? Nah, she seemed emotional. Okay. That's it. How is interviewing that person going to help anything?
No, it just, look, because it's not just about what happens with a given specific interview. It's about the total image that you send when you're not willing to say, I interviewed the whole range of possible people surrounding a particular case because we needed to rush sort of like a Scottish yes, you're wrong on this one.
It's not even close. It is clear that this is just the straight up encouragement of weaponizing sexual assault allegation. It is absolutely
First of all,
clear.
Sexual assault has always been used as a weapon against women. Two, this is a context, and men.
What does that have anything to?
Two is this is an instance where we are trying to acknowledge that there's a person in power who actually had that sexual weaponization against a woman in this context. That could get more power, and that we should say, hey, maybe that this is a bad individual that we need to holistically interview and check out to make sure that they are good enough to be on the Supreme Court of the United States, which is a position and nomination for life, instead of trying to nominate this person and rush it through before the elections were going to occur so that you could ensure that this person won their Supreme Court seat.
So two things. One, if the only one that ever came out was Ramirez and said he whipped it out, no other story, is that enough to keep him off the court?
For me, I don't know. I would probably go with no.
Okay. So then why should so then you're just saying that because the accusation was now I'll just skip to the second question. You acknowledge that at least some of the stories against him were fake.
Yeah.
Okay. So would you acknowledge it would be easy to fake stories in the future?
Yeah.
And would you be willing to admit that if
we
could never be totally sure.
But the thing is, with every other justice, how many other people came out and were immediately like, this guy is a potential rapist?
Because they thought Roe v. Wade was good. Why did, if okay, so the trope is, what incentive would people have to make up a story like this, right? Well, you just admitted that people did.
Yeah. But why didn't they do it in the?
Because Roe v. Wade wasn't
situation on lock, immediately get overturned and be like, oh, there's this giant thing going on.
Because
having a conversation, maybe women were more willing to come forward because it seemed like there was a better climate or culture or atmosphere.
But maybe women were more willing to lie because it seems like the climate's more accepting to it now too, right?
Okay, but we shouldn't just base every form of human communication on the possibility of someone lying.
No, what we should do.
That existence seems very brutish.
That's what, but you're exactly doing that. You're saying that people should be held basically under suspicion of being guilty until they prove their innocence.
No, but if people come out with allegations against you, we should thoroughly test those allegations to make sure.
It should be the impetus is on the people alleging to give some kind of proof that the event happened.
There also needs to be an impetus that says, hey, here's my proof. This is a witness testimonial. Then somebody steps in and says, we're not going to just take 2 weeks and shotgun our way through this to make sure everyone's lying. Hey, you talked to them, didn't talk to them.
What witnesses were not talked to? What witnesses were not talked to?
We will discuss this and look into it later. I don't know.
There were none. There were people that said they heard.
You're just wrong on this.
I'm not.
We're going to do this later.
Let's take Blasey Ford, right?
Okay.
How many witnesses did she say there were?
I don't know. This was in
She said, obviously, the guy who did it.
Yeah.
And then his friend, whose name I forget. But there were 2 in the room with her, right?
Yeah.
So those 2. And then there was another guy downstairs. And then her friend that was a girl.
Yeah.
4. All 4 interviewed. Who else was there to be interviewed? They said, who drove you home? I don't remember.
Look, this is one of those things where we can rediscuss the details of the case as we read.
At the bar!
Sure.
Yeah. As everyone's like, shut up, we're watching the game, we don't give a shit
about like factual accuracy on this to just be let's have this actual discussion.
But that's just it, but you're certain, right? You're certain. In the Blasey Ford, you're certain there were witnesses that weren't interviewed.
I am certain that there were enough detailed reports that were just like, this thing's getting pushed through, this thing is easy Hail Mary of just like Republicans are all going to vote yes, get this guy in, Dems are all going to vote no, and that the FBI interview of 2 more extra weeks initiated by Trump was also supposed to be an affair that's like, we're not going to interview all of the actors.
But they did! Available. The only people they didn't interview were people that were like, yeah, I heard of this. That's it. That has nothing. That's not going to be used in any court trial whatsoever.
Sure.
That's hearsay.
Sure.
They interviewed every direct witness and every direct allegation. Okay. And the problem is, like, you admit that it was wrong for Feinstein to sit on this. She at least weaponized these sexual assault allegations.
Sure.
We have to.
I don't know.
As bad as look, if there's one thing that's possible. Like, as heinous as sexual assault.
For Feinstein,
all right,
so she wouldn't receive my vote in the first place.
But certainly you didn't see any of the Democrats on the Senate committee being like, this is freaking appalling that you did this, Feinstein. They were more than happy to be like, yeah, we're right there with you.
Well, I mean, sure, they may have done that in private, but, like, in public, like, what condemnations do they need to make? They still
that
played
it's
the party
disgusting,
game.
Miss
Sure.
Ford, that you had to go through this because that woman
So-
sitting right there that's in charge of our party did this to you.
Okay.
You didn't want your name out in public, but she did that. She sat on the allegation. See, Ford's claim was the reason she
Yeah,
went...
but the thing is, no party does that. The Republicans don't do that.
Yeah, and there would be scumbags in that situation. I would call them out.
Yeah, sure.
They're
I can do the same thing.
But wait, show me the
This is
instance.
irrelevant in this instance.
Show me the instance of the Republicans weaponizing sexual assault or belittling it in the way that Feinstein did, in a sense where it's like, oh, we outed some potential sexual assault victim because we wanted to use it as a political ploy. I can't think of one. And when they do, I'll be disgusted and call them out for it. Even if I'm in Congress, if I would be a Republican, I would be like, that is one of the most disgusting.
One of the justifications for the war in Iraq was to liberate women.
Well, that's far different. That's far different than saying my political opponent that I'm trying to keep out of some position of power.
So it's not that.
It is. It's very. You know that it's very different. Both sides play the
Sure.
Look, that card, the women and children card. Both sides play that, and it's stupid. Most of the time, George Carlin said it, right?
I mean,
that politicians are always hiding behind two things: the flag and the children. You know, which is it's garbage. So it gets
another instance of it is there were anti-Hillary no, actually, never mind. That's not a good one.
Dude, like I'm literally. A woman comes to you and is like, I've been sexually assaulted. I really need you to get this information because I think this guy's about to be appointed to Supreme Court, right?
I've been telling everybody.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And if you found out that the person in charge of your party didn't tell you, I'd be like, what did you do? Like, why would you do this? Why would you trivialize sexual assault? I would be outraged. Yeah. And I wouldn't say, well, no party ever voices their... I would be like, this is disgusting. This is
you're totally right. But
they didn't do that.
Both of those things are true.
And the fact that we then know that they're like, everyone said with Ford, well, she has to be telling the truth because there's no incentive to lie. Well, we now know people did lie. So there clearly was an incentive. Sure. And she's got $1 million and stuff such sensitive. So there is an incentive. Does that mean she lied? No.
That doesn't mean you can blame her for coming forward.
No. But the idea that there's no incentive. No, but the idea that there's no incentive, clearly there's an incentive. Even if you don't get $1, if you legitimately think Roe v. Wade's going to be overturned, there's probably a pretty damn big incentive for a lot of people that value that issue as very important to say, I'll take one for the team. You know what I mean? Like, there's an incentive.
Sure.
This idea, there's no incentive. But, yeah, to me, it's you can't, the impetus is on, you can't have this mentality of guilty until proven innocent. I just don't buy it. I thought that was a terrible thing. We'll end up here soon. What do we got? Okay. We're going 3 hours. Anything else? Oh yeah, I had a couple other things. So you're a Philly fan?
Yeah.
What's wrong with mascots in Philly? You got the Fanatic.
You mean the greatest mascots of all time? Are you not telling me that the rest of the world now cares about hockey for some reason? Even if they don't watch hockey, they know who Gritty is.
Did you know?
One of the smartest.
Do you want to hear something crazy? Did you know that the Red Wing logo started to get used by white nationalist groups, and they had to come out and be like,
nationalist groups also tried to take Pizza Hut. Well, they did.
Isn't that crazy? So. What kind of PR crap are you in? Is your Pizza Hut or the Red Wings what are you doing?
Stop taking our logo.
Yeah, but yeah.
Why couldn't it have been the vegans?
Yeah, right. Something you could live with. But no, Gritty. And the Fanatic's crazy enough.
Yeah, no.
What next? The Philly Stalker?
I think you really need to get rid of just all the other two mascots. So the Sixers guy, the stupid looking, he could stay.
The Eagle's dumb.
What's his name? Eagle's got to go. I forget his name.
Just get some crazy character.
Yeah,
the Philly Stalker.
I know. Just make it the most absurd photo of all time. Just these big googly eye, weird looking monstrosities all trying to come scare your kids.
Gritty, but I mean, what else could it be like? They could their mascot could be the guy throwing batteries at Santa Claus. The judge, because the Eagle Stadium's the only one with a courthouse.
Yeah.
But see, I'm sure this weekend we'll have plenty of time to talk about this. It's funny because the Eagles fans get trashed as super violent. Yeah. Do you see these videos of Steelers fans? The pregnant lady that the Chargers, it's a pregnant Chargers fan. It's just a picture. And this Steelers fan's got her by the throat. And then there was the headbutt thing. Did you see that?
No.
It went by. Oh my God, I'll show it to you later. It's just two Steelers fans arguing with each other. This dude just, bam, headbutts him after the Broncos. It's brutal. Just puts him down. It's just
that's crazy
another day in Heinz Field, baby. Yeah,
but
I will say that there is this trope. Maybe Philly's worse. I don't know.
We're pretty bad.
But don't cast the stone because
I went to the Stadium Series here with Pens, Flyers, and besides
the
like,
outdoor.
Yeah, besides some random a-holes, everything was totally fine. In Philly, I'm terrified for my Penguins fans because like. Here, at least, I'm a pretty big dude. People won't really want to fight me. Also, I'm black at a hockey game, so everyone's just
everyone assumes like this guy could throw down.
However, in Philly, just like, don't yell too loud, guys. I really don't want to have to fight 12 people tonight.
My favorite event like that, I remember me and a guy who was on the debate team, we went to a Browns game, because I think we were at John Carroll at a debate tournament, and so we... it was a year that the Steelers were like, they had a really good record, and the Patriots had a really good record. So it was like you were cheering for the Browns were playing the Patriots. So we were like, oh, we might as well get tickets to cheer for the Browns. And the Browns were terrible. And it was one of the funnest sporting experiences I ever had. Because one, when you're like walking into like whatever the Browns stadium was, instead of having like a bunch of like t-shirts with the Browns on, all their shirts are like Steelers suck. Like, so it's like no one's even wearing Browns stuff. It's just like screw the Steelers. And they're actually torn. Like, we don't even know if we want to win this game because it'll help the Steelers. Like, it's just hilarious. But I'm sitting like, we're high up and we're sitting with all these Browns fans and they're like drinking. They're hilarious. They're like, this is the year. Or this is the game, man. This is our game. And like the Jumbotron, it keeps having like clips from Star Wars where it's like Darth Vader saying, Luke, I am your father. And I'm just like, what is going on? We hear the Browns quarterback got hurt, and it was the first game Luke McCown played for them. So, like, I'm just listening to all these, like, dudes like, Luke McCown, he's going to take us to victory. This is it. I swear to God, you could look up, I'm sure we could look up the stats and find this game. So the Browns kick off to the Patriots, who run back the kickoff for a touchdown. And all these guys that I sat with for a half hour, they're like, this is our game. Browns are taking that. The Patriots are just like, I knew it. Browns suck. We're going to get blown out. And by the end of the game, it's just me and my buddy sitting there. All the Browns fans are gone. Because it's like a 38-point, lead. It was so funny, though. I'm just
awesome.
Like, poor Browns fans. And I'm a Pirates fan, so I went through years. But baseball's different because you're kind of hanging out.
Pirates still kind of suck, so you're not done going through the years.
Yeah. But like somehow every year the Browns fans think like, this is our year. We got them this year. Yeah, football games are boring to go to anyways. Let's see if there's anything else, Ed, worth talking about.
Gun control, get rid of them all.
Yeah. Oh, here's one. That's a little different. Would you consider running for office?
Yeah.
Would you?
Probably not for like 6 more years. Or maybe even like 10 more years.
See, I'm encouraging even people that I disagree with. That I think like we need to get more like what I would call regular people running. Right? Like it seems like no one like. I don't think I think on one hand it's a mistake to just focus on people's like backgrounds and things like that. But on the other hand, I think that you lose sight of, it's hard to relate to the guy making $12 an hour if you haven't done it for 40 years. Yeah. And so you lose sight of that.
The guy that or it's just like, I've lived in a rich area of a rich suburb with like rich friends, and then went to a rich university where I then went to Washington, D.C., which is like the Disneyland of cities. And
now I'm representing coal miners and truck drivers. Well, that's the irony of Trump too, right? Like, I do think that I don't think either party represents the working class anymore. And I actually think that Bernie's trying. I think that the Democratic Socialists are trying. Again, I disagree with them, but I think that, again, that's another area where I think they're like, look, who the heck's talking about these people? And it's because the Democrats, I think, are too much into the identitarian politics, and they seem to be the party of, like, the really rich and the poor, and then the Republicans still seem to be, like, the business party.
That's what the Dems classify the Republicans as.
Like but that's the idea originally was, first like, I can't believe there are so many people that are like, I hope that the Republicans or Democrats, don't matter whatever side you're on, get wiped out. It's like, well, no, that's very bad. You don't want just, even though I still believe at the top levels of the same party, you really don't want just one party. That's really bad. So I understand the need for both, but the idea before was, right, like, the Republicans were kind of like, free market and business. Yeah. And then the Democrats are like, yeah, but the workers. Yeah. And then that's a good clash. Like, you need people represent.
That's a fun, healthy clash.
Right. Now, you could be crappy.
Now it's not a clash of like, you're a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. You're a Nazi.
Right. But it's like, who's talking? And that's why Hillary, like, that's one of the reasons she lost. Like, she didn't go to all these, like, working class areas. Yeah. She just kind of was like, and so then, like, there are a lot of union people that are, like, going with Trump. Yeah. Which is unheard of. Like, I know.
Yeah, it's kind of absurd.
It's unheard of. Yeah. It's unheard of for union people to be Republican. But they didn't
really was the worst candidate.
Well, she was. She's terrible. Yeah. But they didn't like NAFTA. They don't like the TPP. Yeah. Which toilet paper or something. Yeah,
Trans-Pacific Party.
Yeah. It's like, can you come up with a better name? But, so, like, they end up going with Trump, and... Again, it's a question of whether or not he would help the working class people. Who knows what will happen? But at least he was talking to them. Yeah. So I think it's a strategy for the Democrats are smart to be embracing people like Bernie. And like I don't know why. That's one thing I'll be running as a Republican. I'm like, what are you doing? Why aren't you? I don't understand why they're like not talking to like people like Hispanic people, inner city people, 100%. Women. I don't understand. It's just like their strategy's like, well, we hope we don't lose them too bad. And it makes no sense. Young people, it's another group, right? Like, what's the outreach for the young? In both parts, like, at least, and that's one thing. You had Bernie, which at least, in a weird sense, like, Ron Paul was the same way. Like, these two old white dudes, it's like a bunch of young people, like, getting excited about them. Yeah. When it's like, they're walking out in their walkers, like,
But it's bullshit. I agree.
Yeah, you're like, there's someone that's, so that's one thing you can say about, like, the progressives. It's like Cortez. What's she, like, 30?
No, if I'm a GOP strategist, I 100% say you need to, one, fix the language, make sure you're not offending anybody on accident. Because that seems to be
you're
GOP's
absolutely right.
favorite
Which
strategy.
is why I'll be good. That's one thing I'll say about. I was going to talk about the people, but that's one thing I'll say is I think a lot of people don't understand it, right?
Yeah.
But I'm smart enough. Not smart enough. That's not fair. I've been exposed to it enough that I got a better understanding of it. Whereas if you've never been exposed, you could say stuff out of ignorance.
Yeah.
But Trump should know better. He's been exposed, right?
He's like president for a while now.
It's not even, what? And this might sound really bad for me, too. It's not even the pseudo-racist stuff that's the most offensive stuff to me that he says. This is the worst thing Trump says to me. I hate how he'll be reading his speech, right? And it'll say, like, and he's looking at the teleprompter, and the economy is surging at a pace we haven't seen ever before. Ever before. And, like, he thinks by repeating the last words in a sentence that he's making himself sound like spontaneous, like he's not reading. I get so frustrated. I'm like, just stop it. Just stop doing that, man.
My favorite
it's going to be bigly.
You should really read the Woodward book. It's really good. My favorite part of it is, so apparently when Steve Bannon was called in to sit down with Trump, and Bannon was just like, there's no way this guy can win. He's totally joking, totally an idiot. And apparently he told something to Trump about being a populist, and Trump refused to call it populist. He's like, a popularist, eh? I could be a popularist. It's like, you've never voted before. Yes, I have.
But you know what's crazy? Some of that stuff kind of plays that, like, it was like W with his, like, W-isms,
Yeah.
Like, people were like, oh, it's folksy.
Yeah.
It's like a, But Trump, Trump he talked about the right issues.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that he's competent, but he talked about the right issues. And I don't understand, even if you're lying, which most politicians do, like, I don't understand why both sides didn't do that more often. Like, no one talks to the working class.
It just seemed like it was going to be an easy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats screwed up. I think Bernie would have handily beat Trump. But yeah, it was just like they knew. Like, they were like, well, she's going to be coronated. They knew, like, the moment Obama won his second term, they were like, well, it'll be Hillary next time.
Yeah.
And then that's how they acted. And it's a huge mistake. Now, we'll see what happens in 2020. I mean, but, no, I would argue that Trump's got some, like, it's so crazy that Trump has accomplished what he has.
His hardest problem going into 2020 is trying to get the moderates and the women turnout to be as high as last time.
Right.
Which, I don't know if he's done himself any favors in that category.
But the problem is, like, all of our cultural institutions are very left-wing. Yeah. Like, they're all Democrat. Like, every single one.
Yeah.
The mainstream media, majoritarily. Yeah. Academia, majoritarily.
Because they're mostly social institutions that care about, like, people-first approaches.
Hollywood?
Hollywood is...
Athletes?
Hollywood is strange.
Music industry?
Athletes, I understand. Hollywood is strange.
But they're all... It's all homogenous, right?
Yeah.
And we could agree that there are... It's not that... See, you're a very reasonable person, but I think you somehow keep slipping in, like, you'll be like, oh, one side cares about people and the other doesn't. It's not that. It's not that at all.
Well, no, I don't think Republicans don't care about people. I just think that, like, the approaches are always just kind of like, people will survive. They'll do fine.
Oh, no, I disagree. I think I articulate it better than that. I think that, sort of. But no, like, the problem is, like, we would say in any, you know, the same people that will say, like, well, it's a problem if you have a bunch of men in STEM.
Yeah.
Don't have a problem where it's like, oh, but ideology-wise, it's no problem if all these cultural institutions are dominated by the left. Which it's fine, it is, but I'm just saying, it's no wonder then when everyone's like, Trump's a fascist, Trump's a racist, Trump's an evil person, Trump doesn't do anything right, Trump eats 2 scoops of ice cream, Trump fed the fish wrong. Like, imagine if you had a media that was closer to 50-50 or a cultural institutions that were closer to 50-50. Like, the number, so, like, he has a huge uphill climb. Yeah. But that's also true of Bernie. That's true of Jill Stein. You know what I mean?
Obama had a huge uphill climb.
No. Obama was a darling of all those institutions.
Not really.
Yeah. Which one?
He was
Hollywood?
just an unknown senator for most of the original election
very
campaign.
charismatic.
Everyone thought Hillary was going to beat him for the longest time.
Well, the primary, but definitely in the general.
Yeah, the general was
fine.
It
wasn't like Hollywood was like, John McCain! Like, no. But
no, I don't know. John McCain got a lot of, like, media coverage and political clout. He really just lost because he picked Sarah Palin to be like, I need a wild card.
The media, it was Democrat. And then McCain, like, there was more vitriol against him than you remember. It's just that he's recently died and everyone's like, what a great guy. But back then it wasn't like that, you know? But
Mitt Romney made it a pretty close run too against Obama.
Yeah, but I mean, for God's sakes, the coverage against Mitt Romney,
good.
Romney.
Romney said a bunch of dumb things like I got binders full of women.
Yeah, but that's because like he was being accused of being like a racist and a sexist, and it's like, no.
But if that's your response, like,
strategically
that
strategically good, but morally, it's like, see, here we go again. We're not talking about issues; we're just labeling insults. But
because it seems like the easiest way to beat the Republicans to be like, are you a racist?
Because they control.
No, but
because they're stupid. They're stupid. That's why I'll be president someday, because I know how to address that. I have a black friend. What the hell's wrong with these people? It is. You're absolutely right, though. And I say the same thing. What should happen is they should, like, the Republicans should hire you and the Democrats should hire me to be like, dude, here's what you're doing wrong. You know what I mean?
All you're gonna do is talk about legalizing weed.
Yeah, and I look for Trump to do it. I really do.
No way, dude. That's my policy.
But dude, just as a Hail Mary, if nothing else, you know what I mean?
That's how you get everyone back on your team.
Dude, Mueller could come out and be like, dude, we have a video of him meeting with Putin, like, yes, Mr. Putin. Still Hillary's emails, and I'll do whatever you want. And Trump could come out like 10 minutes later and be like, hey, we're legalizing weed. And people would be like, yeah. Like, you know, there would be a group of people like, all right. I'll hear this guy out. They're not going to vote. They're going to be high, but, you know. Yeah, I think that's I don't know why Trump, that was my favorite, like, joke about the Trump. That's the biggest criticism I have about Trump's the Syria stuff. And the debt. Why in the hell does he get away with this? Like, I listen to people that are on my side, like, Obama's exploding the debt. You know, the only reason we're having even the minuscule gains we are in the economy is because Obama's spending all this money we don't have. Then Trump comes in, hey, the economy's doing great. Yeah, but he's spending more money than Obama did. You know what I mean? It's like, dude, just be consistent. I hate this idea of people that are afraid to criticize people on their side. I feel even more of an obligation because I'm like, I kind of feel responsible because for the first time in my lifetime, the guy I voted for won. So I feel like now I got to be like, ooh, don't do that, you know? But the other thing that he did that's the worst is like, you know, and it's hilarious because he's like, I only pick the best people. It's like every person he picks sucks.
They've quit.
Sucks. Well, they either quit or they're
no one working in Washington
worst,
right now because there's no one appointed.
Jeff Sessions, like, now that he's not there, I feel like he's probably wearing a mask and cape and personally beating up weed dealers, you know? Like, what is this guy doing? That's your big issue in 2016? Yeah, but these pot-smoking kids. We'll get them, you know.
What about heroin? Oh, that's Kushner's handling that.
Heroin? I just eat these pain pills for my bad back every day. Well, I don't know nothing about
that, and all of his, like, putting in vodka on his fucking
nepotism, right? I agree. That was Jared Kushner. Yeah. Really? He was the most
you
qualified?
Get these two out of
he may even be qualified, but it's like, one, you know it's the appearance of nepotism. Yeah. And second, you can't tell me out of everyone he was the most qualified. No. Yeah, it's terrible. I agree. And that's what gets me about, like, I don't understand the Democrats and the way they go after Trump. It's like, dude, it's so easy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's tons of, like, policy stuff. Yeah, and, like, when he comes out and he says something stupid, like, let me tell you who's done something really smart like I would have done recently. Do you know who Dan Crenshaw is? He was the guy that ran that has an eye patch. He's a Republican.
Yeah.
and then the guy in SNL made fun of him. First off, I didn't think it was a huge deal that the guy in SNL made fun of him. I'm sick and... This is my biggest gripe.
It's a satire.
Dude, my biggest gripe with the right is, I was with them when, like, you had, like, they'll say snowflakes or social justice warrior getting upset about comedy and blah, blah, blah.
You can't be an individual without being a snowflake.
Well, yeah. But, like, I was with them, right? Like, all this, like, you know, PC, no comedy. Like, just this guy from SNL got booted out of, like, Columbia the other day for making a joke. It's just, I'm with the Republicans, like, yeah. And then as soon as Trump gets in and people start picking on him, they're like, whoa, you can't make jokes about that. And I'm like, what? Kathy Griffin, she had a picture of his severed head. So what? It was a joke. I didn't think it was funny. It was just a joke. If you don't like it, turn the page.
Also, Alec Baldwin impersonations of Trump are pure comedic gold.
I don't think that he does a good job. And it was funny at first. But the problem I have with all of that stuff is not that it's offensive. It's not funny, most of it. Because it's, like, to me, comedy's dangerous. Like, Lenny Bruce or Bill Hicks or George Carlin were funny because they were counterculture. Yeah. So it's, like, the safest thing in the world to come out now and be like, yeah, Trump sucks. Because that's what everyone in culture is doing. It would actually be dangerous to come out and be like, I think Trump's the man. Though I don't want to see that either from my comedy.
Kanye West?
Well, yeah, right? That's kind of it, right? Which, by the way, we'll talk about Kanye later. A friend of ours who we're going to visit tomorrow actually got me into Kanye like 3-4 years ago. He's actually decent. I like a lot of his. I still think I put Lil Wayne ahead of him. But anyways.
No, old Kanye is better than new Kanye.
Oh, there is one other funny thing I wanted to ask you after this. But, yeah, so, like, that with Trump, it's like they focus on all this stupid stuff, and it's like there's so much, right? Because the idea is, if you're a Democrat, right, your base hates Trump. Yeah. Or we were talking about comedy, right? Like
you literally can put up anyone, and
right, your base hates Trump, right? So you're trying to focus on moderate people, right? Particularly people that maybe lean to the right, right? And so one of the things, why aren't they out there every day like, dude, this guy blew up the debt. Remember the Tea Party? That was like your big issue? This guy did it worse than Obama. Yeah. Right? Like, why aren't you saying it? Instead, what you do is, like, and it's not everyone, but you see a lot of people are just like, well, Trump supporters they all defend racism, or they're all deplorable, or whatever. Or if they're not saying that, they're leading to saying that. And so it's like I knew someone
I would just do something more reasonable. Be like, Trump used to sell steaks. He had a fake university.
I had a friend.
He defaults on his payments to workers.
I had a friend once, right, who had a girlfriend that everyone realized wasn't good for them. And so everyone was like, we're going to tell that friend. It's people you know, but we're going to tell this friend, right? And so you know what happened when they told that friend? They backed their girlfriend even more because you put them in a corner, right? That's like how I feel like with how people, like the Democrats are going after Trump supporters. I would be out there every day like, no, we totally get it. We should have been talking about workers. You're absolutely right. Yeah. But we don't think this guy's doing a good job for you. So we're back to, like, we understand we made a mistake, but we are, like, instead it's like, I mean, it's like they are each side's intentionally making the dumbest possible argument over and over. Like I said, Trump will come out and say something that's just not true. And then the left has him dead to rights, and they're like, yeah, that's not true. And also other things aren't true. And you're like, just stick to the thing that wasn't true. Okay, we're done talking about, this is the last thing I have. Okay. What is your policy, and this is something I've been thinking of is it okay to like art and entertainment that have done by people that we now know are pretty heinous? So, like, first it started with, like, everyone in...
I have a good story about this. When I was in my master's, I was in this documentary film class, and we came across this question, and it was a really quiet class, no one ever talked, because they were, like, a bunch of filmmakers. Like, they didn't want to discuss the theory
they're behind camera, not in front of it, for a reason.
And so it was what was the famous Leni Riefenstahl? The famous German World War II filmmaker for the Nazi Party.
Oh, okay, yeah. I don't know his name, but I know who you're talking.
The professor was, like, trying to get the class to talk for, like, the longest time. And they were like, no, we like art. Yeah, we should always just listen to art. So I just sat there for a second. I'm like, I'm so bored. And I had to watch this old German flick that everyone wanted to talk about camera angles. So I just sat there, and I'm like, you know what? Let's do this.
Yeah, right.
Just raised the hand. I'm like, we should burn it all. The room got so angry and yelled at me for like 2 hours.
Yeah,
it was pretty over the top.
It started with me with, like, because we were talking about culture. Like, I went through this phase where it's like, I ain't gonna watch this person's movies because they're rabidly anti-Republican, so screw them. Or, like, the best example to start with would be, like, Tom Cruise. When he, like, became an obvious crazy Scientologist, so it's like, I can, but then I ultimately realized, like, Well, I can't do that or I'll never watch anything, so I just separate.
I tend to not care what actors do, or directors for the most part, because I don't care about them as political figures. I care about the work that they do. I think if you committed, like, a monstrosity, like you murdered people, I think that breaches the line.
Really? So, like, okay, so, not murder, but have you ever watched Usual Suspects?
No.
It's one of the greatest movies ever. Kevin Spacey? Am I allowed to like Kevin Spacey movie now? Since he's been credibly accused of sexually assaulting people?
I don't really ever watch Kevin Spacey things.
Or, like, am I still allowed to like The Cosby Show? How about Harvey Weinstein movies?
I would say no to Cosby. No to
so
Kevin
funny.
Spacey.
Cosby's so funny.
No to...
See, I take
yes, the Harvey Weinstein movies, because just because he produced it doesn't mean he had a hand in the creation of the movie.
Well... That's a weird nitpick, but okay, fair enough. But I don't know. I kind of lean towards yes. The reason I bring it up is this. So I live above the bar down here, and they're doing karaoke in a couple nights next week, I think. And I really somehow this song became really popular around here. R. Kelly remixed to Ignition.
Oh no!
I want to do that,
Fresh out
but
the
then
kitchen,
like people are like,
oh
wait a minute. He's like been accused of like basically having sexual. Yeah. So I'm like, I don't know what my ethical obligation is at karaoke night. I don't really care about.
So my feeling is this: if someone was recording me, I would say no, you cannot do it. If someone is.
Yeah, it's a really bad idea.
It's like Murder, She Wrote, once I get you out the clothes.
Yeah.
No, I think it's okay as long as you just acknowledge that it's a bad person, so whatever.
And I don't even know that he is. See, that's the problem. Like, one of the things we get into, like, until it's adjudicated in court, even Weinstein, now there's stuff coming out that, like, at least with some of the victims, there was, like, an email chain that these cops tried to bury because it's basically them saying, like, yeah, you know, I slept with him for this role and blah, 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 which doesn't necessarily exonerate Weinstein, but the fact that the police tried to hide that evidence, now he's going to probably get off on at least that particular charge because the police acted inappropriate. So it's like, it's difficult, like, it's easy to, and I have other stories about this after the cameras, but, like, it's easy to just be like, oh, yeah, like, Weinstein, it seems pretty like, Cosby, definitely, he's been found guilty, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. But, like, you know, Kevin Spacey, I don't know. It seems like a credible accusation, but, you know, am I supposed to... I don't know. And so for my part, it's just like, I could just enjoy entertainment and be like, eh.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what would I do? Like, you know, God forbid, like, Chevy Chase get accused. Am I not going to watch Caddyshack? No, I'm still going to watch Caddyshack, you know?
Chevy Chase is a national treasure, Dan.
Yeah. Danger. That's why you're just like waiting for the clock to run out. And you please die
you
before
accusations.
Before some sort of accusation, would everyone in Caddyshack please die already? You know, Dangerfield already kicked the bucket. He made it out without being accused. He's good. But all right, well, that sounds good to me.
Good ones? Let's see
I mean, I don't know. Did you have anything you wanted to tell me? Let's see.
Greedy fanatic, tech censorship. Who's censoring technology?
Well, like, we kind of talked about that a little.
Oh, it's the right thinking no one listens to them, even though they talk a lot on social media?
Well, that's clear that... No, it's not just that. That's
okay. Gun control. We need to control guns more. Random people shouldn't buy it. The gun show loophole should be closed. And there should be higher regulations over who can get access to weapons. Or at least as much regulation over who can get access to weapons as who can drive cars, because they're functionally the same thing. Economy, I think it's doing better. I think unemployment's pretty low. I hope that trend continues.
That's what I'm talking about. I kind of disagree with you. I think that the economy is doing good now, and but I can see the writing on the wall. So, I mean, we're going to have another banking crisis.
Well, I think even a bigger crisis is we're going to have workers needing to translate their skills into a high-tech economy within the next 10 years whenever trucking is gone. And then...
Yeah, but believe it or not, I don't think that's as big of a problem as you think. Because
25% of the U.S. workforce works in trucking-related activities.
Yeah, but look... This has happened, maybe not at numbers that big, but that's happened a lot throughout time. Like, we've had industries we totally replaced like that. Like, when the automobile industry came in.
Yeah, but, like, that's a large group.
Yeah, but I think that people will transition into things. Okay. But, yeah, it's certainly, unlike automation as well, right? Like, that's, I mean, that's a problem with it. But, like, for me, the problem with the economy is I still don't see, like, the only guy I ever talked about it sufficiently was Ron Paul. As long as we have a Federal Reserve System, these boom busts are going to continue to occur. Yeah. It is... Like, here's another pet peeve like, half the people that watch this, that I'm usually, like, right-wing, are probably like, what's this guy doing? He's saying all this left-wing garbage. But, like, here's another huge pet peeve I have with people on the right, like you have people complain about welfare. They don't complain about corporate welfare. And like having 0% interest rates and the Federal Reserve printing money, that's like the biggest corporate welfare it is. Because what happens is we give all these wealthy people interest-free money, basically. Yeah. And if you gave me $100 million right now and said, hey, it's interest-free, you just have to give it back in a month, I could literally just put it in the bank and live off that interest, right? It's like, and then I'd feel like, oh, I made money with the investments. Well, of course, that's the way. And so what happens is
smart business,
right?
Man.
What happens is then the dollar gets devalued for the people at the bottom end, and because it's not cut and dry as that poor person got money from the government. It's harder to understand. It's like, no, you're still getting screwed by people that have no business getting handouts from the government. Way less more. So I think it's terrible that Trump does. Trump's actually going the opposite way. He's like yelling about the Fed's raising rates, right? When the raising rates is good for savers but bad for borrowers, but that's not what Wall Street wants to see. Yeah. So he's like, oh, what's up with the Fed raising rates? And it's like, no, rates should be raised. Yes. And yes, that does mean the stock market will go down. But as in general, one of the
the stock market up does not translate into like you or I doing okay.
That's right, and that's why it can with our 401k, but that's why Trump's
wealth is going somewhere.
Right, and that's why Trump should hesitate to link himself to it because it will go down, and then he's gonna have a devil of a time when everyone are like, "Here's a video of you saying that you're responsible for the stock market." Okay, now it sucks. Now you're telling us you're not responsible. But the Dems will somehow screw that up somehow. You know what I mean? They'll somehow be like, and the stock market doesn't exist. It's like, but no, like that's one of the things. Right. But the problem, one other thing I'll talk about that's not on there, right? I think the biggest problem we have in politics is that people approach it as a job now, right? The idea with the founding fathers was most of the people that ended up being in politics had like farms and stuff, and you didn't even want to go. It was almost like serving in the military. You were like, crap, I guess I got to serve, so I'll go do this. Yeah. But you weren't making money. You were probably losing money because you weren't home running your business. Yeah. And so you did it for 4 years and then went home or whatever. Now it's like a career, which is one of the reasons I'm for like term limits. Yeah. Because what happens is like you end up in a situation where you're like, and Trump even actually like apparently, I didn't read the whole thing. I just saw the headline. But apparently he was quoted the other day saying like, I'll be long gone when this debt monstrosity.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
100%
like, you couldn't be more blatant. I mean, he's actually being honest, but that's how the politicians roll, right? They're like, as long as I get reelected, I don't care what happens once I'm out, right? And like, this is even more obvious in like state and local politics. Like Illinois they're doomed. Yeah. Like the pensions there and stuff are crazy. Like I remember reading Matt Taibbi, he used to write for Rolling Stone. Yeah. I read this book of his and he's talking about, he's like, I got these friends that like work it's kind of hedge fund operators in like Dubai and stuff. And he's like, so I get this call from my buddies in like the UAE and he's like, hey man, I got to talk to you. And he's like, so I pick up the phone like, what's up? He's like, so I just had this business investment opportunity for all my clients in the UAE. He's like, and these two people come in, they're from Pennsylvania, and they're like, we want to sell you the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And they're just like, what? And they're like, yeah, all financial rights to the Pennsylvania Turnpike for like the next 50 years. We'll sell it to you for like $1 million. Because whoever it was, Rendell or whatever at the time was like, dude, that's $10 million for me now. Who cares that I lose that revenue for the next 50 years? I'm going to only be here 2 more. And that's actually happened in Chicago. They sold all the rights to their parking meters. So you see over and over again, and it's not just a Republican or Democrat, it's everyone, right? Where it's like, how can I benefit my administration now? Yeah. Right, and so then the future, and maybe it only hurts the next person that gets that position. Yeah, the mayor does that now, and then the next mayor has to deal with it a little, but then he passes it, and then eventually everyone's passing it, and now it's a huge, and like I think that's the problem we're seeing, and term limits I think could help. Yeah. One thing could help limit it. Another thing that I don't see a lot of people talking about, I think if I run for office, and Cortez talking about this kind of illustrates the point where she's talking about how like most people getting paid, like congressional staffers only get like $14 an hour, and the cost of living in DC is crazy. Yeah, it's absurd. I think that we should have more of a focus on like basically Skyping in. As a congressperson, because one, then you get to stay around your constituents, and second, the cost of living and things like that.
Most of the congressional figures don't want to stay around their constituents.
Well, that's just it. Well, then explain that in voting time, right? Exactly. But that's just it. And I think, again, a lot of politicians
DC is the worst place.
I know.
I've been there 70 times. I hate it every time.
The cost of living's crazy. It's the only area of the world that's like that. It's a very unique. Right, and so you don't get, if you're constantly there, you don't get an idea of what's going on in your hometown or your. So I think that that it would be we should. I think that would be some things,
Antifa, violence is bad. War on drugs, that was fucking dumb. It's kind of racism that exists in the modern day to allow people to mass incarcerate black people so they can take away their rights to vote.
I don't know that.
True.
I think that you think it's. I don't know. The war on drugs is just stupid. But,
I mean, who does it affect the most is the question I would ask.
But again, that's like. Okay. Fine, we'll have this discussion. Right?
We don't even need to have this.
No, this.
Nope, I'm done.
I want to talk real quick. I'm going to say my piece. I don't care. This goes with the intersectionality thing. If you think, if you could say that law enforcement is worse for black people, right? And we could say,
I think if
what measures
you
are you going to use?
walk up to random cops, I'll most likely get someone to be a dick to me before they're a dick.
Okay, that's true, but I'm talking like the actual numbers. Like we're going to use black people just tend to get sentenced longer, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that's true.
Yeah,
and they get charged more often.
Yeah.
Basically at most levels.
Yeah.
Sentenced longer, more likely to be charged, more likely to be found guilty, right? Well, you know what the bigger discrepancy is? Men to women. Right? So like for example, the difference between white people to black people to how long the sentence would be might be like a year, but a woman to a man might be like 6 years. And they're in every case less likely to be charged, less likely to be So I don't understand then the idea of intersectionality. It's where it's like
no, it should be a lot more equal on all scales. Like you have to take the bad with the good. I agree.
Yeah,
100%.
right. And so, but that's what I'm just saying. Like, so we constantly focus on the one area, like racial. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't focus on the racial. I'm just saying, wait a minute. Here's an even bigger problem, and no one bats an eye. Yeah. No one bats an eye about the man-woman problem. It's just like, the best example is like domestic assault. If a man and a woman punch each other, you know exactly how that's ending up. You just know. Now, I kind of don't have a problem with it because
domestic assault.
No, with the idea that in that situation the man would get in trouble. But that's because
I think more people need to get off of drugs. I think us over incarcerating for weed for the most part is just a travesty.
Well, I not only agree with that. I think even for harder drugs. Unless
I'll draw the line at
violence.
I'll draw the line at like heroin and cocaine.
Yeah, but we should be focused more on rehabilitation rather than incarceration.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like I don't understand how shoving these people in with killers and rapists helps anything.
Yeah, I agree.
You just then it's and I truly believe this, and this is something that I will run on. I think that one of the most appalling thing, like I get it, I don't know enough about I think there's arguments to be had on is the war on drugs intentionally racist or is it effectually racist? I get all that, but something to me that I don't hear enough talk about that I just think's unbelievable is the conditions of the damn prisons we have in this country are totally unacceptable. I don't get it's a laughable joke hey, you're probably gonna get raped in prison. That's unbelievable to me. I agree. How we could be a first world country, and then when you look at what are most people in there for? Drug crimes? You're living in a hellhole like that.
So there's times where I'm just best nation ever. There's sometimes where we're just we are the world's worst country at some things. So
I still think the United States is the best country in the history of the world. It's like that scene in Gladiator where you've seen Gladiator, right?
Are you not the citizens?
Well, Maximus is talking to Marcus Aurelius, and he's like, basically, why do you fight, or what is Rome? Yeah. And he's like, it's the idea. It's like the shining city on the hill. That's what's great about America. It's the idea. There's tons of faults, and we also have to remember that you don't get to firsthand see the faults in other countries as much.
Fair.
You'll hear people I'll talk to people that came from other countries. I got pulled over by a cop, and they were like, "Hey man, you got to watch your." Maybe you even got a ticket, but it wasn't like they were like, "Grease our palms, or we're gonna punch you in the stomach and throw you." So
our immigration policies suck, but after hearing other people's immigration policies, it's just man, y'all are fucked up too.
Right. So I mean,
worse.
But that's one. I don't even know how. The for-profit prison system, and just as bad as it is, it's unbelievable.
There should not be for-profit prisons.
It's ridiculous. I don't even. It's become so culturally ingrained that it's a joke. Yeah. It's you're going to jail. You're gonna get raped. Probably get stabbed. You're gonna live in soap. And it's which I don't mind joking for joking's sake. I don't get me wrong. I'm not ever gonna yell at someone for joking. But it's the fact that joke makes sense is a travesty. Yeah. And we ought to do something about it. And I don't hear anyone ever talking about it.
The most people talk about it, they're remember Shawshank Redemption? Morgan Freeman?
Yeah. Or you'd hear Towson, I remember I debated them once, and they were ban all prisons. Well, I don't know that that's the answer. That's a bit much, but I actually won that round because I had a judge in the back of the room that knew me, And I was like, actually, somehow it came up that I knew people in prison. And they were like, I was like, I have family in prison. And they were like, no, you don't. And I was like, yeah, I certainly do. And the judge was like, yeah, I know Rob. I believe that he knows people. And I was like, I've spent time in jail. I spent a night in jail once. Drunk tank. That's not jail.
Drunk tank does not count.
Now, we did have other people. A former roommate of mine spent the night in jail, and his big regret is he didn't eat the breakfast in the morning. So he could never say that he had jail food. Yeah, bummer, huh?
That's a life experience.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, that's it, Yeah. So, all right, we'll shut her down. We can head down to the bar before my wife.
Anything else?
I don't think so. Let's see.
Liking artists and
oh yeah, the liking
media. Do we hate media?
Yeah. I guess debate. We could talk about debate. I had it written down.
Nope. Done.
Are you done? For real? Are you done with debate? For real?
Done with debate.
I don't know. Despite the fact that it's super crazy, insane left wing and kind of a cliquey type thing, I did learn a lot.
Yeah, no, it's good for teaching you stuff. But everything's super cliquey left wing.
I thought that here's some things I disliked about debate in general. I always thought the idea of when people you'd be in rounds and they'd be like, debate's more than a game, right? And they would give the speech, which it is, right? Yeah. You could teach you about it. But I actually heard that exact same speech when I played football. Seriously. Football's more than a game. It builds men, and it builds camaraderie, and it teaches hard work. And so I'd always kind of chuckle when you're hearing these arguments, because you're like, yeah, well, everyone says that.
Every inch. Yeah.
There are people at Scrabble tournaments this is more than a game. So it's I just always chuckle to myself. Okay, yeah, sure. I thought that was funny. And I just, in general, I find the idea of debate funny. This to me was when I started to kind of chuckle. And it's easy for me to be all the crazy critiques in the performance, but then it's me trying to talk a million mile an hour about nuclear war. That's much better.
Esoteric.
For me, it was when you had that incident, and I guess I have to be careful. But there was an incident that ended up getting put on CNN.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? And then it ended up it was ooh, that didn't do good for a lot of the programs that were involved. But then after that, there was kind of this conversation that kind of went around that was well, how can we make sure that administrators and people aren't seeing what we're doing? And I just remember thinking what other organization is sitting around I hope no one finds out what we're up to. Could you SEC football? What? There are cameras here? Shut it down. I was just oh my goodness. It was always And then as a judge after that, you'd have people that would be do you mind if we record you? It's no, I don't care. It's funny that you even have to ask that, because I might just stand up and say something insane.
Hold on. Let me fix my hair.
Yeah.
This is my good side.
So I thought that was funny. I thought, and debates, I still think very good, especially at the novice level when you first start, because you learn to think totally different, right? And there's tons, not just your personal opinions, but just how to formulate an argument. All that stuff's great. But the higher up,
and also how to look at information.
Yeah, how to research, which I'm still bad at. I think I cut 10 cards my entire time in debate.
It's impressive.
My partner could tell you more about that. But but the insanity, it's almost a lot of it was people that are so smart. It's I'll give you an example. Do you know who Abby Hoffman is? No. He was there's a movie about it. He was this big anti-war Vietnam protester. Okay. And he always accused the FBI and law enforcement of wiretapping and spying on him. Turns out he was right, weirdly enough. But he was just this big revolutionary guy. And I read this story about him once that they knew they were way into drugs.
Although,
and stuff.
To be fair, I think if once you're accused and you're a public figure that the FBI is watching you, I think it's a pretty big flag for the FBI to start watching.
Should we be watching this? I guess so. But so anyways, I read this story once that they knew they'd be sitting around and they knew, at least had suspicions that the FBI was stalking, and they're way into drugs. And they know that the FBI and all these people that are against drugs are actually interested in probably doing drugs. So they made up this story that they would talk about all the time about shoving a banana peel in your butt and how high it would get you. And so they would just be on the phone that was some good weed. Oh, what'd you think of those banana peels last night? And they're laughing at night that there was one FBI agent that was give it a go, But it's
I'm
like,
down to try one.
You're so smart, you're dumb. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, it's like,
Yeah.
and I felt like a lot of that in debate where it was like you could go in.
Well,
and
it's also an inbuilt community that doesn't function well or talk to the outside, which means it gets insular and isolated.
yeah, right.
more,
And it's kind of a metaphor for DC in
Yeah.
that sense, right? Where it's like, I'm not saying the people in DC are dumb.
Yeah.
Like, they're probably good at what they do. But, like, when you're only with each other for that long, it's hard, like, it's like Emperor has no clothes type thing. Eventually someone from the outside comes in and they're like, this is unrecognizable. Like, what is happening here? Like, you people are supposed to be, like, the smartest people with an argumentation. You're talking like auctioneers. You're you're rapping and stuff. It has nothing to do with anything. You know, you're supposed to be talking about whatever this topic is, and instead you're both just talking about two different things. I mean, yeah, it's kind of sad that it got there, but I don't know what the answer is. I mean, one of the things that's cool about debate is you could debate about the rules of debate.
Yeah.
But then it's like, you see where that ends, man. You go down that rabbit hole, and the next thing you know, you see the crazy stuff. You know, people are arguing, is it okay to smack you in the face with a pie? No! Why not? Like, that was probably before
Because
your
violence.
time. Like, that, yeah. I was like, as soon as you're physically touching me against my will, that should be the... Yeah, but I got really good evidence that says that we need to throw pies in the face of political dissidents. And you're like...
This is my evidence.
Well, yeah.
Oh, let me crack
I had a round once where they shut the lights off and they threw a chair against the wall near me and it smashed up. And they're like, yeah, next time it's coming at you. And I was like, I bet it doesn't. And they're like, see, that's threat construction. The fact that you got angry at my perceived threat. That's what we're talking about. And I was like, okay, you can make an argument, but I'm telling you, if you hit me with a chair, I'm just telling you. Like, how is that an argument? Yeah, and like, you don't want to be a situation. And then that's not even, and as bad as that stuff is, the clickiness of it was, that's just, I mean, I had people.
It's really high school.
Yeah, that's exactly what it
school,
is. You know, and it's sad, but I still think there's utility in it. I hope that it works itself out, but
for sure.
The weird thing is, as someone who's now got a master's and I actually could be a professor, like, one of my big selling points could be like, well, I work with debate, I could help with debate, but I don't know that I want to.
I think you would enjoy it. I think you like having something to complain about, so you'd totally like
that'd be the truth of it. Just complain, so. All right, well, if you don't have anything else, we'll shut this up. Play Madden or something. Cordy will be back soon.
Go Flyers.
Go Flyers. How are they doing?
Pretty poorly. They're about as bad as the Pens.
But here's
the rivalry's back at the bottom.
The Pens will make the playoffs. That's what sucks about hockey. Well, not for you because you're a Flyers fan, but as a Pens fan, I know they're making the playoffs. Yeah. So why do I even watch until the playoffs?
Yeah.
Every year it's this, like, oh, we got this really great team. Then they suck, and it's like halfway through the year, you're like, they ain't going to make the playoffs. Well, and then they'll go on a tear, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah.
Flyers are at the point where they're about to be like at the new linchpin of their dynasty. So hopefully it's actually a thing, and that the new GM doesn't F everything up. But like,
they got Shearer?
No. Hextall got fired. That was the Flyers' old GM. They brought a new guy. I forget his name already. He was Minnesota Wild's old Fletcher.
Okay.
So now everyone's just kind of like scratching their head to be like, is he gonna blow up the team?
Yeah, but like that's the best. Like in hockey, hockey's the best sport. I love it, but I've been trying to get into basketball. I just can't do it.
There's just too much for me to learn,
dude. Well,
like
it's not even. Oh yeah. You're right. But like, I just can't get around that. At least. You are 100% guaranteed to know one of it's Golden State versus someone and only two possible teams. It's just like, I don't know. Like, and even worse than that, you could live with that because you could say, well, but there were times when you knew, like in the 90s, like Dallas Cowboys probably going to be in the Super Bowl, right? Or the Red Wings at one point in hockey were always there. But at least in those sports, you kind of in baseball the same. You weren't guaranteed to not have a chance to not do anything. Like some of these, like if you're some of these franchises in the NBA, it's just like superstars are just like, nah, I don't want to be in Minnesota. Nope, good, thanks. Yeah. And that's why it's funny because to me, one of the funniest things about the NBA is like, there's almost people not on your team that are as important as the people on your team. Like, would Toronto be half as good as they were if Drake wasn't, like, a big NBA fan? He's like, yeah, Toronto's pretty cool. Come up here, man. I'm like some popular rapper. Come to Toronto.
Going to Toronto.
You know what I mean? Because half these players are going to be like, man, like DeRozan, they're going to be like, I'm good. I'm going to get good states for me, buddy. Yeah.
We stand
so you got Drake. He's like, trust me, it's not that bad, man. Come on. You know, but it's
actually, I do want to take a road trip up to Toronto at some point.
I've never been. I've been to Niagara. That's the only place I've ever been out of.
Let's do Toronto.
I would do Toronto.
Cool.
Though you have a bad track record. I don't want to get mugged.
Statistically speaking, I am unmuggable.
You're faster than me too, so as my pockets getting cut, you'll be jogging like, sucks. We'll see you later tonight. I can't believe they didn't get your passport.
I know, right? I have like a hidden component about
Would they have an interest though? I was thinking of that. Like, would they even have it? Like, even if it was blatantly there, would they take it?
Yeah, you can sell
for
passports for a lot of money. The problem is once you steal a passport, that's like a legit crime.
Well, that's what I was talking to Courtney. I was like, I think that probably ups the like, because then it's like an international.
The passport game, you're into the game.
Yeah, the local cops would probably like slap you on the wrist because you stole someone's wallet or something. But once you start taking, now you're like talking U.S. authorities might be involved in something. Yeah, that's crazy. So, all right, we're in now. We got 0 people watching, so it makes sense.
Did it.
Or does that say 8? No, 0.
We did it.
All right.
We bored.
Dude, I sit there and talk like that for myself for 3 hours.